Audiobook title, Naval Gacha System. It's time to monopolize the Seven Seas Part 05. Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk. On the other hand, Fleet Commander Ignis was holding onto the railings as various explosions enveloped them. He gritted his teeth in annoyance as their adversary had too much firepower in their grasps. Inquisitors, when will you make a move? He yelled at the dark-cloaked men, who were maintaining the shields of the Ignis's battleship. Otherwise, it would have been in the bottom of the abyssal depths with how much the Unis Trinity of Solace was bombarding it. Don't bother us right now, old man. Your shields are only keeping up because of us. Avoid confrontation with their capital ship and give us a breather. The supposedly calm blonde Inquisitor was sweating from how much they had to repair the runic shielding array. Meanwhile, as the North and Archipelago fought for dominance over their island in the south, was a lone metallic warship sailing towards a southern colony rumored to be containing over tens of thousands of slaves. The lone warship was the UNS Guardian of the High Seas, commandeered by Captain Howard. With the UNS Guardian of the High Seas was the main force of the Special Response Unit. Numbering over 1,000, these beastfolks and humans were trained by the Dragoness herself, signifying their combat potency. But it makes one wonder, where was the Dragoness? Well, the answer to that question was fairly simple. In the bow of the giant metallic warship was a figure standing against the wind. Her white hair swayed behind her back as her dark horns glimmered with black luminescence. Her black coat ruffled while her black tail stood frozen. She calmly gazed into the horizon, with golden irises gleaming in brilliance. She was the dragon of the United Navy, Laplace, the Liberator. Chapter 122. 122 State of Affairs. Inside the Fleet Admiral's office was Abraham sorting through various documents given to him by the intelligence officers from the command center. Everything within the documents were confirmed intelligence and were already summarized at their best forms. And, to say the least, reading through the bulk of them was taxing, even with the perk of recovery within Abraham's body. But nonetheless, the intelligence officers did a good job in analyzing the information sent by our intelligence. Abraham thought to himself as he took a deep breath. Then, in the following moment, his face became cold. It looks like we have attracted too much attention, he muttered, as their battles would be harder in the not-so-far future. Inquisitors, huh? They're quite troublesome. The Inquisitors sent by the sovereigns to check up the sea region of Terra and clean up its mess didn't go unnoticed by the reconnaissance and intelligence gathering of the United Navy. Their existence were also confirmed through the naval battle in the north. It should be ongoing in this very moment, he thought while sighing to himself. Allocating resources was his job, and he had failed miserably. He shouldn't have underestimated their adversaries. It was fortunate that I decided to send my battleship to the north. Otherwise, the Red Fleet alone would have a difficult time handling such troublesome opponents. Their enemies in the north was the so-called Guardian Fleet of the Colonial Dominion. It was assisted by the Inquisitors of Europa, further increasing its threat. I hoped that no more variables would emerge, otherwise I would have to forcibly call them back. He understood the problems of the United Navy retreating. It would mean that they wasted their supplies, and their reputation as liberators would be somewhat tarnished. Though, luckily for the Fleet Admiral, it wasn't all bad news for him. The forces he sent in the archipelago colony had been successful in their endeavors. The reconnaissance team of the Special Response Unit had confirmed the validity of the rebellion and were currently assisting them. On the other hand, both the UNS Lightbringer and UNS Jaeger of the Blue Seas were heading towards the heart of the colony. According to various documents, they had begun conducting strategic strikes throughout the colony. This was further aided with the drones and aircrafts on the UNS Jaeger of the Blue Seas flight deck. It looks like I wasn't wrong about that girl, a human rebel. Huh. Abraham's bad mood slowly faded as the existence of a human rebel meant that they weren't alone in their path. Some humans must have been satisfied with the current way and wanted change. They simply needed something to push them, and Abraham wanted it to be the United Navy. And there is the southern colony, he mumbled before lightly chuckling at the unfortunate fate of the colony. One must not mistake his chuckle as considering the southern colony weak. No, it was the opposite. The southern colony was an incredibly strong powerhouse of the colonial dominion. It was the slave capital where enslaved beastfolks throughout the colonial dominion get sent before getting scattered through auctions. But nonetheless, even with the impressive military power of the colony, Abraham only sent a single warship to dispatch the colony. However, what mattered wasn't the warship, but the one inside it. The Dragon of the United Navy, or so they call her personally. He calls her Laplace. Well, he didn't know why, but for some reason, he felt pride upon noticing such fact. At any rate, Laplace was the strongest individual in the United Navy. Even Abraham himself acknowledged this simple fact. It was hard to deny the capability and power of the Dragoness. So, he considered himself fortunate to have her as his lover. I guess I'll spend time with her after this is over, he quietly thought, and returned to his serious demeanor. He then got his attention pointed at the tasks he had received from Systema. These tasks were something he got during the planning of the 3 operations the moment he thought of them. Mechanical bells rang inside his mind, following with 3 digital interfaces materialized before him. Ding! Archipelago Freedom. Liberation Mission. In the archipelago consisting of a dozen islands, a colony has dominated over several tribes and are extorting them of resources while also oppressing their people as the harbinger of liberty and freedom. The United Navy must liberate the archipelago from its tyrant colony. The requirements for submission completion is the dismantlement of the archipelago colony. Reward: 2,000 naval points. Cracking Gate. Liberation Mission. M square root, right angle EM of Karelitzers and Delnaperchurknitra M. Between the port of Dawn and the colonial dominion of Terra is the Gate A fortress that stood as the shield of Terra and the symbol of its colonial might. This island fortress is standing in the way of the United Navy's liberation of the sea region. Destroy the fortress and crack the gate open for freedom to reach the doors of the colonial dominion. Requirement: complete decimation of enemy fortress. Reward: 3,000 naval points. Slave Liberty. Liberation Mission. At the bottom of the map, south of Kreskara, is the slave capital of the colonial dominion. Inside this colony are slaves, numbering in tens of thousands. It is the bane of liberty and freedom. Its unholy and evil light must be extinguished by the fires of the United Navy. Liberate the slaves and cleanse the filthiness of the colony. Total liberation of the southern colony is the requirement for completion. Reward: 2,000 naval points. These 3 naval tasks made it harder for Abraham to even think of abandoning them. After all, this was the first time such tasks with a large amount of naval points as rewards emerged to him. It was a rare opportunity. However, I can't sacrifice them for rewards. Such rewards wouldn't matter if I lost everything around me. He shook his head and expressed his true thoughts about the matter. Even though it was painful to lose a large amount of potential naval points, losing a vast amount of his men would cause him more pain. He would never forgive himself if he sent them to die for his greed. But before Abraham could continue thinking about the operations and the submissions that were given to him, an intelligence officer rushed into his office. She was heavily panting while holding a document between her pale fingers. The fleet admiral raised an eyebrow, wondering what made the intelligence officer act in such a terrible manner. "Yes, sir. Reports have come from the state of Minos," the intelligence officer uttered, causing Abraham to be astounded. He didn't expect for the state of Minos to be the subject. "Continue," Abraham calmly said. Calming the intelligence officer down, she properly tidied herself up and coolly reported to the fleet admiral as though her recent outburst hadn't happened. "Fleet admiral, the state of Minos have sent a report about an attack from the inquisitors. Fortunately, we have some of our united army forces stationed in the island. They handled the inquisitors with the anti-magus guns, but it required a lot of sacrifice. Hundreds of Minikins have died from the inquisitors, and a dozen of our men had met their end." The intelligence officer's voice, though calm, was laced with sadness. Hearing about the unexpected news, Abraham clenched his fist and gritted his teeth. Anger was brewing inside his heart, as he didn't expect for those bastards to attack the state of Minos. The fact that they killed hundreds of Minikins and dozens of his men meant that it was the failure of the United Navy. Not only that, but it was mere unnecessary casualties. The state of Minos wasn't of military importance. This meant that the inquisitors were snuffing out their traces, and sooner or later, they might infiltrate the port of Dawn and the island of Kreskara. "This is dangerous and troublesome," Abraham quietly thought before asking the intelligence officer a question. "What about their bodies?" "Luckily, their bodies have been recovered. They are mostly whole, other than obvious injuries from the Inquisitor's magical spells," the intelligence officer responded, which made Abraham a bit relieved. "Good, at least we can give them a funeral they deserve." Abraham felt his mental health deteriorating, but he needed to keep up with the others and give the Minister of Minos my condolences of the tragedy. "Affirmative, Fleet Admiral, I shall do as ordered." The intelligence officer nodded and saluted to Abraham before leaving his office. After she left, silence followed, but was soon disrupted by a curse. "Damn it! These F***tards." Abraham was enraged, deeply angered by what they had done. These bastards really don't have limits of what they could do. They don't even care whether they kill civilians or soldiers. As long as it could hurt their opponent, they would be willing to do anything. *Tisk. I hate this. He managed to calm himself down and gaze through the window. He noticed the clouds darkening, making him mutter to himself, "Even the weather is trying to tell me something. I guess I should listen." Abraham had a strange feeling of danger in his heart. This danger wasn't connected to the United Navy or the beast folks. It was entirely directed at himself. A ravenous storm is brewing. While we fight for liberty and freedom in the seas, it continues to get stronger, and it is directly above the United Navy, waiting to unleash its wrath. He watched the black clouds where lightning sometimes flashed by. "Sometimes, I wonder what price I have to pay to make such dangerous storm disappear." Chapter 123. 123 The fleet of Operation Storming Freedom. Inside the rough waters of the archipelago, two metallic warships of the United Navy sailed through its tides, with glaring authority. One warship was as sharp as a sword, while the other was a giant vessel with a flight deck on above. In their hull was their respective names, the UNS Lightbringer and the UNS Jaeger of the Blue Seas. Within the tower bridge of the Lightning carrier was its commanding officer, Rear Admiral George. He stood quietly inside the bridge, gazing forward into the seemingly endless horizon. No one knew of his thoughts other than himself, but his trance state soon ended when an intelligence officer interrupted him. George turned his gaze towards the officer, wondering what they wanted to report. "Sir, we have received reports from Flight Lightning," the intelligence officer calmly reported. Making the Rear Admiral raise an eyebrow, the Flight Lightning was a group of 6 F-35 jets. He had recently deployed them to get the United Navy an air dominance over the airspace of the colony. "Continue," Rear Admiral George ordered the officer, who nodded in response. "Their reports are mostly about the activities of the main colony. They are currently preparing their battleships, and their shields have also been promptly activated. The Wyvern forces of the colony have been mostly wiped out due to the assault of our air force, and it seems that the enemy air forces merely consist of the Wyvern riders." The last words of the intelligence officer meant something important. With their high-technological aircrafts, maintaining air dominance over a region was practically not a problem. It was a good advantage to have, as the one that controls the airspace becomes strongest player in a war. "Good. That is a piece of good news, but their shielding capabilities will be a problem." George nodded in satisfaction, but furrowed his eyebrows as he thought about the runic shields of the colony. In simpler terms, they were extremely powerful. They might need to equip bunker busters into their F-35s to do damage to shielded targets, but it would have been better if they could destroy the shields instead. "I found their shields hard to believe when I first emerged from the light of our great fleet admiral. However, after looking at it myself, I understood why he somewhat respected our enemies despite their lower technological level," George muttered, realizing his mistake of underestimating them. "The variable of magicraft is too problematic to even dare to comprehend it. May be the reason why it's taking long for our research and development department to produce meaningful counterforce against such a variable. But just because they are shielded, it doesn't mean they are invulnerable. The fleet admiral has already demonstrated this fact, and he didn't use any bunker busters to take care of the problem," he uttered with a tinge of zeal. "Sadly, however, this strategy is something we cannot replicate." George sighed with clear disappointment, as he had high expectations of what he could in their operation. "The runic shielding of the colony is incredibly complicated. Their shields are scattered, and their locations are well hidden. It would require tons of investigation and reconnaissance to discover the position of these shields." The intelligence officer clarified the words of the Rear Admiral. "That's right. To defeat our adversaries in their so-called fortress, we have to do what is done throughout history." Rear Admiral George lamented on the unoriginality of their strategy. Nonetheless, it was something that he and Captain Lux of the UNS Lightbringer had already agreed upon. "The colony must be blockaded by our naval forces until they succumb to our pressure. Our F-35s will destroy any battleship that dares to leave the protection of their so-called runic shields," George explained as he glanced forward. The reason was simple, and the horizon was none other than the colony they planned to blockade. It was a colony with an interesting name, the archipelago colony of Eisenberg. The Rear Admiral watched the shadow of the colony in the horizon with scrutiny. It was a fairly large colony, but not large enough to be compared to the likes of the island of Creskara or the colonial dominion of Terra. Their land didn't even surpass that of the state of Minos. But the power and authority of Eisenberg didn't stem from the vast lands they had in their home island, but the quantities of islands under their domination. There was a reason why it was considered an archipelago colony. "It seems that we have arrived," he muttered under his breath, expecting a lot from the colony of Eisenberg, whether it be challenges, military power, or economic durability. George thought a lot about the archipelago colony. However, regardless of his expectations, he had a mission to complete. "It's time to dismantle the colony." This is Thunderbolt 1. Observing designated targets in the skies above Eisenberg were metallic birds piercing through the skies, revolving around the island like hawks stalking its prey. Thunderbolt 1. This is Jaeger. Naval blockade of the adversary has begun. Actual is 5 clicks away from Sierra. Following the transmission of Thunderbolt 1, was the response of the UNS Jaeger of the Blue Seas. The naval blockade of the colony had been confirmed, signifying that it was time of Phase 2 of Operation Storming Freedom to begin. Affirmative. Jaeger Lightning Flight has status confirmed of designated targets beginning Phase 2 of Operation Storming Freedom. Thunderbolt 1 then ended his transmission with Jaeger and began turning his gaze to the fortress-like city below. It was riddled with clear bubbles covered from the smoke of their recent ordnance. Lightning Flight, Phase 2 of Operation Storming Freedom has been confirmed, beginning secondary strikes to designated targets. After observing Eisenberg for a short moment, the pilot of Thunderbolt 1 reported their status to his flight team. Affirmative. Thunderbolt 1, Copy. Thunderbolt 1. Understood. Thunderbolt 1. Following the response of his flight team, the flight leader returned his attention to the colony and began turning his aircraft towards their designated targets. Their designated targets were the ports, ships, and military barracks. During their stalking moments of Eisenberg, they had already confirmed their designated targets and were merely awaiting orders. They had the privilege to bide their time, as the airspace was theirs to fly into. The wyvern force of the colony had already been wiped out in the initial assault of Operation Storming Freedom. The Lightning Flight then changed their course towards the port of Eisenberg, where dozens of battleships anchored themselves. Over 1,000 enemy personnel were preparing for the deployment of their battleships. Sadly for them, they simply didn't have enough time to do so. Opening Bunker Buster's weapon release in 321 at that moment, the large missile below the aircraft's airframe was released into the air, immediately piercing through the skies. The Bunker Buster fell from the heavens. Like an unstoppable guillotine, it sliced through the air with hammering weight before hitting the shielded port of Eisenberg. And it impacted. Bam! It smashed through the runic shielding like glass and landed directly in the port. The Bunker Buster was set in a timer, so it only took mere seconds before it happened. The port of Eisenberg became engulfed by a gleaming light with the radiance of the sun. What followed the ever-glowing brilliance was the shockwave that blasted through the wooden docks of the port of Eisenberg. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. The explosion echoed throughout the colony as it was an incredibly powerful weapon that was meant for deep and underground fortresses in the former world. The pilot of Thunderbolt 1 calmly observed the status of their target and confirmed its destruction with the effectiveness of the bunker busters strapped into the airframe of the F-35. It was finally time to start the second phase. Designated target status confirmed. Proceed with Phase 2. After reporting through the transmission, the aircrafts behind Thunderbolt 1 turned away, heading to their respective targets. Hundreds of bodies laid across the waters where the port of Eisenberg formerly stood, but the pilot didn't have much of a reaction towards it, as this was war. It wasn't the time to feel sad for his enemies, especially when it was far from over. I'll have to contact the Jaeger regarding the effectiveness of the bunker busters, the pilot thought to himself before opening communication with the Jaeger. This is Thunderbolt 1 of Lightning Flight bunker busters, has proven themselves to be effective, sending more data through the data link. He calmly reported through the transmission, and a response followed. Good job. Thunderbolt 1 intelligence data has been retrieved and will be studied by the R&D department in the Port of Dawn. The Jaeger operator praised him for gathering data in their mission. No problem, Jaeger, I'll be cutting off transmission now, the pilot uttered, and turned off his transmission. Not having satellites in this world made a lot of things complicated. Their navigational systems were not as accurate as before, but nonetheless, it was a manageable problem, and the effectiveness of their fighting capabilities weren't that much affected by the lack of satellites. Though, I do hope for the United Navy to have its satellites in the future. The pilot felt that the United Navy would be more effective with their satellites on their side. Meanwhile, somewhere in the archipelago colony was the raiding ship of the Deerfolk tribe. They sailed across the rough waters of the archipelago with a destination in mind. Their next target was a colonial armory depot of Eisenberg, situated in an island where two tribes meet. Chapter 124. 124 Raiding a colonial armory depot. In an island near the colony of Eisenberg was the colonial armory depot. It was a somewhat intriguing fortress, where most of their supplies of weapons and armors were stored. However, things were far from quiet on the ground. Eisenberg is under attack. One of the colonial navy personnel yelled out as news of their colony being assaulted by an unknown force scattered almost immediately throughout the archipelago. All personnel, prepare the defenses. The colonial commander of the armory depot ordered the anxious men immediately calm themselves and followed his orders without hesitation. Seeing his personnel working hard and preparing their defenses, the colonial commander felt somewhat satisfied, though it was difficult to continue feeling such satisfaction when bad news keep echoing inside his heart and mind. The port of Eisenberg is in tatters, and our navy are practically sunk into the depths of our shores. It seems that they plan for a naval blockade around the colony, the colonial commander thought inside his mind. The reason for the naval blockade was simple. The resources that could be expended for an island invasion was too much compared to the benefits it would bring. It made sense to use pressure and harassment to make their enemy cave in. But the troublesome issue comes in when the colonial dominion thought of their probable fate. He had little to no information towards his adversaries. Yes, they were going for a naval blockade, but what about the colonial forces outside of Eisenberg? What were their enemies planning to do with them? Because of this simple reason, the colonial dominion decided to raise their defensive alarms to its maximum level. It might not be effective, but it was better than doing nothing. After all, even if they were losing, he was still a colonial commander of Eisenberg. I do hope that no troubles would come, but I guess those animals might see the chaos as a chance. I should remind them why they were slaves to the colony. The colonial commander continued his thoughts and decided to reign in the two tribes in the island with them. These tribes were the Tigris tribe and the Leo tribe, quite problematic tribes, as despite being conquered by the colony of Eisenberg, they remained stubborn and would sometimes stage a resistance every now and then. Though, obviously, the colony of Eisenberg would be always to reign them in regardless of how much the two tribes resist. Since the colony of Eisenberg was in dire circumstances, those animals probably wouldn't hesitate in starting the rebellion. However, never did the colonial commander know the rebellion had already begun in the archipelago, and it had its eyes set into the very weapons stored inside his colonial armory depot. Somewhere in the island, a merchant ship anchored itself near the sandy beaches. It belonged to the captured merchant, and was currently commanded by Hermona, the human leader of the rebellion. Hermona stood amongst the group of young deerfolks who were armed with the weapons of the merchant ship's guards. In front of her was Mercedes, who was about to walk out from the group. But before she could do so, Hermona called out for her, wanting to know where the reconnaissance team of the Special Response Unit was going, albeit she already understood where they were actually going. After all, she knew the secretive nature of her newly acquired allies. We will be taking care of the Colonial Armory Depot. On the other hand, you will get us more allies in this cause of ours. You're confident that are the perfect one for such a task, correct? Hearing Mercedes's response, Hermona merely nodded. Good, I will be expecting more allies the moment we return. Work hard, Hermona. After all, unless you stand in the very center of the colony, announcing your freedom, things are far from over. Mercedes waved her hands and soon disappeared into the meadows of the forest. The same happened to the Minikins and beastfolks under her command, though, unexpectedly, Espada was left behind, which Hermona found somewhat shocking. Sir Espada, I thought you would be going with Miss Mercedes? Hermona questioned, unable to contain her surprise seeing her expression. The giant Minikin merely chuckled and replied, they can handle the dismantling of the Colonial Armory Depot themselves without much of a problem unless otherworldly variables emerged. On the other hand, I doubt you or your rebels can handle the hostility of their tribes in this island. Espada was totally confident with his fellow Minikins and his leader, Mercedes. They were powerful individuals even in the United Navy, especially their leader, Mercedes. Don't underestimate Mercedes too much. She might appear lean compared to other beast folks, but she packs a punch. It's like her muscles had been condensed to fit her body stature. Besides, she's amongst the most upstanding women in the United Navy. Although not as great as the two Dragoness of the fleet admiral, she still stands with him as his secretary during peacetime, Espada expounded, not caring about the information he had released. It was fairly common knowledge, and it made it clear that the relationship between humans and beastfolks inside the United Navy were deeply going well. She directly works for the fleet admiral, the big boss of the United Navy? Hermona couldn't believe what she was hearing, a beastfolk working beside a human leader. It sounded strange for the former Wyvern rider. Heh. She ironically spends more time with the fleet admiral than the other two, Espada mumbled while smirking. Though it was time to return to the present than desire for drama between the fleet admiral's women. At any rate, I'll be protecting you from troubles those beast folks could bring. So glad to be working with you, Hermona. Espada extended his hand, to which Hermona accepted him via right angle epsilon. I'll sure be safe under your protection, Sir Espada. Hermona beamed a smile while shaking his hand, causing the giant Minikin to raise his eyebrows. He had become too used with others looking at himself with respect, aloofness, or fear that he forgot the satisfying sweetness of a smile. Though it was a welcome change for the former warchief of the Minikin tribe. Meanwhile, near the outskirts of the Colonial Armory Depot, Mercedes observed the colonial guards aptly staying in their respective positions. It seems that they were combat ready, which might stem from the Storm Fleet making its move. It seems that infiltration will be difficult in the current state of the depot. Prepare for an assault. We'll strike them in two directions, Mercedes muttered before ordering her subordinates. They will be divided into two. One would handle the west while the other take care of the south. I will be striking the south and will be attracting most of their attention at that moment. The team handling the west will get in and terminate everything and everyone in their way. Am I understood? She promptly asked, making her men nod. Good. We'll immediately begin. And so, the reconnaissance team separated into two. Mercedes would be leading the main and actual assault in the south, while the others would penetrate through west. It didn't take long for the two teams to arrive in their positions. Mercedes stood amongst the bushes with several beastfolks beside her. She signaled them to prepare before starting the attack. Mercedes got out of her hiding spot and immediately took out two Desert Eagles from the holsters beside her hips. She pointed them at the nearby guard towers and shot without delay. Bang, 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 bang. With the lead of their first lieutenant, several beastfolks got out of their hiding and fired their rifles towards the colonial guards. BBRRTT. Bang, bang, bang. Gunfire echoed throughout the southern wall of the Colonial Armory Depot. Alarm bells rang in the entirety of the depot, bringing the attention of every colonial guards in the vicinity. "We are under attack. They are targeting our southern defenses." A colonial guard yelled out, making the colonial commander understand their situation. "Reinforce the south and make sure they don't pierce through." The colonial commander ordered his men as their defenses must not fall and get penetrated by enemy forces, otherwise the colonial armory depot of Eisenberg would be doomed. The colonial guards followed his orders without any delay and reinforced the southern wall. Mercedes kept firing at the colonial guards, who were growing in numbers. Arrows pierced through the air, though the wolf beastfolk dodged them with ease. Bang, 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 bang. She didn't hesitate to retaliate while signaling her men to take out their anti-armor weapon, an old Soviet-era weapon produced by the United Navy for its ease of production, the RPG-7. Some of her men took out their respective RPGs and pointed them towards the southern wall of the colonial armory depot. After preparing themselves and aiming properly towards their targets, they didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Whoosh, whyish, woo. Rockets propelled themselves through the air and directly impacted the walls before them. What followed were the expected deafening blasts that resounded throughout the southern part of the depot. Boom, boom, boom. With the concentrated fire of the RPG-7, a hole was made in the southern wall of the colonial armory depot. And sadly, their bad news didn't end there. As the colonial commander heard of the southern wall getting blasted by explosions, an anxious colonial guard reported spine-chilling news. "Yes, sir. The western wall has fallen. An unknown group of beastfolks have infiltrated and terminated every colonial guard in the west. I was barely able to survive and report the situation." It was at this moment that the colonial commander realized they had already lost. Chapter 125. 125 Stubborn Tribes. Tigris Tribe. Somewhere in the vast archipelago was an island where two stubborn tribes meet. It was also the island of the colonial armory depot. Uttering its significance to the colony of Eisenberg, the two tribes were the Tigris tribe and the Leo tribe. The Tigris tribe was a tribal society only consisting of tiger beast folks. They were furry ones with orange and black stripes, known for being exceptionally durable and strong hunters. The Tigris were a particular strange kind of beast folks, as they were severely interested in dominating others with their exceptional capabilities. On the other hand, there was the Leo tribe, another tribal society of the island primarily comprising of lion beast folks. The Leo tribe had an even stranger society, even when compared with the Tigris tribe. It was because of their polygamous nature that creates factions of harems. Throughout the tribe, the male beast folks of Leo were known to be extremely strong in comparison to the Tigris, while their female was numerable, rivaling the numbers of male and female tiger beast folks. These two societies were, as said before, incredibly stubborn. A resistance from them was unexpected even for the colonist of Eisenberg, which creates a question. How does the human leader of the rebellion plan to recruit both tribes into her cost? Well, that was for her to struggle and answer. After all, she was the first rebel whose human that actually led an attack against the colony of Eisenberg. Walking towards the habitat of the Tigris tribe were the group of rebels and their bodyguard, the giant Minikin Espada with him on their side. It gave them a feeling as though they were children being protected by their father. Though they didn't mind the peculiar feeling. After all, Espada was very strong in their eyes. As Hermona walked through the evergreen shrubs and rustling bushes, she noticed a couple of structures in the distance, signaling their arrival on the tribe. But before she could take a step forward, she felt a large hand on her shoulder. "What are you planning to do, Hermona?" Espada questioned with raised eyebrows. After all, she hadn't told him of her plan regarding the recruitment of the Tigris tribe. Hermona slowly turned her head towards the giant Minikin. Making her gaze upward, she raised her knuckle with a confident smirk and answered his inquiry, "Freedom." Her determined expression and confident stature merely made the giant Minikin frown before softly tapping her head, though. Such a tap was enough to rock her brain cells. "That's a bad idea, Hermona. Reality is far from such simple ideas. They need to know what they would be able to get from the freedom you are giving." Espada wasn't as intelligent as the others, but he wasn't dumb. He was a war chief of a defeated tribe. Before joining the United Navy, he had his fair share of thoughts in regards to freedom. "I see what you mean, Espada, but I don't know much about what I can give to them for their participation in the rebellion." Hermona wasn't as politically inclined person compared to Espada. "You can say anything you want. The actualities of what they can do after the rebellion can be negotiated afterward," Espada suggested, causing the Wyvern Rider to raise an eyebrow. "Wouldn't that mean that I'll be lying to them?" Hermona didn't want to lead a rebellion against tyrants shrouded with lies. "Make it as cloudy as possible. Don't promise them anything. That's the only thing you need to do, Hermona," Espada calmly advised the young lady, who could nod in agreement. It didn't take long before they arrived in the entrance of the Tigris tribe. It brimmed with over a dozen of buff tiger guards, defending the tribe from any types of intruders. The moment the guards took notice of Espada and Hermona, they swiftly aimed their spears towards the two, and the rebels behind them, their eyes were filled with scrutiny as one questioned, "Who are you, and what are you doing in front of our tribe?" As he yelled out, many more guards surrounded them. The dozen became 100 in mere moments. How the hell do they have many armed guards? Hermona quietly thought to herself as she was shocked by the number of tiger guards surrounding them. However, she quickly shook her head and calmed her anxious heart. She needed to negotiate with the Tigress tribe so that the rebel forces could grow even further. The colony of Eisenberg is in chaos. Their forces are scattered and in disarray. I am leading a rebellion so that freedom could be taken from the tyrants that conquered them. Hermona expounded to the surrounding tiger guards, who tilted their head in confusion after hearing her words. Espada sighed and stepped forward. "We are part of the rebelling forces situation in an island far from here. We have begun our rebellion and are gathering forces to attain our awaiting freedom for all Upsilon. She is our leader, and we want you to join us in our crusade for liberation." The moment Espada took over, the Tigress finally understood why these group of strange visitors had emerged before their tribe. Though they were suspicious, after all, the leader of the so-called rebellion was none other than a human girl. How? A human who was also their tyrant became the rebel leader? It doesn't make sense for the Tigress tribe. How could you be led by a human girl? Why is she a part of your rebellion when she's a part of them? Our tyrants. One of the guards cried out with his anger boiling into his heart. It was as though they were getting mocked. "Calm yourself. I'll be talking from now on." Before Hermona or Espada could answer, a deep and cold voice resounded from the Tigress tribe. The surrounding guards opened up, revealing a fully armored Tigress. "So, these are the rebels. I was expecting stronger visitors," the chief of the Tigress tribe remarked while observing Hermona and her group with a scrutinizing gaze. "There's a reason why she's the leader of the rebellion, Kitty." Espada stepped forward with a cold gaze and uttered, "She had done something none of you have ever done. In the Deerfolk tribe, she burned a colonial envoy and his ship into the bottom of the seas. It is the greatest crime slaves like you could ever do to the colony. As such, despite being a human, she is the spark of the rebellion, the first trigger." Hearing that the human girl before him killed a colonial envoy and burned his ship into the abyssal depths of the sea made the Tigress chief furrow his eyebrows. Killing a colonial envoy and burning his ship to the abyss is impressive, to say the least, the Tigress chief expressed, as it was something he couldn't do in fear of what could happen afterward. The Tigress tribe might cease to exist, so killing a colonial envoy was an act that he could respect. "What is your name, girl?" the chief questioned Hermona, who coolly answered, "I am Hermona, and I want you to join our rebellion. I believe you can benefit from it as well." When the Tigress chief heard the word benefit from the mouth of a human, he was in a state of disbelief. However, he calmed himself down, understanding the differences between each one. In his eyes, Hermona was merely the black tiger of humanity. But being a black tiger wasn't bad. It made things interesting, though he does wonder what kind of benefits his tribe could gain from the benefits. "Please tell," he said to the human girl, who merely nodded and continued, "First of all, you wouldn't have to deal with colonial envoys. Second, no need for any offerings or gifts. And finally, you will be free from tyranny." The Tigress chief listened carefully to what Hermona had to say and could only chuckle after hearing it. "Interesting words, Hermona girl. Excellent job. I am intrigued by your rebellion. The Tigress tribe will be willing to participate in your rebellion. I will be expecting for you to honor your words after this rebellion of ours. Hermona girl, it would be disappointing to see you as our new tyrant," the Tigress chief remarked while chuckling. "As if I'll become someone like them. Though I'd like to warn you about one simple thing. The moment you start enslaving others, we will be fighting to take you down." Hermona responded with determination. "All right, I'll keep that in mind." The Tigress chief nodded in understanding, though before he could continue discussing with the rebel leader, an explosion resounded throughout the island. Boom. The Tigress guards felt their bodies tensed as they could feel the power of the explosion. The chief was also surprised by the unexpected explosion, but what made him more astounded was the words of Hermona. "Looks like Miss Mercedes is giving them the trouble they deserve," she remarked, to which Espada chuckled. "She's giving them more trouble than they could ever wish for. It appears that your friend is the one causing problems to the depot." The Tigress chief expressed his curiosity, which was satiated with Espada's following words, "She's working hard to get you better weapons. At any rate, Espada, should we head to our next destination?" Hermona beamed a smile to the somewhat aloof giant Minikin. "Our job here is done, so let's go." Espada nodded in agreement. As their mission in the Tigress tribe had been completed, it was time to recruit the Leo tribe, which would be more complicated than the Tigress tribe. Chapter 126, 126 Stubborn Tribes. Leo tribe. Following the thunderous explosion in the colonial armory depot, Its blasts resounded throughout the island, bringing about the attention of everyone and everything on top of the ground, and most of the attention came from the tribe, who was ignorant of it all. In the southern part of the island was the habitat of the Leo tribe, a patriarchal society consisting of various harems and so few men. Because of the rarity of men in the Leo tribe, the male Leos have been protected heavily by the females. Though that doesn't mean that they were weak, no. Instead, it was the opposite. The male Leos of the tribe were considered the most strongest beastfolk in the island. Their physical properties and intellect weren't to be underestimated. Chief Leonidas. An explosion blasted from the colonial armory depot. A female Leo guard reported the circumstance outside to her chief. She was also a part of his harem, the 45th wife. She gazed at the beastfolk before her, who was a lot bigger and brawnier than anyone she had ever seen. Even other male Leos in the tribe couldn't compare to him. It seems that people are attacking the depot, Leonidas muttered to himself, to which the Leo guard clearly heard. She furrowed her eyebrows and remarked, "It must be the tigress attacking them." She wondered if they needed to do something after all. It was the first for the tigress to orchestrate such a deafening attack. No, I doubt that it would be those tigress after all. While they are dumber than us, they aren't foolish enough to fight against a superior enemy. Leonidas expressed his doubts, which wasn't unfounded. The reason why the tigress tribe had survived was through its tact. They knew when to fight, and that time wasn't now unless something happened to the colony, which Leonidas highly doubted. The colonial dominion of Terra had stood hundreds of years. It was akin to an untippable pillar after all. It was the entrance of Europa into the Ferris Sea. For it to be defeated, other colonial dominions must be fought back into Europa. Otherwise, they had no chance. This was Leonidas's thoughts about the matter, but sadly, he was wrong. Somewhere in the sea region of Terra was the island of Creskara, where the port of Dawn dwelled, birthplace of the naval organization, the United Navy. Then, who are the ones attacking the armory depot of the colony, Chief Leonidas? The female Leo guard questioned. Making the chief smile, he looked at her and calmly replied, "It looks like we now have visitors in our island." Leonidas was confident that the one fighting against the depot of the island were outsiders. These people weren't part of the Tigress or Leo tribe. Are they pirates? It was natural to arrive such a conclusion in their eyes. The only ones who fought against other colonists were human pirates or raiders. But Leonidas highly doubted the idea. Even human pirates weren't dumb enough to raid fortresses of the colony, so this would signify that the ones attacking the armory depot were opposing forces of the colony. However, Leonidas hadn't heard of any opposing forces of humanity, though. There were some rumors about heretics called the United Navy. It was never confirmed. They might be, or they might be something else nonetheless. We have no need to pay any of them. He'd simply increase the defensive perimeter of the village. I don't want us attacked. Unprepared, Leonidas ordered his 45th wife, who nodded in understanding. "I shall do so, my dear." The female Leo guard swiftly left the chieftain hut of the village, intending to follow her chief's orders. On the other hand, Leonidas looked onward with thought surging inside his head. The tides and winds of destiny were changing into a direction far from expecting. He didn't know if it was a good thing or not, but he hoped that his tribe would be able to survive through it. Liberation, freedom, and dreams don't matter when compared to long-term survival. Leonidas mumbled his ironclad beliefs. Because of how mighty the colonial dominion was, he had become accustomed to their reality. In his eyes, liberation, freedom, and dreams weren't something important. Instead, what should be treasured was survival. He wasn't wrong per se, but surviving and living were different from one another. To live was to be free, liberated, and have dreams. Though expectations was always far from reality. Nearby the Leo tribe was the group of rebels, their bodyguard, and their newly accompanying companion, chief of the Tigress tribe, Tora. They were walking towards their next destination, the Leo tribe's square root right angle Zyroyan. "Sir Tora, you didn't have to come with us," Hermona remarked as she didn't expect the Tigress chief to follow them. Hearing her words, Tora merely grinned and responded, "Don't mind me that much, Hermona girl. Besides, I will be vouching your words, as the Leo tribe are known to be more stubborn than us." He isn't wrong. Leos are usually the prideful of the bunch. They have a hard time listening to others outside of their tribe, Espada said while standing beside Hermona. "Oh, you already met a Leo, Sir Espada?" Hermona was somewhat surprised since she knew that Espada was mostly ignorant of other beastfolk tribes. He didn't have time to learn about other tribes when he spent his time thinking about the fate of his own tribe. "I have seen and talked with one, a male. At that, he was a rare slave, even to the colonists. After all, for Leos, their males were the future of their tribe. Without a male, the genetic biodiversity of their tribe would be harder to spread and scatter. The more males they had, the better it would be," Espada explained, which Tora snickered on. After all, the giant Minikin wasn't wrong about his words. "That's what you would expect from a tribe who rises through harems," Tora remarked, as the problem of maintaining genetic diversity hadn't ever emerged in his tribe. Only the Leo tribe deeply scrutinized the flings of their tribe members. Well, it's not like I disagree with your words, Espada remarked, but continued, though. It's not like they could help it. Males in the Leo tribe rarely ever get born. That is why they keep breeding as long as they have a chance after. A male heir is a must to them. Stop. We aren't here to discuss about the relationships of that tribe. I hope you would stop talking about the strange society. Sir Espada, Hermona expressed while shaking her hands towards the two beast folks. Espada and Tora looked at the human lady before them and merely nodded. After all, they had accepted her as the rebel leader. If she didn't want to hear more about their discussion, then so be it. Understood, Miss Hermona. All right, Hermona girl. The group continued to walk through the dirt pathway and took a few minutes before they arrived before the entrance of their destination. The Leo tribe didn't look that much different from the Tigris tribe. The only clear difference was that the Leo tribe had more huts in their village. This signified their larger population in comparison to the Tigris tribe. And just like before, Hermona and her group were immediately surrounded by the guards of the tribe though. Surprisingly, most of the guards were female Leos though. Despite being females, they seemed more ferocious than the Tigris. Who are you? And what are you doing in front of our village? A young female Leo yelled out to the two group. Hermona was about to speak, but the two men beside her took a step forward. The giant Minikin, Espada, coldly gazed at the female guards. On the other hand, the Tigris chief, Tora, merely grinned at the female Leos before him. The two made the situation tense, until Espada finally opened his mouth. Bring your chief forward, we want to talk. His words resounded throughout the entrance of the Leo tribe. Tora smirked and remarked, "Oh, my, how threatening. I like that part of you, Sir Espada." Espada raised an eyebrow and expressed his true thoughts. "I have no interests in that. It was better to break the bridge than let it unexpectedly foster." He, Tora chuckled. While Hermona took a step back from the Tigris chief, the guy was freakier than she had previously thought. "Okay, stay here, I'll call my husband," one of the female Leos uttered to the group before returning back to the village. It didn't take long before a large male Leo emerged in the entrance of the tribe. He was almost at the height of Espada, which was impressive in itself. "What may I help you with, visitors?" Leonidas questioned with raised eyebrows. After all, he hadn't expected for visitors to appear in front of his village. Not only that, a familiar guy was with them, making him furrow his raised eyebrows. "Tora, what have brought you here?" He uttered another question, to which Tora calmly replied, "I'm here to vouch the words of my dear rebel leader." He did so, while bowing towards Hermona. Hermona took a step back, surprised by Tora's unexpected actions though. She toughened herself up and turned her gaze towards the large male Leo. She then began explaining the mission of the rebellion and its final goal. She uttered what they could expect after victory was gained, and finally remarked her warnings. During the entire time, Leonidas observed the female human with scrutiny, although it was hard to believe her words. The fact that the Tigris chief ironically vouched for her meant that there was truth in her words. "I understand what you were trying to say, but I have my own thoughts about your rebellion." Chapter 127. 127. The Fall of the Colonial Armory Depot. In the confines of the Colonial Armory Depot's fortress, gunfire resounded along with the cries and roars of the colonial guards. Fighting for their lives, they were getting besieged by a powerful force that practically divided the entirety of the colonial dominion in mere moments. "Continue defending the corridors." The colonial commander yelled out to his men, who were exhausted. Fighting and retreating didn't do good for the bodies of the colonial guards. Not only that, their morale was also at its lowest. After all, they were pushed to the brink by the outsiders invading the island. "Sir, the outer defenses has fallen. We are the only ones left in the Armory Depot," one of the colonial guards reported, causing most to grunt in horror. Their numbers weren't to be underestimated, yet they were exterminated without difficulties and mercy. "How can we defend this place? We're probably going to die," a colonial guard expressed with despair. Many of the guards couldn't utter words against him, as it was the truth of their circumstance. "Shut up if you don't want to die." The colonial commander pointed his flintlock towards the guard and warned the morale of his men was already low. He didn't want it to get even more lowered. Please don't kill me, I don't want to die." The colonial guard fearfully backed away from the colonial commander. While he was in despair, he still hadn't lost his will to live. He didn't want to die in this island and wanted to return to his homeland. With this in mind, facing the barrel of the colonial commander, the colonial guard gritted his teeth and ran out of the corridor. "Hey!" The colonial commander shouted at the guard and immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! Sadly for the commander, however, the colonial guard had already managed to escape his sight. Dodging their death, he clenched his fist in anger and cursed the deserter. "Piece of *T. I'll execute him myself if I ever see him in front of me." The colonial commander wanted to kill someone at the moment, but couldn't bother to do anything towards his remaining men. After all, using fear to control them in desperate times was always a foolish option. Oh, you'll execute him? Will you even be alive by then? Out of nowhere, a sarcastic voice resounded throughout the hallway. This brought shivers to everyone's spine. After all, this voice could only come from one person. The colonial commander turned his gaze towards the direction where the voice came from and saw a silver wolf beastfolk with 2 Minikins beside her. They were holding heavy machine guns with ease, while she had 2 desert eagles between her hands. You must be the invaders. How dare you attack the colonial armory depot? You have declared war to the colonial dominion. The colonial commander shouted in anger towards the beastfolk invaders. Mercedes didn't respond to the commander and merely signaled her men to end this farce. After all, she didn't have all the time of the world to talk with some colonial commander. The storm fleet still needed the assistance of the rebels and the reconnaissance team to take over the heart of the colony. Noticing the signal of the first lieutenant, the Minikins nodded in understanding and pointed their heavy machine guns towards the direction of the colonial commander and his men. Without any hesitation or delay, they pulled the trigger and rained bullets down to the every last human in the hallway. *BRRRRTTTT. *BBRRRTTT. Flickering lights flashed brilliantly in hundreds for a mere moment. Thunderous gunshots echoed, followed by the sound of walls breaking apart. Flesh were ripped out from their bodies, turning them into mangled pieces of themselves. The 2 Minikins practically erased the direction where the colonial commander and his guards stood. Smoke scattered from the residues of the fortress's stone walls, though it didn't take long for them to fade into the background. What remained, though, was a horrifying sight. The corpses of the commander and the colonial gathers scattered throughout the hallway with dozens of bullet holes on their bodies. Their limbs were torn from their bodies, making limbs dangle everywhere. But Mercedes didn't have much of a reaction towards such a horrifying scene and turned her attention to Minikins beside her. Gather everyone and have them find the armory of this fortress. The armaments, supplies, and armors of this depot must be collected to be dispersed to the rebellion. She uttered her following orders, which the Minikins humbly accepted. They immediately walked away from the hallway, leaving Mercedes behind. Mias. Afterward, she returned her gaze to the scene and remembered the escapee. This made her raise an eyebrow, since the fate of that guard was an unknown, but she then walked through the corpses of the colonial commander and his men. After all, the colonial guard should be on the other side of the corridor. Luckily for her, she wasn't wrong. In the other side of the corridor was a shivering colonial guard who was kneeling and placing his hands on the wall. You were lucky to run away, Mercedes muttered to the guard, who merely froze and collapsed to the ground. It seems that despair caused him to lose his consciousness. Well, we have another prisoner in our hands, she quietly thought to herself while checking the body of the colonial guard for any weapons. Following her checkup, she picked the young man and placed him on her shoulders. She then followed the path of the Minikins and left the confines of the fortress where most of her men gathered outside. A dozen of prisoners gathered together. They were survivors of the fortress, and technically, they couldn't kill surrendering adversaries. So, Mercedes had to shackle them and turn them into prisoners of war. Besides, they might have useful intelligence with them that could be handy for the intelligence department. She arrived in front of the prisoners and placed the body beside them. They looked at her in fear and backed away, but she didn't care about what they thought of her. After doing what she needed to do, she returned her attention to the mission at hand. Leader, armaments, armors, and supplies have been gathered. It's in surplus and could be supplied to an army of over 1,000-inch ASRU beastfolk. Arrived before the first lieutenant and reported the status of their goal. The compound has also been cleared of any hostiles. We have gained complete control over the armory depot. Another SRU beastfolk arrived and reported to Mercedes. Affirmative. Contact Espada about the success of our assault. Let him bring the girl and her entourage to the compound. Mercedes nodded in understanding and ordered them. We shall do so. The 2 beastfolks saluted to the Silver Wolf lieutenant and began contacting the second-in-command, Espada. On the other hand, somewhere in the island, Hermona walked through the evergreen forest with a large group of beastfolks behind her. Most were from the Tigris and Leo tribe, who followed her with their respective chiefs. She wondered why they needed to follow her, as she merely planned to return to her ship, but before she could keep walking towards the shores, Espada placed his hand on her shoulders, prompting her to stop. Espada, what is it? She asked while sighing. Hermona turned her gaze towards the giant Minikin, who was holding a strange device in his fingers. I see the assault was a success, and the first lieutenant is calling for Hermona, Espada muttered to the radio communicator. While nodding in understanding after speaking to the communicator for a while, he turned his attention to Hermona. It was at this moment that he noticed that their group had become larger than before, so his actions must have brought the attention of everyone, and he was right. He coughed for a moment and relayed the orders of the first lieutenant to Hermona. Miss Hermona, The first lieutenant calls for you in the Colonial Armory Depot. It has already fallen in our hands. So she wants you to be there." Hearing the words of Espada, Hermona raised an eyebrow and realized where Mercedes went. "So the Armory Depot fell? I thought it would take longer and required our assistance," Hermona remarked in shock. She wasn't alone in her words. The chiefs of the Tigris and Leo tribes were also astounded by the revelation of the Armory Depot's fall. "The Special Response Unit are amongst the greatest weapons of the United Navy. We are under the command of the Dragoness Laplace, and are the spear of the fleet." Admiral Espada expounded to the group. "United Navy? Dragoness Laplace?" Both of the chiefs had questions, but Espada merely shook his head as he didn't desire to waste a moment explaining information to them. Instead, he decided to pass this trouble to his lovely leader. "I guess being an underling is a lot better than I previously thought," he quietly thought to himself, as the responsibilities he had weren't as heavy as the ones he had before as the war chief of the Minican tribe. "I won't bother myself in answering your questions. If you have inquiries, ask my boss." Like a natural underling, Espada forwarded the problem to Mercedes. Seeing Espada's lack of interest in answering them, Tora and Leonidas decided to not ask a question though. They glared at Hermona for the lack of information they had. He don't mind him. I'm sure you'll know more sooner or later." Hermona chuckled as though it wasn't her problem, quite a skillful deflection as expected of the rebel leader. Chapter 128. 128 Liberation Front. In the western entrance of the fallen Colonial Armory Depot, Mercedes stood silently alongside a dozen of her men. Behind them were large cargo crates of supplies and weapons, waiting to be unbolted by the soon-to-be-arrived visitors. And it didn't take long before their silhouettes emerged in the distance of the forest in the west. Noticing her large number, the edges of Mercedes's lips rose, since the human girl had succeeded in gathering allies. Well, it was not like she was expecting the girl to fail. On the contrary, she expected the human rebel leader to prevail and recruit the two tribes of this island, though when she would arrive was a question she'd asked beforehand. Now, however, it seems that she didn't have to wait long for them to reap the fallen fortress of the Colonial Armory Depot. "Hermona actually managed to recruit them, huh?" she muttered to herself. Bringing about the attention of her men, they noticed where her eyes were pointed at and gave their remarks. "Oh, the human girl actually managed to recruit them. It seems that she's a quarter of what the humans in the United Navy are. I heard that they were stubborn tribes. I guess they weren't as stubborn as the rumors portrayed them to be." Well, Sir Espada was with her during the recruitment process. His presence must have eased a lot of complications in the recruitment process. The opinion of her men were fairly simple. They were astonished by the fact that Hermona recruited two beastfolk tribes to her cause. This signified that she had a charm that was akin to the United Navy. However, compared to them, there were aspects she was lacking at. At any rate, Hermona and her entourage soon arrived in the western entrance of the Colonial Armory Depot. They gazed at the fallen fortress in shock and noticed its war-torn appearance. It was as though they had stepped into some battlefield of some sort. Nonetheless, they couldn't continue sightseeing in the fallen fortress. After all, there was something they needed to do for their liberation. "Espada, it seems that you and Hermona have succeeded in your respective tasks." Mercedes stepped forward and grinned at the giant Minican. Seeing her expression, Espada looked at the silver wolf and smirked. "With me around, it would be difficult for anyone to hurt her. The completion of my task is natural." When uttering such words, it was as though he was arrogant, but it was the truth. Regardless of the numbers the tribes had, the moment they tried to attack Hermona, he wouldn't hesitate to dispatch them from their status of being alive. "I guess you're somewhat right. Are the two of them the chiefs of the two tribes?" Mercedes turned her attention to the two beastfolks behind Hermona. Their appearance attracted attention. It was fairly clear that they were the chiefs of their tribes. "The Tigris guy is Tora, and the big Leo is Leonidas." Hermona worked hard to recruit them, so give them some slack, Espada explained while pointing at who was who. Mercedes merely chuckled after hearing Espada's last words. She wasn't someone who'd unnecessarily bring pressure for no reason, but as she had said, it entirely depends on the person at hand. "Tora and Leonidas, huh? The two of you are quite strong compared to the usual beast folks," she remarked while staring at the two men behind Hermona. Hermona stepped sideways as though avoiding being the crossfire between Mercedes and the two chieftains of the beast folk tribes. After all, she didn't want to be at the end of whatever they throw at each other. "From the way you are speaking, it sounds as though you're not working for Hermona," Tora questioned with raised eyebrows. Since he had noticed the tone of Mercedes when talking about Hermona, it was the tone of a superior. "Don't mind my tone, and you're correct. Hermona is working with us, the United Navy." Mercedes' uncaring tone resounded throughout the western entrance. She didn't hesitate to announce that she was part of the United, bringing tension in the surroundings. It was better for them to be aware of the truth than stay ignorant of their circumstance. At the very least, these guys wouldn't have the gall of accusing the United Navy about lying to them. "So, it's true, the United Navy, the heretics of humanity, has come into the archipelago," Leonidas stepped forward and calmly uttered. Mercedes looked at him and aloofly nodded. Yes, you're right. What has brought the United Navy into our islands? Leonidas questioned, making Mercedes squint. On the other hand, the beast folks and Minikin beside her glanced at one another before chuckling at the big Leo. Dang, what a delusional one. Kikik. Epsilon Upsilon. I wish I had that confidence. I wouldn't even speak like that even if you paid me to. I believe that you are misunderstanding something. Leonidas, you don't have the right over these islands at the moment. All of you are riding the coattails of the United Navy. Mercedes coldly expressed as she had never heard such arrogant words coming from an enslaved beastfolk. Our fleet is blocking the sea surrounding the colony of Eisenberg. This means that its surrounding islands are losing their colonial influence. This island is merely a part of our operations. So, I hope you take care of whatever you say in front of us. While Mercedes wanted the liberation of every beastfolk, she wouldn't hesitate to put a hole in the heads of those that mock the United Navy. She also hated the ones who think of their ownership of the land as a privilege. Naturally, it was not owning a land was never a privilege of some tribe. It was instead an ownership reinforced through strength. That was how colonies were built, and it should have been a logic deeply ingrained into the minds of every beastfolk in the archipelago. She didn't think that some would be delusional enough to think it was a right. There was nothing free in this world, just like the state of Minos. The liberated archipelago would have to be united after regaining their freedom afterward. Whether it be an economic and military benefit, the United Navy could reap what it sowed. I apologize for my disrespectful words. Leonidas lowered his head, while the female Leo guards beside him were preparing to fight. He glanced at them and coolly ordered, "Don't attack them. It was my fault. We haven't fought for our land yet, so it doesn't belong to us at the moment." He wasn't ignorant of the logic Mercedes was trying to expound, and he wholeheartedly accepted such logic. So he accepted his disrespectful words. Nevertheless, the United Navy will be giving you a chance to fight for your land, tribe, and freedom. We don't do handouts. So you must fight for what you want. Mercedes' covenant was the freedom of all sapient life. But they simply couldn't waste resources for such a lofty goal. Instead, they needed to balance their rationality and ideals. The current strategy was the result of such balance. The United Navy wouldn't hesitate to liberate the slaves scattered throughout the world. However, the enslaved ones must also fight in their liberation and regain freedom from their oppressors. The weapons, supplies, and armors behind us will be the fuel of your rebellion. Mercedes glanced at the gigantic wooden crates behind her and continued, "Don't waste the resources invested into your liberation. I hope you use our gifts well." She then turned her gaze towards Hermona, who instinctively flinched from her scrutinizing eyes. The edges of her lips rose as she remarked, "Hermona, take care of your rebellion." Hearing the words of Mercedes, Hermona raised an eyebrow as she wondered whether or not the reconnaissance team of the United Navy planned to leave the rebellion. She was a bit disappointed as she previously thought they would be with her until end. "Are you planning to leave?" Hermona asked, wanting to hear it from the mouth of the silver wolf beastfolk. "Yes, the situation has become complex. The fleet has called for my return as our home might have become compromised." "That's unexpected." First Lieutenant Mercedes Espada furrowed his eyebrows, since he was also surprised by the unexpected retreating orders from the High Command. "The reconnaissance team is the only one returning from the archipelago. The storm fleet will continue blocking the seas surrounding Eisenberg," Mercedes clarified and returned her attention to Hermona. "Now that you would become independent from us, it's time for you rebels to conjure your own name. After all, there must be a name for your oppressors and allies to call you," she suggested to the silent Hermona. Hermona, who was in silence, got out of her trance after hearing the suggestion of Mercedes. Her eyes regained clarity as she thought of her words with utter seriousness. A name wasn't something she had thought of since the beginning of the rebellion. After all, placing a name in the rebellion seemed utterly foolish in her eyes, but after thinking about it through the lenses that Mercedes had given her, Hermona understood the need for identity. With this in mind, Hermona became determined, causing Mercedes to slightly smile at the human girl. Hermona had grown a lot in the eyes of the first lieutenant. At any case, after gathering her courage, the rebel leader finally uttered the name she had conjured inside her mind. "Our rebellion is the Liberation Front, the vanguard of freedom." "Oh, how intriguing, but to call yourself the vanguard of freedom, we'll treat that as a direct challenge to the United Navy," Mercedes chuckled, causing Hermona to be agitated and clarify, "I wasn't making a direct challenge." Chapter 129. 129 Southern Troubles. What is that? In the docks of the southern colony, a crewman pointed at the horizon with horror on his face. His resounding words brought the attention of everyone in the dock, making them turn their attention to the distant seas. As their eyes laid upon it, they noticed a small silhouette permeating in the lines of the boundless horizon. It was small, but noticeable. All of them squinted their eyes, trying to make sense of what they had seen. "Is that a ship?" One of the crewmen questioned while staring at the tiny silhouette in the far distance. Another one stepped forward and remarked, "The colony has issued a ban in sailing because of some complicated circumstances. Every trading ship belonging to the colonial dominion should have been relayed the closure of our ports to outsiders, because of unknown reasons never told to them. The colony has closed all of its ports and banned the action of sailing out or in the island." Are they a foreign merchant ship? Another crewman suggested it made sense as foreign merchants weren't connected to the colony in comparison to the local ones. Before anyone could utter another word, several colonial guards began gathering in the docks. The crewmen who were unloading their goods felt dumbfounded by the tension culminating in the air. After all, out of nowhere, the colonial guards began acting as though they were preparing for war. "Hey, what's going on?" One of the crewmen questioned the guards, who merely looked at him and ignored his existence. This made the crewmen even more confused, but a colonial commander soon stepped forward and explained the situation. "All of you should retreat from what you are doing. All northern docks have been closed off and filled to the brim with guards. I won't say much, but I guess war is coming to this colony." The colonial commander sighed to himself. He was aware of the situation scattered throughout the colonial dominion one after another. Colonies were being attacked by an unknown force, though. To them, it wasn't an unknown force as the attackers were fairly obvious. The United Navy, they consider themselves as liberators, which means that this colony full of slaves will be one of their top targets. It seems that the colonial governor wasn't wrong about the United Navy targeting us. While he was a colonial commander, he disliked war the most as it was entirely chaotic and shrouded with death. War was difficult to make sense, which was why he'd rather avoid it. But he was one of the colonial commanders of the colony, Aeris. He simply couldn't back away in the first sign of trouble. He needed to fight and defend the colony as it was his duty to do so. However, I didn't think that the United Navy would only send a single warship in a colony that has an army of 5,000 men. Are they underestimating us? Or are they that confident? The colonial commander hoped that it would be the former. At any rate, the northern shores will turn into a war zone in the not-so-far future. You should evacuate from the port and this city, the colonial commander ordered the crewmen, who nodded in understanding. They didn't hesitate to follow the orders of the colonial commander. They understood that he wouldn't lie about the situation of the colony if his words were to be taken seriously. War was literally heading towards their colony. Seeing the crewmen scatter and evacuate themselves from the area, the colonial commander turned his attention to the colonial guards who were arming the docks with cannons. It would be a bloody battle, and he hoped he would survive it. Though, this wasn't the time to be meek. It was time for him to raise their morale, and also his. So, the colonial commander stood in the shore wall of the port city and yelled out, "Hear me. We will be fighting against a force that has destroyed a colony and will continue destroying more. They are so powerful that the colonial dominion of Terra decided to gather its forces into its shores to protect itself. But so what? We are the southern colony of Aeris, the riches of the south, and the strongest regardless of how many forces the so-called United Navy sends. We will defeat them and achieve victory." After the colonial commander ended his speech, the colonial guards, who were somewhat low in morale, began to regain themselves. They looked at the commander with determination and roared, "We will defend our shores. We will not let them pass. We will repel them from the colony. We will defend our shores. We will not let them pass. We will repel them from the colony. We will defend our shores. We will not let them pass. We will repel them from the colony." The cries of the colonial guards resounded throughout the northern shores of the port city. Their roars were like thunder, commanding the very air they resided in. "For Aeris! For Aeris! For Aeris!" Seeing his riled up and determined men, the colonial commander smirked as he finally felt that they had a chance against their upcoming adversaries. He could only hope that their enemies underestimated them and sent a weaker force. However, it was saddening for the colonial commander of the port city. After all, the United Navy would never underestimate their enemies. They would send a force with the corresponding power to handle its targets. This was achieved through their intricate intelligence network and analysis team. The estimated military strength of the colonies surrounding the United Navy had already been thoroughly analyzed. Afterward was the beginning of the various operations. And so, the United Navy sent the UNS Guardian of the Seas into the northern shores of Aeris, a single amphibious assault ship. But it was enough after all. With them were the main force of the Special Response Unit and its leader, the Dragon of the United Navy, Laplace. Meanwhile, on the bow of the UNS Guardian of the Seas, a silver-haired girl with dark horns and black tail stood against the wind. Her golden irises glimmered with authority as she gazed into the northern shores of the colony in her guillotine. "It looks like they are expecting us," Laplace muttered to herself. Though a smirk remained on her face, normally, she would have gotten her men to handle the defending forces in the northern shores. After all, she wanted them to gain some experience during the operation. However, things weren't always meant to be, and Laplace didn't plan on staying in the south for quite some time. While they go through the operation, the Port of Dawn remains defenseless against enemy attacks with most of the naval forces outside of Kreskra's influence. Who knows what could happen? Abraham is strong. He could probably handle himself, but he has his responsibility as the fleet admiral of the United Navy. His duty is to protect the Port of Dawn, and if some situation arises where he needs to risk his life for it, he would do so without hesitation. This must be avoided, Laplace quietly thought to herself. Solidifying her plans in the upcoming operation, she simply couldn't avoid her pose as the lieutenant colonel of the Special Response Unit, so the operation must end as fast as possible. How? Well, the answer was fairly simple. She would handle everything herself. Destruction was the best thing she was good at, and it was the thing that this horrific colony needed the most. With this in mind, she turned her gaze towards the bridge and nodded at it afterward. She jumped from the bow of the UNS Guardian of the Seas and propelled herself into the heavens. The UNS Guardian of the Seas trembled with her action as it went deeper into the water by 2 meters. Luckily, the bow wasn't devastated by Laplace's jump. The force was transferred easily into the seas below the metallic warship. Anyhow, in the heavens above, Laplace observed the northern shores, who were riddled with fortifications and defenses. After making note of every one of them, Laplace closed her eyelids and gathered her power. Through her evolution, she had become stronger than ever before. The 3 primal beast deities wouldn't stand a chance against her, unless, of course, they also ate their own elder hearth. Nonetheless, her ability to utter destruction had been multiplied into 100-fold. There was no need for her to unleash her breath of flames, or to slam her body into the ground to destroy her enemies. What she needed was time and patience. I rarely return to my true form since it impedes me from my goal of being with Abraham, but since he isn't with me at the moment, I don't have any reason to hesitate, Laplace mumbled as her eyes glowed in golden neon hue. Bang! A golden and brilliant arc of lightning enveloped her body as her human silhouette slowly transformed into its dragon serpentine form in a mere moment. Following the radiance in the heavens, what emerged was nature's strongest weapon. Her eastern dragon form had grown larger than ever before. She had reached the length of 1,000 meters and the diameter of 75 meters. Her black scales glimmered in the light of the luminescent sun, while her golden eyes lustered in dominion. The dragon has emerged. Chapter 130. 130. The Dragon of Liberation. The colonial guards in the northern shores were somewhat confident and determined in defending it. Even if they were fighting against a superior force, they believed they could handle and buy time for more reinforcements from the interior to come. Sadly, however, their confidence and determination were shattered the moment a gigantic black eastern dragon materialized in the heavens amidst a golden radiance. It radiated with authority, while its golden and slitted eyes conveyed domination over everything in their eyes. It was akin to a god, the final and apex form of life, its harbinger, a destroyer. The colonial guards couldn't even properly scream or cry out in horror. Their voice would break the moment it sounded out from their lips. The fear was palpable, as none of them could even dare to run against such monstrosity. On the other hand, the colonial commander wondered where everything went wrong. What had they done to have such a dragon in their skies? Well, the answer to that question was fairly simple. Before them was the Dragon of Liberation, Laplace of the United Navy. The moment they had enslaved many of the beastfolk tribe and sold them into other colonial dominions, their destiny had already been deeply rooted. Colonial commander, what do we do? A colonial guard asked the colonial commander for orders. Despite his despairing face, after all, he needed to hear the order of the colonial commander to shake off the despair of the dragon before them. Realizing that he had been too affected by the dragon, the colonial commander took a deep breath and desired to calm himself down. Although it would be difficult to do so, it must be done for the sake of his men. They are relying on me. They need my guidance, my orders, he quietly thought while calming his throbbing heart. It took a moment, but he did regain some of his calm, though not all. He could still feel his legs and arms somewhat shivering. All of you must retreat from the northern shores, scatter, and escape into the interior. The colonial guards expected to receive an order to fight for their deaths, but their commander unexpectedly ordered them to run away from the battlefield. Every one of them felt respect to the colonial commander. After all, the abolishment of the northern shore front line in this city would be his responsibility. However, the colonial commander didn't do it out for the goodness of his heart or his cowardness. Regardless if they stand against or run away from the dragon, the results would be the same. If they kept being huddled together, it would be easier for the dragon above them to destroy them from existence. So, gathering together would practically make it easier for the dragon to decimate the northern battlefront. Go! Don't waste time. Retreat and run away from this city, he yelled, Bringing the colonial guards under his command out of their trance, they glanced at him before slowly running away from their positions. He didn't give a damn about courage at the moment. He was merely giving the colony an extra forces they could use against the invading force. Why did I become a colonial commander? Farming in Europa would have been better for me. The colonial commander silently thought to himself, regretting the path he had chosen. He had previously thought he was lucky to have been a colonial commander in the safest colonial dominion of the Pharisee after all. It was the closest to Europa. Never did he knew that it would be the first in the chopping block of colonial dominions. As thoughts surged into the mind of the colonial commander, the black eastern dragon in the heavens slowly opened its mouth. Inside its maw was a gathering arc of golden lightning, fusing against each other. It was fairly clear that the dragon was about to unleash an attack. The colonial commander could only kneel before the dragon with a face of acceptance. There was nothing he could do against the mightiest creature of nature. At the very least, he hadn't thrown his men into a needless sacrifice. Even though I regret becoming a colonial commander, it is also my greatest achievement, to be honest. I feel honored to see such a beautiful creature in my life. He didn't know if he was falling into madness, but he slowly felt calm for some reason. The arc of golden lightning inside the dragon's mouth gleamed with unparalleled radiance. It was beginning to overshine the light of the sun, illuminating the heavens to him. It started to look like the mighty sword of a divine god. A moment later, the dragon unleashed its devastating attack, a beam of concentrated golden lighting piercing through the air, burning everything in its path. The air combusted while the winds buzzed in excitement. Following them was impact. Somewhere in the northern shore, a radiant light lustered like the morning light of the rising sun. The colonial commander could clearly see it with his eyes, and he realized what the dragon had targeted. It seems that the northern fortress of Aeris was the first one that got hit. His thought was clear and concise. There was no despair. He didn't have the energy to do so anymore. He could only observe everything before his inevitable death. What came after the golden radiance was the loudest explosion he had ever heard in his life. Boom. The shockwave of the dragon's attack devastated surrounding regions. Dozens of houses crumbled upon contact with the crazed winds, while the sea churned in and out itself from the power of the explosion. The colonial commander couldn't handle the shockwave and fell to the ground. It blasted his eardrums open, making his ears ring in a distorted hue. Blood also began to trickle from his mouth, while his skin felt the temperature around him increase. Nevertheless, regardless of his injuries, he reverently muttered into the heavens, "This is the Dragon of Liberation." In the bridge of the UNS Guardian of the High Seas, Captain Howard saw the effects of Laplace's blast through the cameras of a reconnaissance drone. It was devastating. To say the least, the northern fortress of Aeris became nothing more but a crater. I thought I already understood the power of the Dragoness. It looks like I'm still as ignorant as the rest to think she would have such power in her grasps without relying on technology. Captain Howard mumbled to himself, obviously shocked by what had happened. After thinking about the blast, he turned his glance towards an intelligence officer and uttered a question. How strong was the blast of the Dragoness? It was a simple one, which the intelligence officer immediately answered. From the diameter of the crater and the radius affected by the explosion, it should have the estimated strength of a 300-kiloton nuclear missile strike. Hearing the words nuclear from the intelligence officer, Captain Howard felt even more impressed. So, the lieutenant colonel is capable of mass destruction. Captain Howard nodded in understanding, and finally knew why both the vice admiral and fleet admiral relented to the antics of the Dragoness. She wasn't mere a dragon, but a being capable of mass destruction. Having her an ally would prove invaluable for the United Navy. The capability of mass destruction wasn't astounding for the United Navy. Sooner or later, they would regain their nuclear arsenal, but the Dragoness was a walking nuclear dispenser. It might be the reason why she was considered as the sword of the fleet admiral. But before Captain Howard could continue with his thoughts, an intelligence officer called out for his attention. "Sir, you may want to look at this." Hearing the words of the intelligence officer, Captain Howard followed their gaze and saw the Dragoness charging another blast in her mouth. Golden arcs of lightning fused inside her mouth, gleaming in utter radiance. She wasn't exhausted by that attack? Captain Howard raised his eyebrows, since throwing an attack of mass destruction was already impressive in itself. Doing another one after performing it was even more so. It didn't take long before the golden radiance overshone the light of the sun, and what followed was a beam of lustering brilliance. It pierced through the heavens and impacted a northern city brimming with colonial guards. A glimmering glow met with the northern city, and it disintegrated into nothingness, followed by a resounding shockwave. Boom. The reconnaissance drone, observing the status of the northern shores while flying through the heavens, shook from the turbulence brought about by the explosion. The shimmering radiance then faded, and what replaced it was a mushroom cloud reaching kilometers into the sky. The northern city had disappeared from the map, and in its place was a large crater. The naval personnel in the bridge of the UNS Guardian of the High Seas could only observe in silence. None of them uttered a single comment about the spectacular explosion of the Dragoness. Though, it's not like there was anything they could say other than powerful. Although, they were bound to be even more astounded after all. Laplace planned to destroy every military gathering in the colony of Aeris through her sheer destructive breath. With this in mind, another arc of golden lightning gathered inside her mouth. Fusing with one another, this action was decisively recorded by the reconnaissance drone and caused everyone in the bridge of the UNS Guardian of the High Seas to have their eyes wide open. Perhaps I should treat her as the wife of the fleet admiral from now on. Captain Howard Riley smiled as he was now afraid of accidentally offending the Dragoness and getting his head blasted by a 300-kiloton blast. Chapter 131. 131. The Fall of Aeris. In the capital city of the southern colony, Aeris, a dreadful silence shrouded the marbled buildings and bricked streets. Groups of colonial guards patrolled the streets and guarded the three dividing circular walls, preparing for the inevitable. As the capital city faced its dreaded landscape, its central castle faced another challenge. After all, while the city faced the unknown, those in the control were confronted by the horrifying truth. Is this the truth? An old man questioned with a tone brimming with doubts. He couldn't believe the reports about the status of the northern side of the colony. To think that their military outposts scattered throughout the northern lands would be destroyed in mere moments. It is the truth, Colonial Governor. These report could only be gained from the survivors of the northern side. Other than that, it became a wasteland covered with craters. The secretary reported with a hopeless voice. It sounded cold, pragmatic, only speaking of the truth. His feelings had already gone astray the moment he recorded the amount of casualties in the northern massacre. But how? How could have they done such thing? I thought we were merely facing a single warship. Bam! The colonial governor slammed his hand onto the table. His mind surged with questions of all kinds, and he wanted answers. Even though the colonial governor looked extremely pissed in front of him, the secretary merely lifted his glasses and answered each of his governor's questions. The north of Aeris was devastated through a variety of explosions, and the reason why they could do such a thing despite merely being one ship is simple. It was done by someone aboard on the ship. The secretary stopped for a second and continued. The Dragon of Liberation, that is what the survivors call the dragon that materialized in the heavens and blasted everything on the ground. Her identity is Laplace, formerly known as the Dragon of the Revolting Tide. We already knew she was a part of the United Navy, though. We didn't expect for her to grow stronger. Her records didn't utter any violent explosions in the wake of her breath. This means that she had advanced into a higher form. It should explain why she looks incredibly bigger than her former size. At any rate, with her in the heavens of Aeris, we don't stand a chance. The secretary finally uttered the truth that no one wanted to hear. It was the fact that they stood no chance against their adversary. But why is she working with the United Navy? The colonial governor asked. Since the United Navy was a human heretical organization, why would be a beast folk working for a human organization? It doesn't make sense to him. Perhaps their goals simply aligned with one another. It was already noted that the United Navy doesn't have the same values as the entirety of humanity. They consider the freedom of all sapient life as above all else, contradicting with the covenants erected by the sovereigns. The secretary didn't care about why the Dragoness was working with the United Navy. What mattered was their current circumstance. The Dragon of Liberation was obviously aiming for the dismantlement of the colonial government. Thus, the colony of Aeris must be destroyed. He started working as a secretary because of how easy and safe the job was compared to the colonial military. Now, it became an anchor to danger. He had to be with the colonial governor. Otherwise, he would be branded a traitor. As such, he simply went to do his job and accepted his fate of inevitable death. Panicking, regretting, and despairing over such a destiny was merely tiresome for someone like him. Nonetheless, while the colonial governor seemed horrified, it appears he still held the confidence of his wealth and military might. It was understandable. After all, the colony of Aeris was the strongest colony in the south of the colonial dominion. However, it was secretary's duty to report every information in the table, so he continued reporting to the colonial governor, specifically the casualties in the north. Before the massacre, the north had a military population of half of our entire forces at the moment. Less than a third of his half survived the massacre, and most of them aren't planning to return to the capital and get remobilized. The forces in our capital is half of what remained in our military. The remaining are defending the high-priority port cities in the south, west, and east. The morale of our troops is lowering by the minute because of the unknown and the negative anticipation of the battle. The secretary didn't hold back, and reality finally set in for the colonial governor. He now understood the situation and knew he had no chance since the beginning, but before he could fall into despair, He asked a vital information from the secretary. What about the civilians left behind in the interior northern cities? Have they been massacred? This was an important question for the colonial governor, as it would be the foundation of his upcoming stratagem Vrytangle of Kyrilitsigers on Dalnapurchurknitara. They are alive. Colonial governor, the civilians of various northern cities have been spared. Only military installations were devastated by the attack of the Dragon of Liberation. This is the main reason why less than a third of our northern forces survive. Otherwise, there would be survivors in the north. The secretary answered as he felt a bad feeling from the frozen colonial governor. And he was right. The following words of the colonial governor almost made him frown. Wouldn't that mean that the dragon wouldn't destroy the capital? After all, there are civilians scattered throughout the three walls. What the colonial governor said made sense, but relying in the mercy of their adversary was as foolish as it gets. Sadly, there was nothing the secretary could do with the delusional old man, and it's not like there was anything he could do even if he didn't hesitate. After all, the Dragon of Liberation was already above them. Asterisk roar. Asterisk. Everyone in the capital city of Aeris slowly turned their gaze upward. Above them was a gigantic eastern black dragon that was a kilometer long. It was clad in jet black scales, while its golden eyes glowed with unparalleled radiance. Its roar was heard by everyone and everything. It was like the hammer of justice. The capital city had become part of the court where the dragon would be its judge. The colonial governor had his mouth wide open, but he believed his earlier strategy, the Dragon of Liberation, wouldn't destroy the capital city with its breath. Fortunately for him, he was right. The dragon squinted its eyes and soon, golden brilliance shrouded its body. What followed the gleaming golden light was the disappearance of the dragon. The monstrous being that dwelled before the heavens disappeared, and the skies calmed down as though nothing happened. I was right. The colonial governor yelled out and began celebrating like an old man who won the lottery. The secretary kept gazing at the skies and felt that something was amiss. It was at this moment that he realized, while the dragon would have spared the city, that didn't mean that it would spare the central castle and its colonial governor. With this in mind, the secretary was about to warn the colonial governor. Sadly, he was too late. My, aren't you quite a celebrative one? A beautiful voice sounded out of nowhere, bringing about the attention of the colonial governor and his secretary. The colonial governor felt his spine shiver, and he immediately yelled out, "Assassin!" The moment his voice escaped his lips, numerous colonial guards entered his office. There were also various generals who were waiting to have a meeting with him. The moment they entered the colonial governor's office, they only saw a beautiful white-haired lady wearing a jet black suit. She had black horns and a dark tail, making her akin to a summoned devil, though she might as well be one to them. Immediately calling out for your men. I don't know if I should be impressed or disappointed, but I understand your fear. This colony has little to no wyvern riders, and has no magus. I would also fear myself, so I won't fault you. The edges of her lips slowly rose as she pointed at the newly arrived men. In a moment, golden arc of lightning escaped her finger. It shot into the entrance of the office, and immediately fried the colonial guards and generals of Aeris. What do you want? I will be willing to pay for my life. Do you want wealth? Slaves? Power? The colonial governor decided to negotiate for his life. Sadly, it wouldn't work. To dismantle the colony of Aeris was to terminate the colonial government and its leader, the colonial governor. I don't need your wealth or power. He's already enough. Laplace smirked and responded to the colonial governor with confidence. Afterward, she appeared in front of the colonial governor and swiftly crushed his head. Blood splattered all over the office, though most that dared to strike the Dragoness's body was disintegrated into dust. Though the secretary didn't have such a spectacular power, so he was left with being fully covered of the blood of his boss. After killing the colonial governor, Laplace's job in the colony of Aeris was done. She slowly turned her golden eyes towards the secretary and ordered him. There should be the remains of the colonial military scattered throughout the colony. Make them surrender, and I will not hunt you. The secretary rapidly nodded when he heard her orders. He didn't dare to hesitate, and it was his chance to not die. With this in mind, he didn't hesitate to take it. I shall do so, Lady Laplace. He kneeled and bowed before the Dragon of Liberation. Chapter 132. 132 Ambush. Fleet Admiral. The operations of the United Navy are going smoothly. Their first phases have been completed. Most of them are initiating their second phase. In the Fleet Admiral's office, an intelligence officer coolly reported the status of the war. That's good. It seems that everyone is working hard. Sitting on his comfy and luxurious chair, Abraham nodded in satisfaction as he thought about the battles his subordinates were fighting. With the Wyvern Riders and Magus gone, most of the colonies they were attacking would be nothing more but skeleton fortresses against the modern technology of the United Navy. These colonies stood no chance. However, he didn't want to underestimate the capabilities of his adversaries. While he was capable of hatching a scheme, they were also inclined to do the same. Through this thought process, Abraham decided to stay in the port of Dawn and manage the operations without directly being in them. This would be efficient, and would be easier for him to adapt to whatever schemes their opponents have made. And it appears that he was right. I am lucky to have such hard-working subordinates, and it looks like I'll have to do my part too. The edges of his lips rose since he had already determined his heart for the inevitable. Please leave my office, Abraham said to the intelligence officer, who looked at his eyes before nodding in understanding. I shall do so, Fleet Admiral. The officer saluted and left his office afterward. Silence followed and shrouded his office. Abraham couldn't help but sigh and utter without hesitance. The United Navy is extremely powerful, especially compared to the technologically lacking adversary. However, there are two troublesome issues that came up during my experience with the United Navy. It was our defenseless nature against magicraft and our lack of numbers. I will be honest, the United Navy and I are ignorant of the intricacies of magic, so building a defense against it would be to bid our time. Our lack of numbers merely stems from me and the need for conflict to grow. In actuality, the United Navy is a military force. Peace are our bane, and conflict make us stronger regardless of our desires to gain peace and liberate those enslaved by tyrants. At any rate, I'm sure none of you are interested in the chattering of a middle-aged man. Am I right? Abraham stared in the shadows of his office as he questioned. What followed was the emergence of several figures clad in dark cloaks. They were the inquisitors of Europa, and they were after his head as the leader of the so-called heretical organization, the United Navy. We underestimated you, Fleet Admiral of the United Navy, Abraham Shepard, the leading inquisitor remarked, and slowly took off his dark hood. His face escaped its confines, revealing a red-haired young man with amber-colored eyes. Your wisdom is as great as the words your subordinates utter. In mere months, your United Navy has become a force that rivals a colonial dominion. I see. It seems that you have also investigated my identity. Abraham lightly chuckled, uncaring of the circumstance he found himself in, though. It's bad manners to appear without introducing oneself, correct? He raised his eyebrows, staring at the red-haired young man in front of him. The inquisitors became tense and swiftly prepared their grimoires for the upcoming battle. Calm yourself, Sir. Abraham is merely asking a question, the red-haired inquisitor uttered to his subordinates, and turned his attention to the Fleet Admiral of the United Navy. Apologies for not introducing myself. Call me Leonhardt, the red-haired inquisitor. Or Leonhardt lightly bowed as he introduced himself. Leonhardt? Huh? You must be the ones causing trouble, Abraham calmly accused, which Leonhardt didn't reject. The inquisitors were brewing trouble throughout the sea region of Terra, so his accusation weren't wrong. While the Fleet Admiral appeared calm in the outside, his mind wasn't as tranquil as it'd like to be. Thoughts surged as he wondered about the possibilities and probability of his survival. During this precarious times, Abraham was inwardly conversing with his trusted and precious partner, Systema. They have surrounded me, Systema. It shouldn't take long before the help comes to my office, but one would wonder if they could handle a group of inquisitors on their own. According to their intelligence, inquisitors were akin to specially trained magus, practically the secret police of some sort. A mechanical bell rang inside his mind, and the monotone voice of his partner followed. Ding. Systema cannot do much to your circumstance, Fleet Admiral, but I can help in assisting you with probability calculation, making sure you choose the best options of your situation. All right, do that. I simply need all the help I need. Abraham wasn't dissatisfied with the not-so-uplifting assistance of Systema. After all, she wasn't an omnipotent being inside the naval Gacha system. Instead, she was merely a manager that connects him to the system. At the very least, she had his back, which could prove useful later down the line. Calculating surrounding motion, planning best course of action. Chances of escape 100%. Negative, including variable. Magicraft, variable included. Chances of escape 95%, 80%, 65%, 40%, 25%, 10%. Plan constructed. Attack and retreat. Shoot the inquisitors as a diversion and unload 2 bullets at the window. Immediately jump and run away through the streets. Hearing the plan that Systema had made, Abraham found himself dumbfounded. He was shocked at how maddening it was. What do you mean jump from the window? Do you know how high my office is? I'll die with my guts splattered on the ground. Abraham found the plan to be suicidal, and he didn't want to die yet. He had plans with Laplace, so there was no dying for him. Ding. The Fleet Admiral's daily training has built an impressive physique. You should stop treating yourself like a normal human. Systema's remark was the truth because of the perk of recovery and Abraham's intense daily training. His physique had grown beyond what was conceived as normal. It was because of this that he was able to last for an entire night, fighting against the Dragoness on their nightly adventures. Otherwise, he would have died with a dried husk as a corpse. Returning back to the scene before him, Abraham turned his gaze towards the window and uttered, I don't appreciate you messing with my subordinates. I suggest you to return to where you came from. He warned the inquisitors as the moment Laplace found out about them, she would probably be hunting them, and he wouldn't even bother to stop her. The existence of the inquisitors poses a threat to the security of the United Navy and its allies. Unfortunately, Sir Abraham, we can't do that. We must complete the mission given to us. Leonhardt smirked while the inquisitors prepared their spells. Oh, that must mean that you have been sent to assassinate me. Abraham's tone made it seem as though he wasn't bothered about the implications of the inquisitors' emergence. The sovereigns have found your existence. Troubling to say the least, they want you out of their pearly gates of their backyard. The red-haired inquisitor appears to love yapping, which Abraham found useful. He could dig more information about what the enemy thought of him, and it looks like he was but an annoyance to them, a squirrel of some sort that managed to get into their backyard. Well, it was the best thing that could ever have happened otherwise. If they really viewed him as an actual threat, they would have emerged before the skies of the Port of Dawn and annihilated it from existence. At any rate, I don't have time left. It's time to enact the plan, Abraham thought, and closed his eyelids before speaking to Leonhardt. How saddening. Regrettably, this annoyance has no plans leaving their backyard. I will make it mine. The fleet admiral smirked and took out a revolver from his holster. Without any hesitation, he pointed it towards the inquisitors and pulled the trigger. Bang, 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 bang. The inquisitors activated their defense spells simultaneously and blocked the incoming bullets of the revolver, though. It didn't end there. Abraham kicked the table towards the inquisitors and turned his gaze towards the windows. Pam, don't let him escape. Leonard casted a spell, but sadly, he was too late. Abraham grinned and shot his remaining bullets at the window, breaking it apart without hesitation or delay. He jumped from his office, falling several stories high. A lightning bolt crackled out from the office, while he landed on the ground, breaking a bone along the way. Abraham gritted his teeth, since his rolling maneuver didn't entire work, but at the very least, he didn't die. Damn, I don't want to ever do that again. He expressed his annoyance and immediately ran through the streets of the Port of Dawn. Mere seconds after his escape, alarms echoed throughout the port as the United Army was awakened by the attempted assassination of their fleet admiral. Abraham thought that the inquisitors would retreat, giving him time to get some reinforcements. After all, they wouldn't want to fight an entire army behind enemy lines. However, he underestimated the madness that stems from these so-called inquisitors. They were crazy bastards. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. A fireball landed beside Abraham, making him roll to the side. He pointed his revolver to where it came from and fired a couple of shots. Bang, 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 bang. Then, he reloaded, firing another salvo. Bang, 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 bang. The shields of the inquisitors were tough. His gun could only slow them down, but it was enough. A Humvee emerged beside him, and the driver yelled, "Get in, Fleet Admiral." BBRRRRTTTTT. A soldier manning the 50 caliber machine gun fired at the inquisitors, who backed away after noticing the cracks on their barriers when met with the rain of lead. Take me out of here, and prepare our anti-Magus guns, Abraham ordered while the Humvee immediately got out of the branch office building. It was fortunate that the streets were relatively empty during his escape, other than some property damage. No lives were lost, which was a piece of good news for the fleet admiral. Chapter 133. Surviving an assassination. One after another, the inquisitors appeared in the streets under the fleet admiral's office. They glanced at the destruction brought about by their spells, while thinking about how their target managed to escape from their grasps. Leonhardt turned his gaze towards the broken window and saw the height of the fall. Without magic, he would have died upon hitting the ground. The fact that the fleet admiral managed to survive meant that something was amiss with him. It seems that the fleet admiral of the United Navy isn't merely a weak human with no magical capabilities. Some of our intel about him were wrong after all. Is it normal for a human with no mana to survive such a fall? He expressed to his subordinates, who nodded in agreement. The circumstance of their target was strange, but this was a world where strangeness was the ordinary. As such, it was easy for them to adapt. Their questions would be sooner or later get answered. For now, they needed to have their focus on the mission. Should we retreat, Sir Leonhardt? An inquisitor calmly asked, making the red-haired inquisitor shake his head and reply, "No. Most of the United Navy is far from this island. This is the greatest chance we could ever have to dispose of him. Track and terminate him. Destroy everything along the way if needed." Leonhardt ordered his inquisitors to spread out and find their target. He must be killed before the Dragoness learned of this. Otherwise, the sea region of Terra would be turned upside down. Understood, Sir Leonhardt. We will find the heretic leader. One of the inquisitors lightly bowed and disappeared from the spot. Many others followed as they scattered throughout the Port of Dawn to find the agent of heretical knowledge and ideas. Leonhardt was left alone, Silence singing in his ears, he observed his surroundings and noticed the uniqueness of the Port of Dawn. The structures the United Navy constructed were far different from the Imperial and Gothic structures of Europa. It was clean, covered in ivory. I guess I should investigate the inner works of this organization, Leonhardt muttered to himself and disappeared like his subordinates mere moments after he left. Several soldiers arrived through a military truck and surrounded the branch office building. Guards also got out of the branch office building and began scrutinizingly inspecting the area for any enemy influence. Where is the fleet admiral? Is he alive? The Army's second lieutenant leading the reinforcements questioned the guards. They seriously looked at him and replied, "The fleet admiral is alive, sir. He has escaped through a military Humvee, but the assassins are chasing after him. Fuck. Protect the fleet admiral no matter what. Use your bodies or mine if needed to." The Army's second lieutenant cursed and got into the military truck, heading towards the command base in the defense sector where the fleet admiral might be sent to get protected. Meanwhile, Abraham was sitting at the back of the Humvee, clenching his teeth while he survived falling over dozens of meters in height. It didn't do well for his body. Some of his bones were broken, though it was manageable. A short treatment and recovery should help him. But for now, escaping the damn inquisitors was his priority. Where are we going? He coolly questioned while his body maintained its tense state. It wasn't the time to relax yet. Those bastards were probably chasing him after all. This was the best time to assassinate him. Following their retreat, they would have little to no chance, practically ending the mission given to them by their precious sovereigns. Fleet Admiral, our destination is the command center in the defense sector. The United Army has prepared a decisive defense formation throughout the compound along with scattered anti-Magus gun snipers. The driver responded while driving swiftly through the streets. Good. Have them prepare everything we have against the Magus. I expected a Magus come for an assassination, but never did I thought they would send a group of them for a measly human like me. Abraham Riley smiled. He wasn't ignorant of the implications regarding the fact that he had sent most of his fighting force to take care of the colonial dominion of Terra. It was a risky move, but it was also a needed one. If their operations was a success, the only remaining adversary would be the colonial dominion, Terra. The moment they take over the sea region of Terra, they would be able to solidify their standing in the Ferrous Sea and finally be considered as a force by the monsters of the foreign world. However, the aftermath for the operations was for later. For now, his survival was paramount. The fleet admiral is far from a measly human. The driver smiled and remarked to them. The fleet admiral was the greatest man that could ever have existed, leading the United Navy in a foreign world covered with dangerous beings or phenomena, while also ensuring its survival. It was a heavy responsibility, but a responsibility their fleet admiral took nonetheless. So, everyone in the United Navy had high degrees of respect, admiration, and love towards their fleet admiral. With him on their side, it was as though they could do everything and anything. "You are the fleet admiral of the United Nav dash." Boom. Before the driver could continue, a fireball exploded beside the Humvee, causing it to tip over and crashed onto a small park. It rolled over into the grassy landscape and landed upside down. Abraham grunted and quickly glanced at the driver, who was fortunately alive, merely unconscious. As expected, it was too early to celebrate. He sighed and muttered to himself. He took out his revolver and made sure that it was reloaded before asking some suggestions from his precious partner. Any suggestions can help. Systema, Abraham thought inside his mind. And what followed was the ring of a mechanical bell. Ding. Calculating probabilities. Searching for escape routes. Dividing possible courses. Calculation concluded. Suggestion. Fight. The suggestion of Systema made Abraham astounded, but after thinking a short moment, it made sense. He was currently in a small park, surrounded by a flat ground on all sides. This meant that he couldn't hide at something during his escape. His back might as well be a target ring for the Inquisitors, and he'd rather avoid getting hit from behind. With this in mind, Abraham understood that a fight to the death was inevitable. My heart is rapidly beating. My muscles are tense. I can feel the hair on my skin tingling and standing up. This is my first time in an actual deadly situation without anyone to rely on other than myself. But why? For some reason, I feel excited. He wondered if he got Laplace's madness during their nightly interactions, especially when he was becoming excited at the thought of fighting. Abraham took a deep breath and calmed his heart. He then closed his eyelids and listened carefully to his surroundings. Steps echoed inside his mind, and when it got louder, his gaze sharpened while he held his revolver tightly. It was time. In one instance, Abraham kicked through the crackled window of the Humvee and rolled to the side. After standing up and regaining his stance, he turned his gaze towards the two Magus who caused his vehicle to flip over. Squinting his eyes, he pointed the revolver at them and fired. Bang, 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 bang. Bullets pierced through the air and impacted at the defensive barriers of the Inquisitors. The winds bellowed while thunderous gunshots sang. Noticing the ineffectiveness of his revolver, Abraham turned his attention to the gunner of the Humvee. The gunner was lucky to have gotten inside the military vehicle before it flipped over. Otherwise, he would have been a mush of flesh splattered along the grassy landscape. At any rate, what Abraham was interested at was the weapon of the gunner. A 50 caliber machine gun. It had already proven its effectiveness during his earlier escape, so it must prove itself once again at this moment. Crackle! Lightning bolts struck the Humvee, causing electricity to crackle in the air. Abraham stepped nearer to the machine gun and held it tightly between his fingers. He inspected its ammunition and its barrel, making sure that it wasn't skewered before he used it. The short inspection ended with no problems in the machine gun. Abraham sighed in relief, while a fireball flew beside him, bringing about another explosion. Reveal yourself, heretic, and accept your end. Be honored to be killed by the inquisitors, the grace of the sovereigns. An arrogant voice resounded from one of the inquisitors. Abraham merely frowned, since no one would like to have explosions and fireballs thrown at them. He silently glanced at them and determined their positions. After some thoughts inside his mind, he emerged from the side of the Humvee with the machine gun's barrel pointed at the inquisitors. At first, they thought he would be shooting his puny gun at them. But now, the thing that was pointed at them was not puny at all. It was the one that almost broke their defensive spells. Before they could react, Abraham pulled the trigger and began blasting the entirety of the remaining ammunition to the two inquisitors. BBRRRRRTTTT. Their shields kept up at first, but it couldn't handle the rain of 50 caliber lead. Following a couple of cracks, the inquisitors' defensive shields broke apart like mirror, and the inquisitors faced the unending torrent of bullets. In a split second, dozens of holes riddled throughout their bodies as they fell backward with a thud. Chapter 134. Taking out the inquisitors. Abraham stood over the corpses of the inquisitors, riddled with dozens upon dozens of holes. Blood dripped from every one of them, bringing about a crimson pool amidst the evergreen grassy landscape of the park. While he carefully observed them, etching their image to his very heart and mind, a low groan sounded out from the Humvee. Taking his attention, he turned his gaze towards the upside-down military vehicle and saw his subordinates awakening from their terrific experience. Org! Damn it! The driver and the machine gunner of the Humvee awoken from their slumber. They immediately noticed their upside-down perspective, making them realize how they had landed upon their unexpected tumble. Though, instead of worrying about themselves, the two of them looked around inside the military vehicle, trying to find their fleet admiral. After all, his safety was paramount, and they had failed to maintain his safety. The two of you, calm down. I'm here, alive and well. Abraham crouched, looking over the two soldiers through the broken front window of the Humvee. The edges of his lips rose as he smirked at the two. I'm more or less good. How about the two of you? Are you in pain or injured? He questioned while his smirk faded, replaced by tender seriousness. While he was okay, that didn't mean that the soldiers with him would be in the same state. After all, he was different from an ordinary human. Others would have splattered upon impact after falling so high, or they would have gone unconscious in the crash, but none of such things happened to him. His body was far stronger than he could have imagined. The two of us are okay, sir. Our bodies have gone through worser than this, the driver responded while the machine gunner nodded in agreement. Seeing that they were really okay, Abraham sighed in relief and stepped closer to them with his head lowered near the window. While I'd like for us to be in a hospital to get treatment, our adversaries have already arrived. I want the two of you to lay low and retreat from the park. Since I'm still in capable conditions, I should hold them off while the two of you escape, he suggested to the two men. Naturally, they shook their heads and flat out rejected his suggestion. They were the warriors of the United Army running away, while their fleet admiral bought time was akin to treachery to them. It was something that would appear in their nightmares. I'm afraid we cannot run away, sir. Instead, we will fight you. We still have enough strength and capability to hold a gun. As such, we must face our enemy. The machine gunner expressed his thoughts. He's correct, Fleet Admiral. We shall not retreat while you fight in our stead. We are the warriors of the United Army, not some random children in need of saving. It appears that the driver's thought aligned with the former. Seeing their determined words and resolute expressions, Abraham understood that they were as stubborn as him. When deciding to do something with this in mind, he didn't force them to retreat, but instead gave them weapons. All right, since the two of you won't run away, you will be fighting to the death with me. Our enemies are the secret police of the Inquisitors. They are skilled in magicraft, making them an unexpected and unknown variable. The only effective weapon we got against them is the machine gun, so I'll have to use it wisely. Abraham held the machine gun tightly and continued, the two of you will provide cover for me and attract their attention. These assault rifles of yours should prove itself to be enough. He pointed at the assault rifles in their hands. Even though they might not penetrate the shields of the Inquisitors, they should be able to get their attention. I will be setting up a kill zone, and I need them to be 20 meters away from the Humvee. Will the two of you be able to do that? Abraham asked, while the other two saluted almost instantly and replied, the Fleet Admiral's wishes are our command. We should be able to attract their attention. "Sir," the driver said confidently to the middle-aged man with the confidence that his subordinates had. He understood that he needed to rival their enthusiasm. "Okay, let's begin." In the entrance of the small park, several inquisitors emerged from the darkness. Gazing at the rolled-over Humvee in the middle of the grassy landscape, they understood that it was the vehicle of their target, the fleet admiral of the United Navy, Abraham Shepard. But what astounded them was the two corpses near the Humvee. The bodies belonged to their comrades, who were alive just recently. "Be careful, they must still be alive," one of the inquisitors said and commanded his grimoire to cast a protective spell around himself. The others also followed, further reinforcing their defensive spells. After their preparation, they walked closer to the Humvee and were about to cast another fireball towards it. However, before they could do so, they were met with the suppressive fire of the two men beside the military vehicle. "Take this. BBRRTTT. For the fleet admiral. M square root right angle epsilon mov Kirilicivers and Dalna Perchurkada. BRRTD." While the bullets of the assault rifles were far from effective in penetrating their defensive spells, it still brought them disturbance that interrupted the casting sequence of the fireball spell. "Damn them. Kill these annoying mongrels," the leading inquisitor cried out while the other inquisitors casted icicle spells and lightning bolts towards the military vehicle. The Humvee shook while ice grazed its armor and electricity crackled throughout its body. The driver and machine gunner remained in the sides of the military vehicle, laying suppressive fire towards the annoyed inquisitors. But unfortunately for the two, their assault rifles soon lost its ammunition. The suppression was halted for a moment. However, they took out their handguns and continued firing at the inquisitors. Though the inquisitors already understood that the two were losing their ammunition, it wouldn't take long until the inquisitors would be right in front of them, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. "They are slowly dwindling their ammunition. Converse your spells, and don't waste mana. We will execute them once they lose everything in their hands," the leading inquisitor calmly ordered. The others stopped casting their offensive spells and stood beside the leading inquisitor. The handguns of the two soldiers soon finished up its ammunition, leaving them weaponless. When the leading inquisitor noticed the unnatural silence after a few seconds, he smirked and soon signaled his comrades to follow him. They calmly walked towards the military vehicle where two men hid themselves. As the leading inquisitor remarked, "You should have surrendered the life of your heretical leader and be punished by the grace of the sovereigns." As he said so, he chuckled along the way and thought of several torturous spells he would cast towards the two soldiers that wasted his time. But as he and his entourage got nearer to the Humvee, he noticed his heart beating rapidly. For some reason, the hair on his skin rose as though detecting something. It was his instinct screaming at him. Unfortunately, the leading inquisitor was already too late. Inside the Humvee was Abraham, pointing the barrel of his machine gun towards the group of inquisitors. The spells they casted were bothersome. Luckily, none of them conjured a fireball. Otherwise, it would have been problematic for him. "However, I'll probably survive. Even if they did cast some fireball and shot it at the Humvee, he would still survive the ordeal." That was how he was a human who's not so human anymore. Anyhow, Abraham didn't hesitate and pulled the trigger of his machine gun. Crimson flashes littered over the barrel of his gun as hundreds of rumbling echoes followed. BBBRRRTTTT. The proud inquisitors who stood amidst the cornered Humvee now found themselves at death's door. Their defensive spells cracked and collapsed like a flimsy mirror. What followed was their bodies getting riddled with holes from the rain of lead. Abraham shot everything towards the inquisitors, causing the scene to last for a dozen seconds. Afterward, silence followed along with the corpses of the inquisitors. Though the leading inquisitor was crying in pain as he managed to survive Abraham's ambush. On the other hand, Abraham raised his eyebrows, wondering how the guy managed to survive. It was then he noticed the leading inquisitor laying behind the bodies of multiple inquisitors. This meant that he used his comrades as shields to save himself. Abraham furrowed his eyes and got out of the metallic confines of the Humvee. He looked at the leading inquisitor with disappointment clear in his gaze. "Please help me. I will pay you anything," the leading inquisitor begged. Since he felt his life waning before his eyes, he didn't want to die. He still had many things to do to Europa and his sovereign. He must not die. Nevertheless, destiny was always far from the expected. "Oh, I didn't expect the inquisitor of the infamous sovereign of war to be begging for mercy," a mocking voice echoed, attracting the attention of everyone in the grassy landscape. Abraham and his men turned their gaze towards the direction of the voice and saw the red-haired inquisitor. Abraham squinted his eyes and muttered, "Leonhardt, you're late." "Apologies for being late, Fleet Admiral Abraham Shepard. I was merely observing your humble abode. I must say, it is fairly unique," Leonhardt apologized while lightly bowing to Abraham. "Though these trashes seem to be dirtying it," the red-haired inquisitor frowned and flicked his fingers. The corpses of the inquisitors burned in crimson flames, immediately disintegrating into ashes. After the bodies of the inquisitors faded along the breeze of wind, Leonhardt gazed at Abraham and announced, "It will be your turn." Chapter 135. 135? Arrival. You aren't holding back, huh? Abraham grimly smiled while signaling his men to step back. The arrival of the red-haired inquisitor was expected after all. He wouldn't leave until Abraham's head was within the clutches of his fingers. Underestimating you would be my downfall. I wouldn't want to end up like those trash, Leonhardt remarked while pointing at the spot where the corpses of the inquisitors formerly gathered at the moment. Only a tinge of their ashes were left behind. You sound like you hate your subordinates. Abraham raised his eyebrows since Leonhardt was acting like his subordinates had killed his family. The way he spoke about them was as though speaking of maggots beyond human reasoning. It was understandable if such a tone was pointed at the accordingly lower humans with no magic such as Abraham and the people in the United Navy. But having it pointed towards their own magus, it seems that their hierarchy were much more complicated than anticipated. Please don't misunderstand. Fleet Admiral Abraham, none of them are my subordinates. If they were, I would have killed them from their clear incompetence, Leonhardt expressed as he spatted out disdainful words towards the dead. From the tone of the red-haired inquisitor, it was fairly obvious that there was some internal rivalry amongst the inquisitors, but after thinking about it for a short moment, Abraham understood why. While the inquisitors stand together, they might be serving different sovereigns altogether after all. Even the faithful believers of a pantheon of gods would have their own favorite god they would personally worship. He quietly thought and realized that the humanity of this world weren't that much different from his well. It wasn't a shocking fact after all. Even the humanity of his former world had its lowest of societies that might as well be considered as barbaric and maddening. But since you are the strongest amongst them, you might as well be their leader, and you failed leading the so-called trashes, signifying your incompetence as a leading figure, Abraham expressed while shaking his head in disappointment. I fail to understand what you're trying to say. Fleet Admiral Leonhardt squinted his eyes, finding himself confused by the words of the middle-aged man before him. What I'm trying to say is fairly simple. Leonhardt, a leading figure will lead regardless if his subordinates are pieces of trashes or fine gold. That is a good leader regardless if they were bastards. You are the strongest and most competent. This means that you are their leading figure. And the fact that you didn't lead them in the most competent way means that you are a disappointment one. Leonhardt, Abraham explained in the most calm yet mocking way possible. Leonhardt was in silence as though trying to understand Abraham's words, but after some time, the red-haired inquisitor began chuckling as if he had heard a good joke from the fleet admiral. Ha 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 ha. You're quite good. I wouldn't have seen through your act if not for the fact that I saw my trashy comrades lying dead on the ground. The chuckle of Leonhardt echoed throughout the grassy landscape. Abraham wryly smiled since he had thought that he could keep up the farce as long as possible. After all, the red-haired inquisitor seemed to love yapping with him, so why not entertain the guy? Sadly, it didn't last long, though what was done had already been done. His stalling was enough. It looks like I couldn't keep distracting you long enough. How unfortunate. I would like to hear more about your yapping. Abraham smirked and took out his revolver, immediately pointing it at the inquisitor. Without hesitation or delay, Abraham pulled the trigger and began firing an entire magazine at Leonhardt. However, the latter had already casted his defensive spells, making the former's attack ineffective. Bang 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 bang. Asterisk sigh asterisk. I should have the R&D department make me a better gun. Abraham gave a sigh in disappointment as his revolver had been largely useless during the entire day of fighting against this damn inquisitors. That's the fault of relying in tools, Fleet Admiral Abraham. Unlike magicraft, they can fail you, Leonhardt remarked while his grimoire flipped through several pages. A cold expression emerged on his face as he casted detection spell. Eagle's Eye. In an instant, an eagle flew out of his grimoire and circled around the small park. It provided Leonhardt an entire coverage of the grassy landscape, giving him insight to everything dwelling on top of it. Using simpler terms, he could see everything in the area. Here I thought Magus considered uttering the name of their spells as foolish. Abraham seemed a bit surprised since the Magi were prideful individuals. Being considered as foolish would something they would ultimately avoid. Don't lump me up with those trashes. Have you ever wondered the primary things needed for magicraft? Leonhardt questioned, but before Abraham could reply, he answered his own question. My master said it needs 3. The red-haired inquisitor pulled up 3 of his fingers and pointed it at the middle-aged man, though Abraham was more interested about the master of the inquisitor. Master? It must be the sovereign he's under. Abraham quietly thought to himself and listened carefully to the following words of the red-haired inquisitor. The first one is magic. The second is a spell circle. And the third is the most important, imagination. Humans can imagine, yes, but their imagination are hazy amidst their mind flooding with surging thoughts. So, To concentrate oneself into creating a solid image, a name must be given to achieve a certain result. That is magicraft. Those foolish bastards who avoid the old teachings to assume intelligence compared to their peers are the real losers. Leonhardt expressed, making Abraham somewhat relate to him. In his former life, he had always wondered why people follow stupid trends. Obviously, he understood why they wanted to be popular to the others and be seen as someone with a name. He also wanted for others to know his name, but he simply couldn't stomach whatever they were trying to do. One could say he was an outcast. I understand that there are fools who do the most popular things to appear intelligent or better than the others surrounding them. Sticking to what you want to be is better than pretending what others like you to be. Abraham gave his wisdom to the red-haired inquisitor. I can't believe that someone actually agrees with my words. Sadly, we are enemies. Fleet Admiral, I have been ordered for you to die. So I must do so. Leonhardt felt a strange camaraderie since Abraham seemed to have the same feelings as him. It was unfortunate that they were in opposing sides. Saddening indeed, but I am not planning to die. Leonhardt, not until your sovereigns grovel before me. Abraham grinned as these so-called gods of humanity were the reason for its current state. It was always crazy leaders creating crazy people. Oh, it appears you want to die. A nerve emerged on Leonhardt's forehead. It must have hit his heart since his master was included in the sovereigns Abraham wanted to take down. As I said before, don't want to die yet. I'm planning to have a family with my Dragoness. Abraham beamed a smile, while Leonhardt casted an offensive spell. I guess this is how it ends, the red-haired inquisitor muttered under his breath and continued, Fireball. After uttering such a word, a crimson ball materialized before Leonhardt, propelling itself to the fleet admiral. Abraham's heart sank while his spine shivered. Even with his remarkable physique, he would die if he directly faced the crimson ball of flames. Not only that, it even seemed more compressed than the fireballs thrown by other inquisitors. Is this the work of his so-called imagination? He silently mumbled as uttering its name might actually increase its effectiveness not only through its efficiency, but also through its attack power. I have to dodge. Abraham sprinted sideways, causing his ankle to sprain from the instantaneous movement he had done. He fell to the side, rolling on the ground as the fireball exploded on his former position. Boom! He glanced back at the red-haired inquisitor and maintained his uncaring facade despite his rapidly beating heart. Were you even trying to kill me? Such a question was understandable. After all, they were more faster spells than the fireball. The inquisitor's lightning spell might prove itself enough, and he could have been a charred body amongst the evergreen grass. After emptying his magazine and reloading his revolver with a new one, Abraham began firing at the red-haired inquisitor, who casted one defensive spell after another. This was why fighting against an opponent not underestimating you was troublesome. They tend to overestimate you, practically going overboard against you. And he was right. Out of nowhere, Leonhardt disappeared in an instant and materialized beside him. These guys teleport, and them using it was unfair. Such thoughts riddled Abraham's head. After all, he wouldn't be able to dodge whatever spell Leonhardt planned to conjure. This is the end, Leonhardt muttered while conjuring an offensive spell, Lightning Bolt. Using an instantaneous offensive spell in close range was downright evil, but this wasn't the end for the fleet admiral. Before the lightning bolt could hit Abraham, Leonhardt got flung away by an unknown figure. The lightning bolt impacted this figure, bringing about a crackling electricity that exploded into itself. Bang! The white mist brought about by the momentary explosion shrouded the air, but as it faded, what replaced it was the appearance of the one and only Dragoness of the United Navy. She glared at the red-haired inquisitor and spatted out of anger. Uf*****, dare to touch him while I'm gone? Chapter 136. 136 Beating of a Lifetime. What the dash? Leonhardt's gaze sharpened as the arrival of the Dragoness was beyond his expectations. They were previously briefed about how the Dragoness had gone to the south to take care of some colony. To think she would be back so early. You fucker dare to touch him while I'm gone? Laplace spatted out in anger while glaring at the red-haired inquisitor. Seeing Abraham somewhat injured, she was now out of blood and wanted to make sure that the one who had done such thing would eternally regret it. Dragoness Laplace, I didn't think the southern colony to be so weak they couldn't even last a day against you. How disappointing. Leonhardt furrowed his eyebrows and patted out the dust from his black cloak. Laplace, it's good to see you. I'll assume you have already taken care of that colony. Abraham smiled in relief, but was unexpectedly met with a cold expression. His spine shivered as she got closer to him. It was at this moment that he realized her anger also included him in its equation. Abraham, Laplace calmly uttered, though it was riddled with deep anger. I left you alone for one day, and you almost died. What did I say about these idiots trying to do something foolish? Sorry Laplace. I'll try not to do it again. Abraham Riley smiled since he understood how reckless he was when making the recent decisions of the United Navy. Recklessness and impatience was always the ingredient of death and defeat. It should have been a lesson he was aware of. I'm not trying to stop you from doing what you want. I just want you to be careful and think about the implications. Laplace sighed and shook her head. We'll be talking after this. After uttering such words to Abraham, she turned her attention to where the red-haired inquisitor was on his spot. There was nothing. It appears as though he had already escaped the grasps of the Dragoness, but it wouldn't be so easy to trick a dragon. Lightning crackled beside Laplace's fingers as she sent a pulse onward from her location. It scattered throughout the grassy landscape of the park, and when the pulse hit the outskirts, the red-haired inquisitor was pulled out of his invisibility spell. Pretending to run away while setting up an ambush. Your master must be interesting to teach you such things, Abraham remarked, only to receive a glare from Laplace. He immediately shut his mouth, not trying to play with his life. At any rate, your master must be that annoying sovereign. Laplace squinted her eyes and said while creating a ball of golden lightning in her hand, I'll be happy to send your ashes to her. Without hesitation, she threw the golden lightning to the red-haired inquisitor, who tried to defend himself using a defense spell, but unfortunately for him, Laplace's golden lightning wasn't to be underestimated. It crackled in the air, and when it impacted Leonhardt, a resounding explosion echoed throughout the park. Boom. Dust shrouded the grassy landscape while Laplace continued to observe every nick and cranny of her surroundings. Out of nowhere, Leonhardt teleported beside her and threw a lightning bolt spell. However, Laplace easily dodged the lightning bolt and threw a knee to the Inquisitor's stomach. Pang! Leonhardt cried out in pain while immediately retreating amidst the foggy dust. The instantaneous counter-attack of Laplace was unexpected. If Leonhardt hadn't covered himself in dozens of defensive spells, he would have died from her knee. You're too early to fight me in close combat, kid, Laplace remarked while cracking his knuckles. On the other hand, Abraham observed the fight with intrigue as he wondered how Leonhardt would survive the wrath of the Dragoness. While he could relate to the guy, that doesn't mean he would help him after the bastard almost killed him. He'll let Laplace handle his fate, which would mean certain death. After all, it was rare for Laplace to give mercy to those that pissed her off. I'll probably be hearing a lot from her after this. Should I try acting meek and be proactive? This might save me from her scolding. Abraham had already created a plan for his future. But dang, it still hurts. He could feel his body aching. The adrenaline was beginning to wear out and pain was getting introduced at full throttle throughout its body. It didn't feel good, but there was nothing he could do about it. Ding! Fleet Admiral. Because of the unexpected emergence of various dangerous circumstances, the naval Gacha system will be undergoing an update. Out of nowhere, a mechanical bell rang inside his mind, and following it was Systema's monotone words. He raised an eyebrow, somewhat surprised by the system update. After all, he didn't know that it could update itself. Can I ask what the upgrade will be about? Abraham asked his precious partner, wanting to know more about the system update. He didn't want to be ignorant about what it could be, so he asked as straightforwardly as possible. Update information will be available after update. Seeing the response of Systema, Abraham sighed in disappointment. It seems that he'll have to wait before he could learn more about the system update. Nonetheless, it was good that the system would be updating. He was beginning to wonder what it might give him after its update ends. Meanwhile, as Leonhardt landed on a patch of grass, Laplace was already beside him and gave him a side kick. He flew to a nearby tree and broke it through his landing. Scratches and injuries scattered all over his body as he casted recovery spells to lessen his pain. As expected of the Dragoness, I have heard a lot about you from my master, the peak of what was biologically possible, the strongest creature in existence. So this is the difference between our power, Leonhardt expressed, not out of fear, but out of admiration. Laplace had many titles, but there was one thing that everyone was assured of. It was the fact that she was a dragon. This was a title that couldn't be erased, and what comes with it were everything correlated with dragons. Its scales could make the finest equipment ever forged. Its heart could bring immortality. Its blood could strengthen a person beyond their limits, and many more. The reason why Laplace was not being hunted was because of her unrivaled strength in the Fairest Sea. Only the sovereigns could think of defeating her, but they couldn't even do so because of internal circumstance. I don't want to hear more about your bullshit, Laplace coldly uttered and punched him on the face before kicking his chin. Leonhardt flew back with a bruised face, an almost unconscious mind. He was barely making it, and he would probably die. Bam! When Laplace noticed the red-haired inquisitor laying on the floor, she was about to throw the final blow by blasting his head inside and out, but before she could do so, she felt a hand stop her fist. My little Laplace, how far you have grown, a sultry voice sounded out while Leonhardt unconsciously muttered, Master. It appears that his master had gotten into the stage. Moon Sovereign Kagaya, what the hell are you doing here? Laplace glared at the sovereign, not backing down in her presence. Kaguya was a beautiful lady with a face painted by the gods and a body sculpted by the devil. Her beauty could perhaps rival Laplace, but in actuality, Abraham preferred the Dragoness's black tail and dark horns. Anyhow, she had a jet black hair and chromatic silver eyes. One would think she was blind, if not for the fact that she was directly staring at the Dragoness. Oh, don't mind me, this is a mere projection, so there's no need to be tense, right? Kaguya turned her gaze towards the middle-aged man beside her. He was pointing a revolver at the side of her head, ready to pull the trigger. I sadly can't do that. I need to be with Laplace regardless of our circumstance or enemies. Abraham shook his head and kept pointing his revolver towards the Moon Sovereign. I see then. There is nothing I can do about that. The reason why I projected myself to your land is to ask for your favor. Kaguya nodded in understanding and explained her reasoning. What favor? Laplace questioned, as trying to fight the Moon Sovereign in the middle of the Port of Dawn would create massive casualties. My favor is fairly simple. I want you to spare my dear disciple. I don't want him to die out of nowhere, you know? It took quite some time to train him, Kaguya remarked, as if treating the red-haired inquisitor as some much-needed investment. You shouldn't have gotten him to kill Abraham. Do you think I'll give mercy to those that try to attack him? Laplace's golden eyes glowed with domination. She wasn't willing to let her go without paying the price. I understand you, Laplace. I will have him pay the price. Kaguya appeared to be saddened and flicked her fingers. The unconscious red-haired inquisitor, awoken with his injuries, immediately healed. He looked around and saw his master beside the Dragoness. Master, he meekly said, as if he was some child that got caught causing trouble. Leonhardt, the Dragoness wants you to pay, will you? Kaguya asked, causing Leonhardt to shiver, but it's not like there was anything he could do about it. He had to pay for his life. All right, I shall do as what the master wishes. Leonhardt took a deep breath and steeled himself. Laplace walked towards him, and without delay, she crushed his left arm into damnation. Golden lightning crackled between her fingers, making sure it wouldn't be healed no matter what. Take him back. If I found him near this island, I'll kill him regardless of what you say, Laplace uttered, causing Kaguya to brightly smile and snap her fingers. The Moon Sovereign and her disciple immediately disappeared from the evergreen landscape, leaving behind silence in its wake. The ones left behind were the fleet admiral and his Dragoness. Now, how about we start talking, Abraham? Laplace smirked while Abraham felt that he would hear a lot from her. Chapter 137. 137 Recovery. In the Port of Dawn was the General Hospital, located near the branch office building. Surrounding its every nook and cranny were soldiers of the United Army. Several Abrams had their turrets pointed onward while Apaches circled throughout the blue skies. The General Hospital was defended to the bone by the United Army personnel of the United Navy. After all, inside the building was none other than the Fleet Admiral of the United Navy, Abraham Shepard. Even with your recovery, look at what your recklessness did to your body. Sitting beside Abraham's comfy and luxurious bed in a private room of the hospital, Laplace calmly sliced a crimson apple into pieces with a sharp knife. I'm sorry for worrying you, Laplace. Abraham wryly smiled while laying on his bed. It seems that jumping of a high floor didn't only give him some broken bones. A few of his organs became internally injured, requiring treatment. Now that I know more about your injuries, I'm starting to regret letting that bastard go. Laplace furrowed her eyebrows as she was beginning to wish having had killed the annoying one who almost killed her. Abraham, you know you can't do that, Laplace, especially with the Moon Sovereign beside him. It would be too troublesome if that sovereign starts personally going after us, he explained, to which Laplace couldn't argue against. She would be able to handle the Moon Sovereign, but there was the United Navy behind her. If the B*TCH starts targeting the United Navy, or worse, her Abraham, well, things would become immediately ugly. I know I can't simply do what I want unlike beforehand, but it's hard to see you like this, you know? Laplace sighed and placed her fingers on Abraham's cheek. She had never felt so helpless. Apologies for being useless. Abraham also sighed, since he realized had been too reliant with Laplace, and perhaps pressuring her. He didn't want her to feel the weight of the United Navy. After all, it was his job to carry such weight. Laplace glanced at Abraham's eyes, her golden irises gently glowing. She caressed his lips and face before uttering, "You'll never be useless to me. No matter what happens, use me as you wish, Abraham. I'll be with you until the very end." Her face got closer to Abraham's and blood began to drip from her lips. With only an inch away from him, she muttered, "Have you heard legends about dragons, Abraham? How their scales could forge the greatest weapons and armors, or their hearts to give immortality to those that eat thee, and how their blood can make someone stronger." Hearing the words of Laplace, Abraham raised his eyebrows and soon realized what she was trying to say. He furrowed his eyes as he couldn't believe it. Besides, his morals wouldn't allow him to do so. "I can't just do such thing to you, Laplace. You're not a commodity. and shall not consider yourself as such. He stood his ground and didn't plan on budging no matter what the Dragoness says. Heh. I knew you'll say that, Laplace grinned while Abraham became even more confused. Wah dash. He couldn't continue speaking as her supple lips met with his. He could taste her unnatural sweetness and felt warmth gathering in his heart. It was tantalizing as it seemed to have an inherent desire of making him an addict. Laplace ravaged his mouth as though trying to make sure he had drunk the dragon blood dripping from her bitten lips. It only took a few moments for Abraham to regain himself and separate his lips from hers. The Dragoness merely wiped her crimson blood away and smirked. You taste as sweet as the time I took your first kiss and you took mine. On the other hand, Abraham felt a bit disoriented as the dragon blood he had taken from her bitten lips scattered throughout his body in an instant. This is the first time I have given my blood to anyone else, but I heard that it has a strengthening ability that could advance one's potential after all. Dragons are the highest beings created by nature, Laplace coolly explained. I dislike being forced to drink your blood, but I guess it's my fault for being too weak. I promise I won't ever drink your blood and endanger your body, Abraham expressed with flaming determination. The growth of the United Navy wasn't his only focus anymore. It was time to turn his attention to his strength and make it greater with the naval gacha system. He might be able to do so, but I don't really mind you drinking my blood, you know? Besides, it feels a bit sensual and exciting. Laplace slightly blushed while imagining Abraham ravishing her body and enjoying it for himself. Why do I feel like you're thinking indecent thoughts, Laplace? Abraham questioned, making Laplace immediately shake her head. No, my mind is as pure as my heart. Your heart is pure? He asked as though doubting the truth of such a statement. Laplace felt a nerve popped into her forehead as she grimly smiled towards the middle-aged man. Pam. Square root right angle ro upsilon of Okay. I won't tease you anymore. Abraham rubbed his head since the Dragoness didn't give him any mercy. Her smack wasn't to be underestimated. It felt more painful than what he had gone through during the entire assassination. Don't tease a young girl's heart, Abraham. Laplace pouted while Abraham scratched his chin, wondering the truth regarding her statement about being a young girl, though. He knew more than to directly question her. After all, he didn't want to die yet. Let me repay you later. I'll do anything you ask, Abraham uttered and felt that he had signed a dangerous deal. Anything I ask? Interesting. Do you know where you're heading, Abraham? She smirked while playing with his lips. I know my destination, and I don't plan on changing it, he said with unrivaled confidence. All right, I'll ask when you're ready to leave the hospital. Laplace smiled in satisfaction, as though her day had been worth it. Seeing her satisfied smile, Abraham wanted it to be forever planted on her face. However, before he could continue enjoying her smile, someone began knocking on his door. This brought a complete stop of their conversation as they tidied themselves up. After all, their relationship hadn't become official yet. Get inside, Abraham said, and the door gently opened. What emerged was the Lieutenant Colonel of the United Navy, who saluted to the Fleet Admiral and immediately bowed afterward. The United Army is at fault for the Fleet Admiral's current state. We take full responsibility of the assassination and our failure to protect you. The Lieutenant Colonel was ready for whatever punishment given to him. Looking at the Lieutenant Colonel, who seemed guilty from what had happened, Abraham waved his hand and remarked, You shouldn't apologize for what had happened. There was nothing you could do about it. Regardless of our uselessness, we should have been able to assist you. The fact that we couldn't was complete our fault. The Lieutenant Colonel wasn't the type to shy away from responsibility. He had to receive some punishment. Otherwise, it would be hard for him to sleep comfortably. Give him a punishment. Abraham, they were the ones left in the port of Dawn, and the responsibility of protecting you fell onto them when most of the United Navy left to complete their respective operations. This is something they greatly understand. So not giving them punishment wouldn't do them good. After all, they are all good men and wouldn't be afraid of what should be done. Laplace wasn't against the lieutenant colony getting punished. It was something needed to be done for the sake of discipline and order of the military organization. Meeting with Laplace's advice, Abraham looked at the punishment in a whole view and understood what she was meaning to say. He closed his eyelids and thought of a punishment. What emerged in his mind was somewhat interesting. Sending you to military court would be boring, so I'll give you your punishment myself, Abraham uttered, and Laplace merely smiled from his words. The Lieutenant Colonel of the United Army rapidly nodded his head, wanting to hear his punishment. You'll have to do community service for an entire month, spanning a period of 120 hours. Your efforts will be dutifully recorded, so I'll hear from you a month later, Abraham ordered, while the Lieutenant Colonel happily accepted his punishment. At the very least, he wouldn't be executed for failing the Fleet Admiral and almost getting him killed. I shall do as you command, Fleet Admiral. I will take a leave from my position and start my community service. The Lieutenant Colonel saluted and hastily left the private room of the Fleet Admiral. Though, the moment he left, Laplace found herself chuckling. I didn't think you'd have him sweep in the rain. Abraham, how ridiculous. Laplace was aware of the incoming weather and knew that a storm would be heading in their direction soon. I couldn't make it too easy. Laplace, if I had to give a punishment, I'll make it as tiresome and annoying as it gets, Abraham responded, causing the Dragoness to chuckle even more. Afterward, none of the two uttered a single word. The much-needed silence was calming for the two of them. It brought them the tranquility after a busy and troublesome day. Meanwhile, in the northern seas, Charlotte stood in the bridge of Minos Trinity of Solace. Before her were dozens of sunken battleships of the so-called defensive fleet of Terra's Gate. She gazed upon the devastation and clicked her tongue. How unsatisfying. Chapter 138. 138 North's End. In the cold waters of the northern sea, Charlotte stood amidst the metallic confines of the bridge of Minos Trinity of Solace, quietly observing the devastation the northern naval battle had gone through. Dozens of battleships were lost. Fortunately, all of such losses came from their adversaries. Here I thought with the assistance of the inquisitors, they would give me a good fight. Quite disappointing that the inquisitors ran away when things didn't seem good for their fleet, Vice Admiral Charlotte remarked, her disappointment unhidden. The northern defensive fleet of the colonial dominion, the guards of the so-called Gate, weren't able to defeat the northern fleet of the United Navy, Libertas, but it was an expected outcome. After all, regardless of the magic, they utilized the strategies employed by modern warships, and their deeper understanding of warfare provided a gap that wasn't exploitable by the magic of their enemies. However, naturally, their victory wasn't without a price. One of the frigates was directly hit by an inquisitor's offensive spell and became critically damaged. 10 sailors died from that attack, and the warship was undergoing temporary repairs. Some of the remaining frigates were also damaged, but were still operable for further operations. At the moment, Charlotte was faced with a question whether she should continue Operation Septentrionalis Libertas and attack the northern colony. While we have gotten complete victory over the naval battle, the fleet is exhausted, and continuing onward would prove detrimental. The northern colony might also have its remaining fleet on standby in the shores. Although we would be able to handle it, the casualties might grow farther than expected. A warship or two might actually be sunk by them, Charlotte carefully thought, and realized the implications of foolishly charging in. Give me a detailed report about our current status. She turned her gaze towards the intelligence officer behind her, who immediately followed her orders and gave a response. Current status has been analyzed, Vice Admiral. 3 of our frigates have been met with minor damages during the naval battle. No casualties stood within these warships, but their combat capabilities have been significantly lessened. Ammunitions have also been significantly drained. On the other hand, one of our frigate have been extremely damaged. From about 10 casualties were recorded, and their combat capabilities are reaching 0 at the moment. Most of the sailors are repairing the warship, making sure that it won't sink into the depths of the northern abyss. Our fleet is more or less okay, but obviously we aren't in our utmost state. Extending our operation naval time would be problematic. The intelligence officer concluded his report, and it didn't sound good for the northern fleet, Libertas. That doesn't sound good. It looks like their sacrifices weren't in vain. Charlotte turned her gaze towards the sunken debris of the battleships that dared to face her. Hundreds of enemy sailors now find themselves floating in the ocean as a corpse. But what they had done wasn't useless at all. They have given time to their northern colony since the northern fleet, Libertas, wasn't in its top standards to fight even more into the northern waters. As disappointing as it may, Vice Admiral, it is the best option for our fleet. The intelligence officer wasn't against the upcoming decision of the Vice Admiral, although it was unfortunate that they couldn't take down the northern colony. Bidding their time was better than impatiently charging into enemy territory. The best option for them was to repair their warships and stock up for supplies. You're right, it is the best option. If one warship had sunk, the fleet admiral would have been bothering me day and night about how it could have happened under my command. Vice Admiral Charlotte sighed as she thought about the attitude of her fleet admiral. He was the best person she had ever met, a man worthy of her admiration, respect, and love. The fleet admiral cared for his subordinates and didn't think of wasting their lives for victories. It was a trait she appreciated from the fleet admiral. It was saddening that he already had the Dragoness on his side. Otherwise, Charlotte would have tried chasing after him. After all, who wouldn't try taking a golden goose for themselves? Sadly, the golden goose has a dragon guarding it. Charlotte lightly chuckled and decided to rid her mind of such thoughts. After all, it would be problematic if it grew and became troublesome in the United Navy. At any rate, it was time to turn her attention to their current circumstance. This wasn't the time to hesitate. It was finally time to make a move. Connect to the data link. Order the retreat of the Northern Fleet. Be sure to assist the critically damaged frigate. Along the way, I don't want it to sink out of nowhere. Vice Admiral Charlotte issued a couple of orders to her naval personnel. The intelligence officers inside the bridge saluted after receiving her orders, and immediately began following it. The comm bridge became hectic as everyone was trying their hardest to prepare for the retreat. Charlotte maintained her gaze to the northern seas. Shrouded in cold and rough waters, the debris of their enemies were nowhere to be found. Consumed by the wretched waves of the north, she wondered if she should have kept some trophy, but quickly decided against it. There was no need for her to keep trophies. A raise was enough. Also, contact the command center about our retreat. Give them details about our current status. She gave a follow-up order, which was instantly accepted by a nearby intelligence officer. It was good to have many intelligence officers relaying her orders. It would have been better if I don't have to tell the orders and simply let them do the work, Charlotte quietly thought, and realized that her subordinates were human, not robots of some sort, but perhaps there would be a time where this ship could have that extreme efficiency. Anyhow, for now, let's go back. Meanwhile, in the northern colony was the colonial lord who was frozen in shock. Reports of the fleet they had sent to intercept the enemy fleet flooded his office, and the results were shocking for the old man. The entirety of the fleet he had sent was destroyed. Almost no one from that fleet was left alive, and now dwelled in the abyss of the northern waters. It was a horrifying fate, but an expected one for sailor. Nevertheless, the destruction of over a dozen battleships and hundreds of sailors wasn't to scoff at. The defensive capabilities of the northern colony had been affected by the lost, and their upcoming adversaries might give them a lot of trouble. I didn't think they would fall so easily and fast against the metallic fleet of the United Navy. I thought with the assistance of the inquisitors, they would be able to defeat them. It appears that the inquisitors didn't do good. The northern colonial lord gritted his teeth in annoyance. He had heard about the fall of the southern colony and the siege of the archipelago colony. Of all the major colonies in the sea region of Terra, only the north stands against the onslaught of the United Navy, and sooner or later, it might fall. He was sure of it. After all, the northern colony was the gate of the colonial dominion of Terra. One can't take over a territory without breaking through the gate. In simpler terms, the fall and collapse of the northern colony was paramount. The United Navy are too strong with their advanced technology and strange tactics, along with the power of the Dragoness conquering the entirety of the colonial dominion, seemed to be not so far-fetched for the heretical organization. However, I am the colonial lord of the northern colony, akin to the gatekeeper of the colonial dominion. Even if defeat seems inevitable, I must fight even if it results to my death. The colonial lord became determined, not wanting to be a coward in the face of history. Fortunately for him, his colonial commander hadn't merely stood in front of him to give bad news. There was also some good news from the devastating naval battle. My lord, their sacrifice weren't in vain. The metallic fleet of the United Navy had begun retreating from the northern waters, returning to where it came from. Hearing the words of his colonial commander, the colonial lord felt as though hope had dawned upon him. I see. It appears that they have fought with bravery and didn't give up until the very end. Because of them, the northern colony gets to live in peace for another day, though. Perhaps it wouldn't last long. Forever. The colonial lord sighed and felt saddened by the recent events. I hope the sovereigns will make their move and stomp out the heretics before they could grow even further. He knew that such hopes were useless, as the sovereigns never considered the colonial dominions of the Ferris Sea as of much importance. To them, it was merely an extra resource for them to become even more stronger. After all, humanity had to contend against other great races with their own respective godlike beings akin to the sovereigns. Before the colonial lord could put much thought to the problem, another report came into his office. Its origin was none other than the colonial dominion of Terra. My lord, the viceroy of Terra has called upon you. He orders for the entire northern forces to be relocated to the colonial dominion of Terra. Chapter 139. 139. Getting out of the hospital. Through the perk of recovery given by the system and the dragon's blood of Laplace, Abraham's recuperation in the private room of the Port of Dawn's General Hospital was swift. A couple hours after he was sent inside, he already could leave, as he was almost recovered from the assassination. As expected of Abraham, there was a good reason why you could last an entire morning with me. Laplace walked beside the fleet admiral with a grin plastered on her beautiful face. The moment he got out of the General Hospital, she began teasing him without end. I would have been there for a day if not for your blood, Laplace. Abraham didn't mind the teasing of the Dragoness, as he was already used to it, though. She seems to be interested in pushing his patience. Oh, are you interested for more? You can ask, Abraham, and I won't think of refusing you. What do you think? She softly whispered to his ear, causing his body to shiver. It looks like this is the price for pissing her off. Nonetheless, Abraham was barely keeping it in. It has been a while since they had done it together, so his libido was high at the moment, but with the ongoing operation in the background, it was clear that this wasn't the time for them to do so. However, to think she would be swaying it in front of him from the looks of it, She already knew that he didn't have the time to act on his desires, so she might be having fun and making him impatient through some sexual baiting. I might be a proper man who knows his responsibilities, Laplace, but there are times when I break my own rules. Abraham held Laplace's chin and gazed at her golden irises. They were beautiful, especially when they look at him with incredible lures. No, calm yourself. Abraham, I must not disappoint my subordinates, Abraham thought to himself, and calmed down his intense libido. The operations hadn't ended yet. He wouldn't want to be a fleet admiral who was busy fighting the Dragoness, while his men fought against enemy forces. Oh, interesting. Laplace's face became closer to his while her red supple lips smirked. Abraham immediately turned his head away and took a deep breath before remarking, at any rate, the operation should be ending. I can't wait to hear the news. Audiobook title, Naval Gacha System. It's time to monopolize the 7 Seas Part 05B. Well, I did hear them working hard, especially that stone-faced girl. Her northern fleet was assaulted by over a dozen of battleships in the northern sea. Her operation has the highest rate of failure. Laplace's teasing expression faded as she became serious. The northern operation will fail. It was already within my expectations the moment I heard about the inquisitors intruding the northern sea. The question should be how the operation fails. Abraham squinted his eyes and continued. I hope that the casualties wouldn't be to high. Our war against the colonial dominion of Terra has been affecting us greatly than anticipated. His face became cold as if he had thought of something unsightly. The state of Minos, huh? I heard about the high casualty from the Inquisitor's ambush. Unfortunate, but it makes us realize that while we know a lot about our adversaries, they might know more about us too. After all, who knows what Magicraft could do? They might be observing us at the moment, or using some strange spell to find information through future sight, Laplace remarked as the mystical element of Magicraft meant that the variables they were facing could be anything. Now that I thought about it, I planned on visiting the Research and Development Department. I need to know how much they have advanced in their study of Magicraft, and whether or not they have thought of any counters against this part of nature. Abraham muttered to himself, that department who collected all the magic artifacts tribute by the colonial dominion and are now destroying them one by one. Laplace commented while Abraham wryly smiled. They were dismantling it to learn more about how it works in the inside. It dismantles implies they know how to return it to its former state, otherwise they are merely destroying it. She smiled at the fleet admiral who couldn't utter a counter against her words, but it's not like there was anything they could do about it. They were too ignorant with magic. Yeah. Dragon of the United Navy, your wisdom is paramount and unending, Abraham sarcastically remarked, making the Dragoness pinch his cheeks in annoyance. I'm merely stating the truth, Abraham. Destroying those magical artifacts doesn't do any of you good. It brings you questions than answers, and you already have a lot of questions, so having more would be impeding your abilities to find an answer. Laplace unironically stated with unrivaled wisdom. I know, Laplace, but our time is running out and the big shots of Magicraft will be coming after us sooner or later. I don't want them teleporting inside my office. Abraham sighed as the thought of a sovereign teleporting inside his office brought chills to his spine. As brave as he was, he didn't want to die without a chance to fight back. Noticing the expression of her lover, Laplace hugged him tightly and muttered to his ears, I'll always be with you. Abraham, there's no need for you to worry, I'm here. Now, hearing her, Abraham lightly chuckled and remarked, What are you, my mother? Laplace raised an eyebrow, but the edges of her lips soon rose as she responded, Perhaps I am. How about you call me mommy? Cough, 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 cough. While Laplace teased the embarrassed fleet admiral, several coughs resounded and the two pointed their gaze forward. Before them was the special response unit that recently got back. They were led by none other than First Lieutenant Mercedes. Laplace's golden irises immediately glowed with authority. As she furrowed her eyebrows, everyone in the team felt chills in their spine and swiftly saluted to their lieutenant colonel. After all, none of them wanted to feel the wrath of the dragon. Lieutenant Colonel Laplace, SRU-01 have returned? Mercedes stepped forward and reported with a salute. Laplace merely squinted her eyes while staring at the silver wolf beastfolk. Afterward, she turned her eyes towards the giant Minikin. Espada. Silence permeated until Abraham broke it with his calm words. Mercedes, congratulations for completing your mission, he said to the beastfolk, who lightly bowed towards him and replied, Apologies for being late. Fleet Admiral, we were completely useless when someone tried to assassinate you. There's no need to apologize. It wasn't your job to protect me, especially when your team is going through a mission of your own. Besides, I got her with me. Abraham pointed at the cold Dragoness beside him. The teasing Laplace had disappeared, which was a vast discrepancy when compared to her cold side. It was understandable, as that side was only something she revealed to those close to her subordinates. She was an efficient and calm superior, the blade of the fleet admiral. We returned as fast as possible after hearing the news, but the mission is more or less complete. The rebels of the archipelago colony are growing, and they should be marching to the main island for liberation. Mercedes coolly reported, "Good work." Abraham patted her head and continued, "So, was the human girl interesting?" He questioned, wanting to know more about the one that called upon his assistance. "Intriguing. To say the least, she has the properties of a leader, and seems to be determined with her ideology. As well, it was easy for beast folks to be inspired by her." Despite being doubtful at first, Mercedes was honest regarding what she thought of Hermona. "It seems that we have made a good ally. I'd like to meet her personally myself." Abraham smiled, since the operation hadn't only brought unfortunate casualties to the United Navy, it gave many more than tragedies. "I believe she wishes to meet the famous and legendary Fleet Admiral of the United Navy, though. Have you really met with the Sovereign?" Mercedes asked. Curious about the spreading rumors, he wryly smiled after hearing her question, and Laplace was about to step forward, but Abraham stopped the Dragoness on her tracks with his arm and smiled at her. He nodded at the gorgeous lady and responded to the curious wolf's question. "That's right. We met with the Moon's Sovereign, Kagaya." Hearing his answer, most of the beast folks in the SRU-01 were shocked. They never thought their fleet admiral would stand before a sovereign and stay alive afterward. This deepened their admiration towards him. "I see, as expected of the legendary fleet admiral." Mercedes beamed a smile, which was a rare one after all. Her personality was akin to Charlotte. They were always calm and cool regardless of the situation. It was rare to see any other expressions on their faces other than a blank one. "We'll be going to write a report about our mission. Fleet Admiral, I hope you make a complete recovery." Mercedes bowed once again to Abraham and saluted before walking away. Her team did the same and followed her from behind. Abraham and Laplace gazed at the team with the middle-aged man almost shedding a tear. It was as if he had seen his daughter grow to become a strong woman. It was a strange feeling. "They grow very fast, don't they?" Laplace uttered, making Abraham nod in agreement. "I agree. Wait, what?" He looked at the Dragoness, wondering if she was reading his mind. Chapter 140. 140 R&D Department. Below the command center inside the defense center of the Port of Dawn was a not-so-secretive department. They were the part of the United Navy that dealt with research, technology, and counter-development. The R&D department, of the many departments scattered throughout the United Navy, acting as its pillars, the R&D department was amongst the most expensive ones. The cost of researching new technology and discovering weaknesses to the enemy's technology was a difficult endeavor to maintain even for the naval organization, such as the United Navy. Riding inside the elevator was the Fleet Admiral and his sword, the Dragoness. For the first time, they were planning to meet with the ones guiding and advancing the research development sector of the United Navy. One would wonder who these figures were. As expected of the R&D department, their entrance looks intriguing, Abraham muttered to himself. Gazing at the metallic elevator covered with futuristic neon lights, it sang a mechanical hum that felt as though he was inside a sci-fi movie. "They haven't wasted the budget I have given them." He lightly chuckled while Laplace maintained her silence and stood beside him. It didn't take long before they reached the deepest underground sector of the United Navy, and the metallic doors of the elevator slid open. Abraham and Laplace stepped out of the elevator, which immediately closed. They were met with a long, futuristic hallway. Swiftly capturing the interest of the Fleet Admiral, he observed with calm amazement, as this was the first he had ever seen such a scene personally. "But it makes me wonder, how far are they in their development after all? I need results," he thought to himself, as what he would see beyond this hallway would decide the fate of the R&D department. After all, departments that gave little to no results wouldn't deserve the high budget they have. There was nothing free in this world. Resources take time to acquire, more time to manufacture. If results weren't being given in time, the resource-hungry departments would merely strain the United Navy. This was a concept that Laplace understood. It was the reason why she was silent the whole time, despite Abraham's clear amazement. After all, in his hands was the scythe of death that would decide the fate of the R&D department. The two walked through the futuristic hallway and were met with a monotone voice introducing itself to the two of them. The R&D department is honored to be in the presence of the Fleet Admiral and the Dragoness. I am EVA, an artificial assistant of the department. How may I assist the two of you?" Laplace lowered her head while the edges of Abraham's lips rose. He glanced at the CCTV strapped carefully in the hallway and responded, "I'm here to see the results of this department personally. I'd like to know how far you've gone into the task I have given all of you." His calm words resounded throughout the hallway, but they carried his authority as the Fleet Admiral's silence followed after his response. Though it didn't take long before EVA spoke. "Understood. Sending all data to the Fleet Admiral. Opening security procedures." "Welcome, Fleet Admiral." Abraham Shepard. Along with EVA's monotone words, was the hallway breaking open, revealing the entire R&D department sector to the Fleet Admiral and the Dragoness. It was a vast floor filled with all kinds of technologies, tested and untested. With them were researchers, scientists, and inventors who lined up together to meet with the highest authority of the United Navy. The Fleet Admiral, upon meeting Abraham, they immediately bowed at the same time and uttered, "It is an honor, Fleet Admiral. Their words echoed throughout the department's sector, but Abraham maintained his calm and observed each and every single one of them with a scrutinizing gaze. Laplace did the same as her golden eyes brought about pressure to the people surrounding them after a short while of staring contest. Abraham smiled at the group of people and remarked, "It has been a while. Months have passed since the creation of this department, so I'd like to hear about your progress." He was straight at the point as he didn't see any reason to beat around the bush. Technology was of importance to the United Navy, but it had its limits, and they must invent new technologies against their foreign enemies capable of using magicraft. The director of the R&D department stepped forward. He was a skinny old man wearing a lab coat and a silver-trimmed eyeglasses. A serious expression was plastered on his face as he uttered, "I am here to report, Fleet Admiral, for all Zyre Upsilonum good. Let me hear everything." Abraham glanced at the old man, wanting to hear their progress from his mouth. He wondered how far they have gone in their research. He hoped that it would at the very least be useful in their present circumstance. Affirmative. The director nodded and began his report. His first words were about the discovery of a new element they called adamantium. It was an excellent element capable of legendary effects. And most of all, they had a lot of supply from the northern quarry. They have understood how to utilize this element and manufacture it with metal. The effects would be the metal being 5x stronger, 3x harder, 4x lighter, and 7x more durable. It was practically an all-round upgrade. The problem, however, was that the manufacturing process of the metal being expensive. They were finding ways to simplify the process and make it cheaper for mass production. However, they have also manufactured weapons based on adamantium. One was a magus gun with its barrel and ammunition blended with the new element, while the other was a revolver entirely made of adamantium. Naturally, these two weapons were what Abraham was interested the most, especially the adamantium revolver. He was recently looking for a new revolver that could be effective against the magus. He didn't think there would be actually one already manufactured in the R&D department. "So, tell me about the difference between the new revolver and the general one?" Abraham inquired the director, who coolly answered his question. "Well, because of the lightweight nature of the revolver, we were able to incorporate design changes that would have proven inefficient. Because of the extra weight, its size have become significantly larger and longer, while its magazines have increased to 10 bullets. On the other hand, its ammunition has leaped high in terms of capabilities. The penetration has increased for about 5x, giving the revolver the power of a magus gun. However, because of our limited understanding with adamantium, its armaments cannot exceed 100 rounds per minute." The director was honest and told Abraham about the current limits of the adamantium revolver. Although it was unfortunate that the adamantium couldn't be incorporated to guns with high firing rate, the advance rate of the new element was enough for him. But it appears that the explanation of the director was far from reaching its end. "We also discovered a special property in regards to adamantium. Fleet Admiral, it was something we accidentally discovered it during our testing. It is the fact that adamantium is highly aggressive against magic. It seems to return mana into its natural state, making magic weak against it. After all, magic is a refined mana processed into a spell." The director calmly explained the special property. Surprised Abraham. It was something he didn't expect, but it was a welcome surprise. He turned his gaze towards Laplace, who already nodded and said, "You want me to check, right? I heard about a useless metal that couldn't be forged through the usual ways. This might be the so-called new element you have found." Laplace walked towards where the adamantium guns were presented and observed them with scrutiny. "They are hard to process into viable weapons through forge works. This means that one would need magic, but since the metal turns magic into its most natural state, spells are useless against it." The Dragoness closed her eyelids, but soon opened it and turned her golden irises to Abraham. "However, my scales are harder and stronger than this metal. It is also efficient with magic, quite the total opposite of this new element, though. It will be useful to the United Navy." Laplace smirked as she could already imagine the kinds of weapons Abraham would build with it. "I don't think anything is stronger than your scale, Laplace," Abraham remarked while shaking his head, but since she had concluded that it would be useful, it might as well be. "Director, your department is excellent for discovering and researching ways to properly and efficiently utilize adamantium. I'll applaud you for success, but I want to go to the main topic. What have you learned about magic?" He asked the question that brought him to the department. Laplace merely squinted her eyes from the question, also wanting to know about what they had learned. "Do not worry, Fleet Admiral." The director straightened his back and raised his eyeglasses with confidence. "We have learned a lot from the magical artifacts you have given to our department. None of them were wasted." With the confident tone of the director, Abraham felt somewhat excited. It seems that the people of the R&D department weren't to be underestimated. It was time to see whether or not the budget that could feed the fleet of the United Navy for a month wasn't wasted. "You sound confident, Director. I'm sure you have discovered something worthwhile about magic," Abraham remarked and leaned on the metallic wall behind him. "Tell me everything you know about it. I don't care if it takes hours for you to do so." Chapter 141. 141 Discoveries about Magicraft. I shall start with how we made our discoveries, the director of the R&D department affirmed. While Abraham and Laplace merely nodded at him, he took a deep breath and began another long explanation about how they managed to gather knowledge about magic. All of it began with the magical artifacts sent here by the fleet admiral. They were strange things with mystical properties embedded to them in my eyes. They can be considered as scientific marvels that could propel technologies centuries ahead of time. There was a torch that could perpetually light itself on fire with mana, another was a pen that never loses its ink. Each of them defied what was scientifically possible. Most of all, one doesn't need magic to use magical artifacts, it isn't a requirement, which was surprising for us. The director remembered the feeling of excitement he had felt when they activated such magical artifacts. It was as though they had discovered another line of science though. Obviously, it was already an established one, called Magicraft. But before we dared to tinker with the magical artifacts and perhaps disassemble it to understand its internal workings, we translated the books about magic sent to our department. The basic translation took an entire month, and it was a lot of hard work. Abraham raised an eyebrow and remarked then, the language of Magicraft must have been a hard one to tackle after all. Taking a month to translate it despite dozens of references being studied through magical books is impressive in itself. The director nodded, but also shook his head afterward. That was what we thought when we concluded the basic translation, but it seemed that we were wrong at the time. We tackled the runic language of Magicraft with the same expectations as a usual language. However, when we learned of its basic translation, we finally realized that it really was the language was nothing more but something akin to a programming language. It was practically an amalgamation of syntaxes and commands through runic runes. Using that same logic, we introduced the Magicraft language into our computer and began dismantling the first magical artifact inside. It was a runic spell circle with the same symbols as the one we have translated in the book. We let the computer run an analysis with the language coded inside of it for translation, and it didn't take long for the results to come in. Our theory was correct. The language of magic is nothing more but a programming language that uses mana as the computing power of reality. Through computer translation, we realized that they had commanded the spell circle to consume a certain amount of mana and send the consumed mana into another spell circle, which would turn it into fire. The inner works of the magic torch was something we fully realized. The excitement of the director was enrapturing, but Abraham understood the director's reasons after all. He would have felt the same if he figured out vital information about something he was completely ignorant about. But wouldn't it be better to have a spell circle that consumes mana and turn it into fire? Abraham asked, since it would be much more efficient than using two spell circles. Ha 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 ha. That was what we thought. We wondered why it was separated into two spell circles and thought of multiple theories. Maybe the knowledge they had about magic wasn't as deep as we speculated, or there were many more things we were ignorant about it. However, the answer is fairly obvious. The director smiled as he though remembering a good joke. Abraham carefully listened and wondered what the answer was. Those bastards sent us their cheapest magical artifacts. The creation of a spell circle with multiple processes would undoubtedly be complicated and require much more runes instead. Why not have these processes be in their own spell circles and simply connect them with one another? After all, it would be much cheaper than a complicated one. Hearing the answer of the director, Abraham lightly chuckled as he realized that he had been duped though. It's not like he specified them to send their best magical artifacts. Technically, he wasn't fooled by the people of the colonial dominion. The fault came from his ignorance. So, those guys gave Abraham a couple of trashes for the lives of their soldiers? I wonder if they thought that it would fool us, or they really thought that their soldiers would be worth a mere simple magical artifacts. Laplace remarked while chuckling on her own. Abraham and the director of the R&D department stopped chuckling after hearing the Dragoness's words. The latter part seems not implausible after all. The colonial dominion always thought of their people as resources that could be replaced. Such logic couldn't be entirely disregarded. Well, you have a point, Laplace. Abraham simply nodded at the Dragoness, who stopped chuckling and returned to her aloof expression. On the other hand, he returned his attention to the director. At any rate, can you apply your discoveries to actual experiments? He asked the director. After all, the moment they could utilize magic, everything would revolutionized, but it seems that he could only dream. The director shook his head and sadly responded, no. Fleet Admiral, the creation of a spell circle in the end requires a magic-abled individual square root rectangle in him, someone that could manipulate the energy. Mana. Most of us humans from Earth have no mana inside our bodies. We haven't evolved to the environment of the foreign world, unlike its local humanity, so sadly we wouldn't be able to make our own magical instruments. Of all the discoveries they made, this was the most saddening one for the director. It was as though destiny itself was directly impeding them from moving forward. However, there was something he hadn't thought of. Couldn't you create a magical instrument that could help you make spell circles? Like a pin for runic formations, Laplace calmly suggested. causing the entirety of the R&D department to freeze. Abraham looked around with confusion, but the director furrowed his eyebrows. We could do that? Lady Laplace, that would give us the ability to construct spell circles of our own, without the requirement of mana, but the first of such invention will have to be created with someone that has mana. It was a good idea, but the first step was a difficult one to do. The director felt his dreams leaping into the abyss. The new path he thought he could take led to a cliff that he couldn't pass. It was depressing, since it was biological factors stopping him from studying more of it. Or was it really? What's that depressing face all about? Laplace raised an eyebrow and waved her hand as electricity crackled around it. In its essence, what I am doing is magic. I utilize mana to make it do something for me, but unlike humans, I don't have to learn to be able to do so. It's instinctually engraved to my body. I don't have the knowledge to create spell circles, but with your guidance, we might be able to create a magical instrument that could construct its own spell circles. Laplace smiled at the director, who was rapidly regaining his color. He had forgotten that every mystical things in the foreign world could be explained with magic. Lady Laplace was a magical creature, as her very existence defied the natural expectations of biology. With her help, it wouldn't be implausible to create the instrument that could help them revolutionize the United Navy. Lady Laplace, the R&D department will be very honored to receive your help. The director deeply bowed towards the Dragoness. It was clear what he wanted from her, though. It looked strange for an old bowing to be bowing towards a gorgeous lady. It was akin to a scene from a teledrama. Abraham shook his head and got rid of his rowdy imagination. He stopped leaning on the metallic wall and stepped forward, glancing at the Dragoness. How about it? Laplace interested? He couldn't force her to do what he wanted. That was something he always told himself. After all, she wasn't merely a normal girl, but a dragonet that he had to respect her freedom to choose. I do not want to return to this cramped space. Head to Abraham's office and call for my name. I'll arrive. Laplace pointed at Abraham, who was somewhat confused. Hey, why my office? I'd like to keep my peace and silent. I don't easily hear anyone who calls for me, but since I consider your office as a special place, a call for my name inside would attract my attention. Laplace have heard her name 1,000 times, but the voice of Abraham and the silence of his office held a special place in her heart. If someone calls her name from his office, she could assume that Abraham required for her help. Otherwise, regardless of how much the director calls for her, she wouldn't appear, as she doesn't care to answer those that call for her. Besides, I'm a very busy woman with responsibilities over hundreds of personnel. I can't make time, since it would take my remaining free time. Laplace had already laid over her requirements, and there was nothing he could do about it. For the sake of understanding magic and utilizing it for our own, I'll accept these terms. Director, head to my office once you are ready. Abraham turned his gaze towards the director, who swiftly nodded his head. Good. Thank you for your hard work. I appreciate the time you spent in understanding the unknowns. I promise it will not go to waste, he said to the surrounding scientists, researchers, and inventors. They felt determination blazing in their heart and saluted to the Fleet Admiral. We will not fail you, Fleet Admiral. Chapter 142. Concluding reports. After checking the R&D department, Abraham and Laplace went into their separate ways. Despite the Dragoness wanting him to take a rest, Abraham felt fine and knew that things hadn't ended for the United Navy. Many of his men and women were fighting for what they believed in throughout the sea region of Terra, and he didn't want to fail them by recuperating in a comfy bed while they fight for their lives. Besides, his perk of recovery and Laplace's blood turned his body into something extraordinary. His usual regeneration practically got multiplied into 10. This simple fact made him realize how mystical a dragon's blood, but he also understood its implications. Laplace's body was a treasure. Metaphorically and literally, there would be many greedy for it and desire it for themselves. The only thing stopping them was the power of the dragon that would put them 6 feet underground if they ever dared to seek their desires. The thought of it raised Abraham's blood pressure, and he became determined to protect her no matter what. However, despite his wish to protect her, there was one fact that impeded it. He was weak. No matter how much he trained, it still wasn't enough. His enemies could bend reality to their will and conjure spells through magic. Fighting against the ordinary of these magi would be possible, but against the elite and the strongest, there was nothing he could do against them. I'm still reliant with Laplace. I can't even protect her from a sovereign. Even if I wanted to, I'm too pathetically weak to do so, he muttered to himself, and opened the door to his office. As the luxurious wooden door creaked, his office emerged before his eyes. It was the same as before. Despite the recent assassination that broke inside of it, a lot of the furniture got replaced, and it seems that weapon stashes were scattered everywhere. It seems that they had the idea of giving him weapon regardless of where he was in the office, which was a good idea. If these weapons were effective against the Magus, unfortunately, they were far from effective. Breaking through a Magus's barrier was akin to penetrating a heavily armored vehicle. Only artillery and high-penetrating guns would be able to deal damage to it. The remaining armaments could only serve as a distraction. I hope that the R&D department would deliver me my weapon at the very least. I can gain the ability to deal injuries to those annoying bastards, he mumbled while stretching his limbs upward. He yawned and comfortably sat on his chair. I want to sleep, Abraham murmured but shook his head and regained his determination. I still have a job to do. I can't be lazy when I'm not the one picking the gun and shooting it. With this in mind, Abraham opened up his drawers and saw the recently sent reports from the intelligence officers. He placed them on top of his table and began reading them one by one. The edges of his lips rose as the situation outside had become better. Rebels are entering the island of Eisenberg and are causing chaos inside of it. Only a few runic shields remained, and most of them are scattered in the colony's capital. The moment these runic shields collapse, it will be our victory. Though it seems that the human girl has been working hard for the rebellion she has created. He grinned and tried to remember her name, only to find it somewhat difficult. Her name? Mona? Hermone? Wait, wrong. What was her name again? He wondered if the assassination had brought him dementia. Fortunately, it was merely a temporary setback. Ah, right, Hermona, according to her file. She's part of the Wyvern squadron we shot down at first. Interesting. I didn't think we would become allies with a survivor. Abraham raised his eyebrows, but smiled afterward. Well, fate works in stranger ways than imagined. Silence followed and Abraham's smile faded from his face. He turned his head upward and gazed at the empty ceiling. How long do I have to continue talking to myself? Isn't the update already done, Systema? It was hard to talk for no reason with no one responding to him. Usually, during his reading with various file reports, Systema would give her own opinion about the matter, a somewhat objective thought about the subject. Psi*, it shouldn't take too long, he thought, and turned his attention to the next files. It was about the southern colony. He was curious about how Laplace managed to conquer it so fast. So he began reading with scrutiny, but as he read through the file report, Abraham could only wryly smile while placing the file back to the table. Was this something I should have expected? Laplace threw a dozen of 300 kiloton blasts throughout the southern colony. Was she trying to turn it into a wasteland? Luckily, none of the slaves or citizens became a collateral damage. Otherwise, it would have become troublesome. However, 300 kiloton blasts, how overpowered is she? Abraham felt stupefied by the power that Laplace had portrayed in the liberation of the southern colony. She never looked like someone that could throw nukes at will, though. He should have expected it after all. She was a dragon. Let's continue. I don't want to hear more about her shenanigans, he thought, and picked another file. It was about the northern operation led by Charlotte. He opened the file and began reading with interest, since it should mostly be about the results of the naval battle. I wonder how the naval battle ended? I remembered getting reports about them fighting over a dozen battleships. Each of these warships also had their own inquisitor. Combined with the respective war masters, this would be problematic. Even for me, Abraham wondered how she managed to handle the precarious circumstance she was forced to stand against. I see so. This is how intriguing strategy, but a risky 1 inch, he muttered, while reading through the file report of the northern operation. He wasn't in the position to judge the tactics she had applied, as he wasn't the one fighting over a dozen battleships, so he withheld his opinion about the subject and learned of the aftermath instead. A critically damaged frigate and several damaged ones? Huh? There's also casualties, but they haven't reached the 100, which is a piece of good news. Abraham felt heavy as casualties have began piling up since the beginning of the counter-operations. However, it was the path he had planned to take. Regretting it now would be dishonorable to the sacrifices they have made for the United Navy. I should hold a military funeral for each and every one of them. Let their name be remembered by the future generations of the United Navy, he declared, and closed the file about the northern operation. But, nonetheless, it seems that I was right. Charlotte decided to retreat from the north. It's the best option she could have chosen. Otherwise, she would have been sending the northern fleet to their deaths. The enemy is undoubtedly prepared. The northern fleet has already lost its element of surprise. However, this is a victory for the United Navy. No matter what, over a dozen of their battleships had been sunk, degrading the number of the naval force even further. Abraham smiled as things were really going well for the United Navy, even though there was the minor issue regarding the inquisitors trying to assassinate him. It wasn't much compared to the victories of the United Navy liberating nearby islands. Anyhow, there were more files on the drawer, but most of them were about the internal situations of the Port of Dawn. He had time to handle them, unlike the current operations of the United Navy. However, before he could continue thinking about the files and reports in front of him, a familiar mechanical bell rang inside his mind. Abraham raised his eyebrows as he realized what this sound meant. Ding. Congratulations, Fleet Admiral. Naval Gacha system has been updated to its 11. You have unlocked random sea-based asset spin. You have unlocked random personal power spin. Congratulations, Systema has been upgraded. Assistance to the Fleet Admiral will be further increased, whether in battle or general tasks. Archipelago Freedom, Liberation Mission. Archipelago Freedom Requirement, Liberation of the Archipelago Colony Eisenberg. Colony Eisenberg has been completely liberated. Calculating rewards. Submission status. Completed. Slave liberty. Liberation mission. Slave liberty requirement. Liberation of slaves in the southern colony. 18,000 slaves liberated. Calculating rewards. Cracking gate. Liberation mission. Cracking gate requirement. Dismantling of Terra's gate. The northern fortress has been abandoned by Terra. Calculating rewards. Following the notifications regarding the system update, the results of his submissions finally echoed inside his mind. They rattled in his head, like metallic chimes echoing along his thoughts, but Abraham was far from bothered since he was already used to it. Should I consider this as unexpected or expected? Abraham mumbled while gazing at the digital screens before him. Most of the submissions given to him was completed without a problem. How? Well, the requirements explained it all. With the success of all my operations, their rewards should be coming in, he thought. Realizing that it was about time for his payday, excitement surged into his heart like a flood from a broken dam. The amount of naval points he might gain from their completions wasn't to be underestimated. I'm about to be rich, he shouted as quietly as possible, trying to maintain his calm as the fleet admiral of the United Navy. Chapter 143. Preparation for the finale. In the Magus Tower of the colonial dominion of Terra, the viceroy walked through the Gothic halls with furrowed eyebrows. The air was tense, as though war was amidst the horizon. It wasn't wrong, but it also wasn't right after all. It wasn't as though war was becoming inevitable by the minute. It had already started, and the colonial dominion of Terra was losing its territories, were being liberated one after another. They were returning to square one, and the viceroy of Terra wasn't happy. His sovereign had called upon his runic communicator and reminded him that attention was being pointed at the colonial dominion of Terra. The emergence of an unexpected underdog, the United Navy, was attracting unwanted attention from several factions outside the Ferris Sea. Even foreign colonial dominions were thinking of intervening in the instability of the sea region. We need to defeat the United Navy, otherwise the colonial dominion of Terra will fall. I will be excommunicated and my family will be dishonored, he thought to himself, while clenching his fist. The colonial dominion of Terra should have been the farthest from the frontier, but why was it the first colonial dominion who's about to fall? It's also because of that Dragoness. The viceroy felt anger after remembering what the Dragoness had done to the southern colony. They received reports that the Dragon of the United Navy turned their military barracks into a wasteland, killing thousands of soldiers. Naturally, this caused the morale of the military to almost collapse. After all, what could they do against the Dragon of Liberation? The one that destroyed an entire colony's military strength on her own with remarkable ease. Facing against her was akin to fighting against destiny or death. There was simply nothing they could do against her, or so they thought. The Archmagus appeared out of nowhere during the military meeting and told them that he had an idea regarding the Dragoness, and so the viceroy planned to meet with the Archmagus and question him. He wanted to know how they would defeat the legendary dragon originating from the frontier. It didn't take long before he arrived at the end of the hallway. Before him stood a gigantic door, but as he touched its smooth surface, it moved as though it was light as a feather. The Gothic doorway creaked as what emerged before him was the old decorations and statues scattered in a circular room. In its center was a table made of magical wood, and a long chair built from the ashes of a sea leviathan. On the ominous chair sat the Archmagus of the Magus Tower. Gunther, he gazed at the viceroy walking towards him and waved his hand, causing a chair to appear out of nowhere. What may be the reason of your visit, Sir Viceroy? The Archmagus calmly asked while the viceroy sat on the chair and crossed his leg with the same furrowed expression as before. He lightly tapped the table and replied, "The military has been following what you desire. Archmagus, I need to know how you plan to handle the Dragoness. I don't wish to be ignorant, nor am I naive enough to continue being as such." The viceroy swiftly stated his reason to the Archmagus. There was no need for word play or beautiful remarks. What he wanted from Gunther was an answer, a clear and concise one, something that would be acceptable to his ears. "I understand your frustration, Sir Viceroy. Believe me, I truly do so, but sadly, I cannot tell much about our plan. You simply need to trust the Magus Tower to be able to take down the dragon." The Archmagus shook his head, not desiring to give more details about the plan. "I have let you command my force at will, Archmagus. Is this how you repay me? I don't need trust. I need the truth. Give it to me, or the military will be creating its own plan." The viceroy slammed his hands on the table. He was deeply angered by the unsatisfying answer of the Archmagus. There was no way he could believe in something as feeble as trust. There was a reason why he stands as the viceroy of the colonial dominion of Terra. It was all because he didn't dare to trust anybody else, not even himself. The Archmagus looked unbothered by the outrage of the viceroy. He merely squinted his eyes and questioned the one before him. "Why do you not trust us, Sir Viceroy? We are the Magus Tower, the second most honored of all existence." Hearing the questioning words of the Archmagus, The viceroy finally calmed down and took a deep breath. He faced the scrutinizing eyes of the old man without fear and answered, I have heard about how your magus perform in the field. They always lose against the United Navy. Even without the dragon's intervention, not only that, during the battle in our southern seas, those inquisitors ran away with their tails tucked in between their tails. My military has paid the price for the trust it has given the Magus Tower. Archmagus, the viceroy explained the reasons for his doubts towards the Magus Tower, and he wasn't wrong most of the time. The Magus failed him, the elites of the elites? Why were they falling one after another in the face of the United Navy? Why do these conjurers of mystic not able to defeat a group of mortal and mannerless humans? Gunther raised his eyebrows after he had heard the reasoning of the viceroy, but he felt that it wasn't complete. So he asked, that may be a part of your reasons, but you haven't told me the one that brought you here in front of me. The viceroy froze as the archmagus hit directly on the spot. The actual reason for his visit wasn't about the incompetent magus or the casualties of his military. He then gritted his teeth in annoyance and responded. The sovereign has called. He wants me to take care of the problem. The colonial dominion of Terra has attracted too much attention. Our loss might signal the unfortunate destiny of humanity. So, no matter what, we must not lose. The sovereign will be disappointed. And you know what will happen if he becomes disappointed. It was a threat, not only towards the archmagus, but also to himself. The moment the archmagus heard of the word sovereign, his arrogant self faded, and was replaced that of faith. He looked at the viceroy with understanding and uttered, it appears that the sovereign has become intrigued with our pitiful circumstance. Nonetheless, he trusts us enough to handle the problem ourselves, and we must do so. No matter what, Gunther stated to the viceroy. Sir Viceroy, as the sovereign has called for you, I shall respect his wishes, and let you be less ignorant of our plan. Finally, the archmagus was about to reveal some details about the strategy against the Dragon of Liberation. The viceroy felt curious as his ears perked up. Wanting to hear about the strategy of the Magus Tower, he wondered what kind of mystical things they plan to do to take care of the Dragoness. Our plan is fairly simple. Our enemies can be separated into two forces, the United Navy and the Dragon of Liberation. The United Navy is strong, that is for sure, but with the Dragon of Liberation, they are unstoppable. In order to have a chance in the finale, we must take care of the Dragon of Liberation before fighting against the United Navy. The Archmagus first stated the rationale of the strategy. But how will you take care of the Dragoness, Sir Magus? She has a body almost rivaling that of a sovereign, and complete authority over particular elements. She had gone much more stronger compared to herself in the frontier. The viceroy expressed his uncertainty in fighting against the Dragon of Liberation. No matter what spell they cooked up, unless a sovereign emerges with their real body, they wouldn't stand a chance. If the normal could have dealt with the dragon, she would have become nothing more but scattered treasures. That is correct. She is much stronger than us. No matter what we do, we wouldn't be able to defeat her. Unexpectedly, the archmagus was in agreement with the viceroy's uncertainty, but he immediately changed his stance and continued. But who said that he would be fighting her? The viceroy felt confused, wondering what the archmagus meant. How could they deal with the United Navy without defeating the Dragoness? She considers the heretical organization as a part of her den. She would defend it as though it was protecting her mystical treasures. Fighting in an unstoppable battle is foolish, the archmagus remarked and continued. So, instead of fighting, we must adopt another strategy. Our second option would be to separate them with one another without her. The United Navy would be on its own if we managed to defeat the United Navy. Even if we faced the wrath of the Dragon of Liberation, it would still be our victory, he calmly explained to the viceroy. The Magus Tower is creating a spell that would do the job of separation. After that, your military and my magi will attack the remaining of the United Navy in our full power. Gunther stood up from his seat and walked towards the balcony. But remember, Sir Viceroy, at that moment, death will have its clock ticking above us. Chapter 144. 144 more new warships. Silence shrouded the fleet admiral's office. Residing deep inside the branch office building, Abraham blankly gazed forward to an empty wall, as though he was looking at something important. In actuality, he was gazing at something significant. Before him was a digital screen displaying the amount of wealth he currently had in his pockets, and to say the least, it was the largest amount of naval points he had gotten from the system. 7,000 naval points, the amount of frigates I can buy with it, Abraham quietly muttered to himself, imagining a fleet of 20 Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates under his command. But at the moment, numbers weren't the things he needed the most. It was versatility and adaptability to gain what he needed. He needed to gain several warships that could be useful in the larger picture of the United Navy. The Lightning Carrier, Jaeger of the Blue Seas, has proven itself to be incredibly effective. Its fighters have practically dominated the airspace above Eisenberg and allowed for long-range tactical mission. It was because of this warship that the Storm Fleet of the United Navy managed to destroy several runic shielding scattered throughout the colony. Abraham mumbled, remembering the report about the lightning carrier and what it had done in the operation against the archipelago colony. He could buy another lightning carrier, but that would be too expensive for his own good. Instead, he wanted to test his luck whether or not would he really gain something interesting from the random naval spin. Besides, he also wanted to try the new features of the naval gacha system. This was the best moment to use it. The time where he has 7,000 naval points in stock. With this in mind, Abraham opened his drawer and took out a telephone from it. He opened communications with the command center in the defense sector of the Port of Dawn and gave them orders. New warships are about to be summoned to join our fleet. I want the port personnel to be prepared and don't want our guns to be pointed at them. It was practically needed for him to always give orders to his subordinates when summoning warships. After all, the teleportation ability of their adversaries made them tense against warships that emerge out of nowhere. Abraham didn't want them to shoot at each other, so it was important to give warning. Affirmative. Fleet Admiral, I will be relaying your orders to the remaining fleet. The communication operator from the other side responded and swiftly contacted an intelligence officer. The moment the intelligence officer heard of the orders, he rapidly relayed it to most of the command center. With that, the naval personnel scattered throughout the Port of Dawn should be aware of the upcoming summoning. It was finally time to stop resisting the urge. After all, who wouldn't want to gamble in a large spinning wheel system? Use 2,000 naval points to purchase 2 naval random spins, Abraham quietly thought, while closing his eyelids. It didn't take long before a mechanical bell rang inside his mind. The edges of his lips rose, as it had begun. Ding. Understood. Fleet Admiral random naval spin selected. Triggering spin in a mere instant. A massive glowing wheel materialized before his eyes. Within it were the same hundreds of classes of warships and ships he had seen before. It came from different nations across his former world, though. It did make him wonder why most of his warships came from the US of A. At any rate, the arrow in the center of the massive wheel began spinning. It started slow at first, but became blurry in seconds. Abraham carefully watched as it passed through hundreds of warships and ships. As said before, what he wanted was a ship with versatility and adaptability like the America-class carrier, or lightning carrier for short. So he was somewhat tense regarding what he could get from the spin. It didn't take long before the arrow was beginning to slow down. He watched with a scrutinizing gaze as it slowly but surely concluded its spinning session revolution, terminating in 54,321. Congratulations. You have received Prototype Advanced Hindenburg-class airship. A what? Abraham found himself stupefied as he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wondered if he had become crazy because of excitement. He expected a warship or a ship. An airship was beyond his expectations. It didn't even come to mind. And a prototype? Huh? Is it somewhat similar to the UNS Trinity of Solace? He wondered to himself, but out of nowhere, a monotone voice answered his question. Zyro, it is somewhat similar to the UNS Trinity of Solace, Fleet Admiral, but it is also different in a way. The UNS Trinity of Solace is a personalized warship of the Fleet Admiral. On the other hand, the airship has its own captain and crew under the authority of the highest of command. The Prototype Advanced Hindenburg-class airship is part of the newest types of ships that was updated into the naval gacha system. There are many more of the prototypes, ships that were merely imagined, not built. The explanation of Systema made the stupefied Abraham calm down. It seems that the update didn't only give him features, which was interesting. The fact that not only real warships, but imaginary ones got included was intriguing for the Fleet Admiral. It made him wonder what the limits of the naval gacha system were, though. I didn't think that my first non-American ship would be a prototype of a German airship, he thought, as despite expecting a warship not part of the US Navy, he wasn't expecting it to be an imagined German airship. But I guess this isn't too troublesome after all. Who knows what a prototype advanced airship could do? Abraham was undeniably curious about its capabilities. However, the random naval spin hasn't ended yet. After all, he bought 2 of them, costing him 2,000 naval points. He turned his attention to the massive wheel in front of him. It was as if it waited for his attention before beginning the spinning session. A mechanical bell rang, and like before, the arrow at the center rapidly spun. Abraham calmly waited for it to conclude. He wasn't as nervous as before, since he had realized that the prototype might have been under the adaptability and versatility. Even if he had gotten something inadequate, he wouldn't be too saddened by it, though. It appears that Abraham was in for a surprise. Seconds passed by. Abraham watched with interest as the arrow passed through numerous classes and types in the naval random spin. It didn't take long before the following notifications emerged before him. Congratulations. You have received Virginia-class Block V submarine. He looked at the notification with a frozen expression. He wondered if fate was messing with him. He had little to no expectations. Yet the naval gacha system seems to give him the best. Would reverse psychology work against his system? Nah. I'd rather not test it. Abraham shook his head and turned his attention to his recently gained warship. It was a submarine. His first one, and it was amongst the most powerful submarines in his former world from his memories. The Virginia-class Block V submarine was an attack submarine of the U.S. Navy. It was equipped with usual armaments and conventional weapons, along with advanced technology. It would be able to sneak up into the shores of enemy territories with ease and assault them with the full power of an attack submarine. It was practically suited with ambushes. This is amongst the most versatile and adaptable warships I could have gained. I guess this is the early update luck I am getting, Abraham thought after calming himself down. He turned his gaze towards the window of his office and saw golden light gleaming near his ports. Every naval personnel watched the golden light with interest. After all, they have been told that the fleet admiral was about to summon more of their comrades into this world. Surprisingly, however, only one golden light brilliantly glowed in the seas. The other golden light radiantly gleamed in the heavens. The naval personnel near the docks looked at the two and wondered why one of their ships was above them with the heavens. Some even backed away, thinking that it would fall directly in the waters near them. Abraham stared at the golden lights, which faded with time. What replaced the brilliance in the sea was a Virginia-class Block V attack submarine. On the other hand, what emerged from the radiance in the heavens was none other than the prototype advanced Hindenburg-class airship. It was a lot bigger than the UNS Trinity of Solace in terms of size, and it also proclaimed an intriguing futuristic look with its searchlights scattered everywhere on its main body. It makes one wonder, if it really was a human ship, it seems to resemble an alien one. Damn, I didn't think it would be that big, Abraham muttered to himself while gazing at the airship in the skies above the port of Dawn. If they had complete air supremacy, he wondered what his adversaries would feel upon fighting such behemoth. With the discovery of adamantium, the United Navy would no longer be suppressed by magicraft. We would limitless grow, unimpeded by anyone and anything, he declared while observing the magnificent scene before him. The war for liberation had already begun, and the finale was rising in the horizons. It was about time to see who rules over the sea region of Terra. Abraham began to smirk as he remarked, "I'm quite excited." Chapter 145. 145 Advancements of the United Navy. Abraham watched the two newly summoned warships with pride. They were the newest to join the fleet of United Navy, and they won't be the last. He turned his gaze towards his desk and walked towards it. After all, he still had 5,000 naval points left in a war. It was better to be not ignorant of the cards he had on deck. Saving his naval points and using it only when needed severely relied on luck. Even though his luck was good, he didn't desire to place the destiny of the United Navy of such a fickle concept. With this in mind, Abraham sat back to his comfy chair as a digital screen materialized before his eyes. Inside, it was the remaining naval points in his pocket. Naturally, as said before, he wanted to spend it all. The first thing I need to guarantee is the growth of the Port of Dawn. It is the heart of the United Navy, and as we grow, the heavier it load becomes. The capability of the Port of Dawn to handle the fleets of the United Navy is paramount, he muttered while closing his eyelids. His words weren't wrong. The advancement of the Port of Dawn heavily tied with the United Navy. After all, it was the only port they had. It needed to be capable, otherwise the logistics would get too overloaded and crowded. As such, Abraham opened his eyelids with clear determination in his eyes. He had already made a decision, and there was no going back now. Systema, how much do I have to spend to upgrade the Port of Dawn to its next level? Abraham questioned his precious partner, wanting to know the price of the upgrade he was about to purchase. After all, his decision all depends whether or not he could handle the price presented by Systema in mere moments. A mechanical bell rang inside his mind. Abraham saw a digital screen materialized before him as a monotone voice followed. The cost of the Port of Dawn's Level 2 upgrade is 2,000 naval points. Fleet Admiral. Hearing the answer of Systema, Abraham raised an eyebrow. Since the price wasn't as high as he had previously expected, he thought that the starting price would increase exponentially. But it seems that he had thought of the system wrong. It was simple and wasn't trying to exploit him. I am lucky to have a merciful system, he quietly thought to himself, as the system hadn't been hard on him since the beginning of his transmigration. This was something he was thankful for. After all, other stories always portrayed systems as mad slave owners of some sort. Okay, Systema, I'd like to purchase the Level 2 of the Port of Dawn. Abraham didn't hesitate anymore, as 2,000 naval points was within his ability to sacrifice. Thinking more would be wasting his precious moments of calm. Understood, Fleet Admiral. Your purchase is appreciated by the system. For some reason, despite uttering such words in a monotone voice, Abraham could imagine a clerk working for some convenience store speaking to him, though. He quickly shook his head and got rid of such useless thoughts like his first upgrade of the Port of Dawn. A mechanical bell rang inside Abraham's mind. Following it was a notification screen materializing in front of his perception. Ding. The Fleet Admiral has purchased the Naval Base Level 2 upgrade. Upgrading Naval Base, Port of Dawn. In this very moment, a golden radiance shrouded the entirety of Port of Dawn. Not a single thing was left behind, as every speck of the port gleamed with brilliance. Naturally, Abraham was blinded by light emitted by the upgrade process. Dang. He thought while closing his eyelids from the radiance that seemed to desire to blind him, though. It didn't take long before the golden brilliance dimmed, and moments afterward, it faded as if it hadn't emerged in the first place. Abraham was disoriented, but quickly regained his calm. He quickly observed his surroundings and noticed that nothing changed inside his office, but it wasn't like change should be expected after all. The upgrade was targeted towards the Port of Dawn itself, and he soon realized this as he turned his eyes towards the windows of his office before the upgrade. Medium-sized buildings found itself scattered throughout the Port of Dawn. It was akin to a small town with a bustling populace, but now it had become far more different than ever before. In front of his eyes was akin to a small city. Medium-sized buildings were spread throughout the Port of Dawn, but along with them were towering high-rise buildings. It was shocking to say the least. The Port of Dawn had become greater than it could have imagined itself to be. I didn't think that the level 2 upgrade would have such a great effect, Abraham thought, while observing the scenery with a scrutinizing expression. M²epsilon. At any rate, several notification screens emerged before his amazed eyes, blocking the scenic view of a somewhat modern city. Along with it was the usual mechanical bell ringing inside his mind. Port of Dawn, successfully upgraded. Port personnel, increased from 5,000 to 25,000. High port infrastructure and manufacturing facilities added. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Battalion of the UA has been summoned. Reading the words in the notification screens, Abraham finally realized why towering buildings appeared in the Port of Dawn like before. The population of the Port of Dawn had increased 5 times its size. The first upgrade might not have been troublesome after all. The increase was 1,000 to 5,000 personnel, but, on the other hand, the second upgrade was 5 times greater than the first. It was 5,000 to 25,000. An increase of 20,000 personnel. His thoughts about the Port of Dawn handling the logistics of the fleet was practically thrown out of the window, as the current fleet of the United Navy might be too small for the current port, for some reason. I feel like I had already said this before, but damn. The United Navy is growing pretty fast, Abraham muttered, since the growth of the United Navy was greater than ever before. Yeah, a bit too fast. Out of nowhere, he heard a familiar soothing voice. He turned his gaze towards the direction where it came from and saw Laplace staring at him in disbelief. It was at this moment that he realized that there wasn't only his summoned personnel in the Port of Dawn. Abraham wryly smiled while rubbing the back of his head. Apologies for that. One would be beyond astounded for everything to glow out of nowhere. While Laplace somewhat understood what it was, many thought it was an attack from the colonial dominion of Terra. These sentiments mostly came from the SRU personnel, who were horrified by the glowing radiance. Seeing Abraham's apologetic expression, Laplace sighed and leaned beside his desk. Well, it doesn't bother me much. So what changed? While most of her subordinates were in a state of confusion, as long as Abraham was good, others simply didn't matter enough for her. It was the mindset of a dragon, a priority of what was important to her. Hearing Laplace's inquiry, Abraham felt that he needed to be honest, so he quickly responded to the Dragoness. The only thing I discovered is the high-rise buildings and the population increase. The intelligence officers should be coming to report the changes of the Port of Dawn. He turned his gaze towards the front door of his office, prompting Laplace to do the same. But how much did the population increase, Abraham? Laplace asked. Since the change that Abraham had introduced to the Port of Dawn practically turned it into something greater, she could somewhat feel the large population. It increased from 5,000 to 25,000, not including the naval fleet personnel, Abraham answered while staring at the scenic view from his window. It also seems that the floor of his office had become higher, and this isn't including the naval fleet personnel. Along with the beastfolk population, the Port of Dawn has become a city in mere moments. I'm sure that the newly emerged port personnel can adapt, but would the beastfolks be able to do the same? Laplace remarked while squinting her eyelids. This was troublesome for her, as she understood that ignorance could breed troublesome issues. But I'm sure you would be able to fix it. She looked at Abraham and smiled. After all, every problematic things had always been solved by him. This wouldn't be different. I'll try rectifying my mistakes to the beastfolks, Abraham uttered with determination, understanding the seriousness of the situation. There's no need to be so serious, Abraham. Laplace chuckled after seeing his seriousness and continued. While the loyalty of the beastfolks couldn't be compared to the loyalty of your actual subordinates, the loyalty they have for you is greater than they have for me. And they already consider me a deity of some sort. She stopped chuckling and looked at the front door. It seems that they have arrived. I'm looking forward about hearing the actual changes of the Port of Dawn. Knock, knock, knock. A moment later, someone began knocking on his door. Abraham gazed at it and stated, "You can enter." Following such words, the door opened and a group of intelligence officers entered his office. On their arms were various reports about the changes of the Port of Dawn. The reports were a lot, causing the fleet admiral to almost get disgusted from the amount of files they were planning to give him. Chapter 146. 146 Actual Status Report. In the towering skyline of the branch office building was the lone office of the Fleet Admiral. It stood amongst the greatest place where most directions affecting the future of the United Navy took place, and at the moment, Abraham was about to hear the actual status report of the Port of Dawn. Beside the famous Fleet Admiral was the infamous Dragoness, who was the rumored sword of the highest of authority. She wields a lot of authority and power in the United Navy, rivaling that of people such as Vice Admiral Charlotte of the UNS Trinity of Solace. With your senses, shouldn't you have some kind of idea about the current status of the Port of Dawn? He turned his gaze towards the beautiful white-haired Dragoness and questioned her senses was the best of all existence. That was what he thought of Laplace. He was confident of this idea and could attest it. Laplace chuckled after hearing his words of pride towards her senses. Technically, he wasn't wrong about his words. She could somewhat sense the current status of the Port of Dawn, however. You overestimate me too much, Abraham. While I could hear the changes of the Port of Dawn, the levels of details I can excavate from it is akin to someone trying the ocean with a cup of water on his hand. Laplace responded to the Fleet Admiral, who merely nodded in understanding. I see. So, hearing everything doesn't mean actually hearing everything. One would have to focus their mind to have clarity and understanding. Abraham felt the complexities of Laplace's capabilities. While he didn't have her high senses, he could feel the amount of work and focus she needed to do to be able to run a normal life. It might be the reason why she blocked her attention to the people calling her name. At any rate, Abraham returned his attention to the intelligence officers in front of him. On their arms were dozens of files that would have been troublesome for him to thoroughly read. Fortunately, Laplace was there to save him. Please summarize the reports for the Fleet Admiral. He will read it afterward to gain understanding of various details. Her soothing words echoed throughout his office. Hearing her, the intelligence officers nodded in understanding, as they felt that reading through the mountain of reports would have been bothersome, even for the Fleet Admiral. With this in mind, one of them stepped forward and volunteered to report the status of the Port of Dawn to the Fleet Admiral. I will be reporting the status of the Port of Dawn. Fleet Admiral. The intelligence officer saluted while Laplace nodded in satisfaction. Good. The Fleet Admiral will be hearing from you. Make it concise and straightforward as to prevent misunderstandings. Affirmative, Lieutenant Colonel Laplace. He nodded his head rapidly and turned his attention to the bunch of papers in front of him. The first thing he needed to report was simple. It was none other than the current population of the Port of Dawn. Fleet Admiral, our port population has increased from 5,000 personnel to 25,000 people. This doesn't include the 4,500 naval personnel, totaling the general numbers to 29,500 personnel under the authority of the United Navy. There is also the beastfolk population reaching 6,000 people, increasing our total numbers to 35,500 people. Fortunately, along with the growth of population, dozens of our vital structures have been upgraded or grown in numbers. Our docks have reached 5 to 20 docks in our shores. The port area have also become heavily defined, especially with the combination of our military cargo ships. Cranes have established themselves and have reached the hundreds. With this, our transportation and cargo capabilities have more or less quadrupled in terms of efficiency and size. The intelligence officer first reported, earning the nod of the Fleet Admiral. I didn't think that our population would skyrocket beyond 30,000. No wonder things have become more hectic in the Port of Dawn, Laplace remarked while glancing at the scenic view of the city through Abraham's windows. Yes, things have become more lively with the increased population, Lieutenant Colonel Laplace. The intelligence officer nodded in agreement and continued with his report. Now that the population report had concluded, it was time for the next. Our warehouses have reached the number of hundreds. Not only that, many of the empty ones have been replenished and filled to the brim. We wouldn't have to worry about a shortage because of the population increased. With the current supplies we have in stock, we should be able to last a year and a half even with our high population. The intelligence officer calmly reported. Abraham had already guessed the replenishment of the warehouses and their growth. It was something he had expected since the first upgrade he had done to the Port of Dawn. It was vital and paramount as it increased the general lifespan of the United Navy. This is a piece of good news. With a year and a half worth of supplies, we should be able to become self-producing at a pleasant pace. Abraham expressed his satisfaction over the report. For all the construction of more production facilities would assist our goal of independence. Fleet Admiral, the intelligence officer calmly stated, and continued the report. It was about time for the most important part of the report. It was the current status of the Port of Dawn's defensive forces in the first level upgrade. They had grown considerably, have become a dominating force of the island. He wondered what their capabilities would be in the second level. The United Navy is growing pretty fast, Laplace remarked, attracting the attention of the Fleet Admiral. She sighed to herself as she remembered the time where they were small and simple. Nonetheless, there was nothing she could do about it. Growth was essential for the United Navy and its survival in this world. The moment they become stagnant, other factions might potentially eat them for their gains. This was something Laplace wished to avoid, no matter the cost. I have the same feeling, Laplace, even for me, the accelerated growth of the United Navy is somewhat difficult to adapt to. I remembered months ago where we were nothing more but a port on the side of the ocean, and in such a time period, we have become a great city in the middle of the vast expanse, Abraham commented while gazing through his windows, calmly observing the scenic view of the towering skylines. At any rate, please continue in your report. Don't mind our comments, Abraham told the intelligence officer, who simply nodded in understanding. I shall begin the status report of our defensive forces. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Battalions of the United Army have positioned themselves and are working together with the experienced 1st Battalion. Their numbers should be 6,000 in total, including the supplementary personnel. Our United Army fields over 1,000 Humvees, 500 LMTV military trucks, over 100 M2A4 Bradleys, a complete 100 of defensive arrays of multi-mission launchers, MML, a 200 M1A2 SEP-3 Abrahams, and 50 M109A6 Paladin. As expected, the ground forces of the Port of Dawn had grown beyond his expectations. The amount of armament and vehicles they wield couldn't be underestimated. The moment they were sent over into another island, they would probably conquer it in less than a day. Following these ground vehicles, the United Army's air support consists of 100 UH, 60 M Black Hawks, 50 MH, 6 M Little Birds, 3 dozens AH, 64 E Apaches, 2 dozen CH, 47 F Block 2 Chinooks, a dozen A, 10 Thunderbolt 2, and 6 AC. 130-inch. Not only was the ground forces of the United Army severely upgraded, its air support went to a complete overhaul and could be considered an army of its own with them around. One couldn't get aerial dominance over the skies where these vehicles dwelled. When combined together, our United Army should have the capabilities to rival even the first world nations of our former world, the intelligence proudly remarked. And he wasn't wrong about his words. The United Army was very strong, even under the standards of the modern world. From your expression, Abraham, I can only expect it to be incredibly satisfying to have such a high number of vehicles and weapons with them around. The casualties surrounding our soldiers would probably lessen, even against magicraft, Laplace calmly uttered while looking at the fleet admiral's office. The amazed Abraham immediately regained his calm and lightly coughed. Thank you for the reminder, Lieutenant Colonel Laplace. He didn't want to make a fool of himself in front of his subordinates, especially the intelligence officers. They were excellent in spreading rumors, and he didn't want to become their next interesting topic. No problem, Fleet Admiral. Anyhow, thank you for the status report. Please leave your files on his table and return to your stations. We will be handling them from now on, Laplace ordered the intelligence officers, who nodded in understanding. They placed their mountain of files onto his table, making him somewhat sweat from how big it was. Afterward, they saluted to the Fleet Admiral and left the confines of his office. Now that they are gone, shall we continue our business, Abraham? I'm sure their report must have interested you in some way, correct? Especially the growth of the United Army. They should be viable for inter-island conflicts with their current capabilities, Laplace muttered to the middle-aged man beside her. I'm beyond satisfied, Laplace. The edges of his lips rose as the two continued their discussion over the fate of the United Navy. Chapter 147. 147 UNS Orion Deep and UNS Ceaseless Skies. In the Fleet Admiral's office, the two authorities of the United Navy were swallowed in their conversation. They didn't seem to notice time passing by what felt like minutes to them. An hour had already passed, and it was Laplace who first noticed the odd circumstance. She turned her gaze towards the clock and noticed that it had been an hour since the intelligence officers left Abraham's office. Turning her attention back to Abraham, it appears he also hadn't noticed how quickly time had passed by. While she would like to continue their conversation and let time pass for themselves, she understood that this wasn't the moment to do so. Abraham had just upgraded the Port of Dawn. There were a lot of things that needed to be done. It seems an hour had passed. Abraham, quite fast for a simple conversation. I'll have to go now. Mercedes should be looking for me. You should also read their reports. I'm sure you'll need it, Laplace uttered, bringing the Fleet Admiral out of his conversation. Abraham swiftly looked at the clock and saw that an hour had really passed. Were they that absorbed in their conversation? It didn't feel like it was longer than 10 minutes to him at any rate. He glanced at Laplace and nodded in understanding. Apologies for taking a lot of your time, Laplace. He understood that, like him, Laplace also had her work piling up on her desk. She would probably return to her office and take care of the reports coming from the Special Response Unit. Laplace merely chuckled after hearing him and remarked, "There's no need to apologize, Abraham. Besides." She took a step closer and tucked his collar, pulling his lips to hers. It was one moment, but it felt a long time for the two. I enjoy spending my time with you. Afterward, she waved her hand and disappeared from the spot. Silence soon shrouded his office, while he sat frozen on his chair, thinking about the enjoying feeling in his lips. It took a while for him to regain himself, and he chuckled while muttering to himself, "She really knows how to tug my heartstrings as expected of a dragon." Before Abraham could continue thinking about what Laplace had done to him, The telephone in his drawers rang. He raised his eyebrows and opened his drawer before picking up the telephone. This is Abraham Shepard. How may I help you? Fleet Admiral, the commanding officers of UNS Orion Deep and UNS Ceaseless Skies, wishes to meet you, a communication operator reported, making him realize what the call was all about. Abraham glanced at the submarine and airship near the docks and replied to the operator, "Tell them to come to my office." He was also curious about who these commanding officers were, especially the captain of UNS Ceaseless Skies, the prototype advanced Hindenburg-class airship. This was his first airship, so he was curious about what its capabilities were. The airship looks far more dreadful than the ones I have seen in pictures from the past. It resembles more of a flying warship than a glorified hot air balloon. I wonder what technology it operates to be able to create such a striking image. Abraham felt as though he was staring at some spaceship of some sort. To be honest, he would have likely thought of it as a spaceship than an airship if not for its name. At any rate, let's check out their detailed information. I'm sure Systema has some intelligence about the... He mumbled and called out for Systema inside his mind. Systema, please give me the detailed description of UNS Orion Deep and UNS Ceaseless Skies. After such a thought, a mechanical bell rang inside his mind, followed by a monotone voice ding. Affirmative. Fleet Admiral, presenting detailed descriptions of spoken warships. Two long-winded digital screens materialized before his eyes. Each of them contained the detailed descriptions of the ships he had recently summoned from the system. UNS Ceaseless Skies. The UNS Ceaseless Skies is an advanced Hindenburg-class airship of the prototype designation. It is the most advanced airship in the world, utilizing unique designs carefully incorporating its large mass and its hydrogen gas cells. It is also made of adamantium, the lightest and strongest metal known to man. The advanced Hindenburg-class airship is part of the aerial dominance category. It has the ability to control an entire country's airspace on its own for months. Granted that this country doesn't have sixth-generation aircrafts under their command, the Ceaseless Skies has an unusually massive displacement for an aircraft, reaching a displacement capacity of 400,000 cubic meters of gas. It has a length of 330 meters with a diameter of 60 meters. It is powered by a nuclear reactor, reaching the speeds of 200 miles per hour. Its current crew complement is about 500 officers and enlisted personnel, mostly through its strange capabilities as an airship, utilizing mostly UAVs for all of its operations. It is mostly recognized as an aircraft carrier. The advanced airship carries 40 MQ, 9 Reaper, 20 RQ, 170 Sentinel, and 45 MQ, 28 Ghostbat. It is also surrounded with 8 20mm Phalanx CIWS in all of its sides, along with 5 RIM, 118 rolling airframe missile launchers. The UNS Ceaseless Skies is the United Navy's authority over the skies. After reading through the description of the airship, Abraham felt astounded beyond relief. The UNS Ceaseless Skies went beyond his expectations. It was actually a flying UAV carrier, practically bordering sci-fi on its own weight. Wouldn't this mean that I wouldn't have to worry enemy battleships suddenly teleporting beside this warship? After all, it is residing in the skies. There would be nothing they could do about it. Abraham could already imagine the implications the airship had in the battlefield. According to the description of the airship, it could practically deny an entire country's airspace for months without any problem. This might be a good card against the colonial dominion of Terra. With these UAVs around, Abraham wouldn't have to worry carrying out harassment operations. Not only that, this is the first adamantium ship I have gotten from the system. I'm fairly confident that adamantium didn't exist in the former world, but according to the system, this is of the prototype category, things that were imagined, but never built. The adamantium property of the airship might be connected to the United Navy, which makes sense in of itself. Abraham carefully thought about the material the airship was made of. He could also have the R&D department to research part of the ship, further increasing their knowledge of the new element. But before doing all of that, let's continue and read the detailed description of the UNS Orion Deep. From what I remember, it should be a nuclear attack submarine. Pretty interesting, Abraham muttered before turning his attention to the digital screen of the UNS Orion Deep. UNS Orion Deep. The UNS Orion Deep is a Virginia-class attack submarine of the Block V designation. It is amongst the newest class of nuclear submarines capable of a broad spectrum of open ocean or littoral missions, including anti-submarine warfare and intelligence gathering operations. With this in mind, the nuclear attack submarine is incredibly capable in the lines of anti-submarine warfare, ASW, and anti-surface warfare, ASUW. It is completely capable of moving on its own for months at a time, making it the perfect asset for long-term operations. The UNS Orion Deep has a displacement of 400 tons with a length of 140 meters and a beam reaching 10 meters high. It is also equipped with the S9G nuclear reactor, giving it a maximum speed of up to 35 knots. Its crew complement is about 120 enlisted personnel and 14 officers. It also has a payload of 40 Tomahawk missiles, along with the following armaments. It has 12 VLS and 4 torpedo capsules, capable of launching Mark 48 torpedoes, UGM, 109 tactical tomahawks, and harpoon missiles. It would also be equipped with Edition VPM module, which contains 4 large diameter tubes which can accommodate 7 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Each the UNS Orion Deep is the United Navy's deep sea hunter. It will never fail to hunt a prey it has its eyes on. Abraham calmly read through the detailed description of the UNS Orion Deep. Only one word seemed to dwell in his mind as he read through its description: impressive. The nuclear attack submarine wasn't to be underestimated. He could probably send it near the continent of Europa and have it harass military ports in its shores. This would probably buy time for the United Navy to prepare for a possible counter-invasion by the humanity of this world. Now that I think about it, the warships the system has given me is incredibly geared to harassment. With them around, I wouldn't have to worry about meeting unexpected ambushes and could probably deal some heavy blows towards our adversaries. He commented with a smile to the current situation of the United Navy, where it was preparing for the finale of the war in the sea region of Terra. These 2 warships might be able to turn the tides in their favor after all. Who in the hell would play fair in a battle between 2 factions? Even the colonial dominion of Terra never bothered to play fair, with its inquisitors appearing in the port of Dawn to hunt him down. Nonetheless, there is one thing clear: the United Navy will grow further and will not stop until it reaches the very top. It will be a difficult journey, but a worthwhile one. Abraham smiled as he gazed at the scenic view of the city beyond his windows. Chapter 148. 148. The newly summoned commanding officer's silence shrouded the lengthy hallway of the branch office building, covered with ornaments of all kinds. Walking through it were the 2 commanding officers belonging to the newly summoned warships. They had been sent to the Fleet Admiral's office to personally meet him. Captain Himmel, do you believe the words they have uttered to us? A white-bearded, middle-aged man questioned a young man beside him. It has been a while since they were summoned into the foreign world, and many of their questions had been answered by nearby intelligence officers. The young man, also known as Captain Himmel, glanced at the middle-aged man and coolly answered, "We have no choice but to believe them, Captain Teef. Besides, they have already explained it clearly to us. We have no choice but to trust them. Otherwise, are you suggesting to doubt the United Navy?" Captain Himmel raised an eyebrow, while the white-bearded, middle-aged man calmly shook his head. "I don't desire to doubt the United Navy, Captain Himmel. I just find our circumstance strange. If we think carefully about it, it isn't as strange as you imply." Captain Teef, a golden light enveloped us and sent us into a location unknown to our navigational systems. It's clear that we have been summoned into a foreign world by our fleet admiral. Nonetheless, Captain Himmel stated, "Apologies if I have offended you in some way." Captain Teef wondered if he had pissed the young captain in some way. Captain Himmel rejected his apologies and clarified, "You have not offended me in any way, Captain Teef. I merely wish to remind you that we are about to meet the highest of authority in the United Navy. These type of discussions isn't something we should be conversing in our situation." Captain Himmel understood that things were strange, but this wasn't the time to doubt the United Navy, especially when they were about to meet the fleet admiral. Doubting the authority of the United Navy might as well be treason, and Captain Himmel didn't want to be disloyal to the highest authority. "I see. Nonetheless, it is surprising to arrive in a world brimming with magic and fantastical creatures. It is evident that our fleet admiral is working hard to maintain our existence in this foreign world. It also seems that many of our comrades are adapting well." Captain Teef expressed his thoughts about the matter before him. It was hard to not feel left out, but it was understandable compared to others. They were practically latecomers. They needed the fleet admiral's orders to find their duties in the foreign world. On the other hand, Captain Himmel merely raised an eyebrow and didn't reply. The forces of the United Navy had grown ever larger, according to the intelligence officers, and they have become quite adapted to their circumstance. New allies have even joined them in their endeavors, generally known as the beast folks. Through the intelligence officers, Himmel understood that these creatures were bipedal anthropomorphic creatures with intelligence rivaling that of humans. With this in mind, he concluded that things were far from simple. Perhaps there was a socio-political climate he was unaware of that prompted these new species to ally with the United Navy, though. It doesn't much to him. The only thing he needed to do was follow orders. It didn't take long before the 2 arrived at the front double door of the Fleet Admiral's office. It was strange that there were no guards around. As the highest authority of the United Navy, he should be heavily protected by several teams of guards, though. Captain Himmel didn't take this peculiarity into mind and knocked the door. He didn't dare to open it without the Fleet Admiral's permission. Knock, knock, knock. Captain Teef stood idly beside him while his knocks resounded throughout the lengthy hallway. It didn't take a moment before a voice was heard from the other side. "Come in." Hearing such words, Himmel opened the door and the 2 entered the Fleet Admiral's office. They gazed onward and saw a luxurious chair pointing towards the window where the scenic view of a city resided. On it was the Fleet Admiral of the United Navy, Abraham Shepard. From the words of the intelligence officers, they have heard legends and epics about him during the first days of the United Navy. He led a small fleet to map the seas surrounding the home island and fought against a sea monster over 100 meters tall during that moment. He met with a dragon and tamed her with his unrivaled charisma. That dragon had become the feared sword of the United Navy. Only the fleet admiral could order her, and her breath could bring out a blast comparable to a nuclear explosion. There was also a time where he was almost assassinated by enemy magicians. He managed to kill most of them, and a so-called sovereign emerged. But he survived unscathed against the gods of humanity in just a few months. The Port of Dawn that started out as a small port compound turned into a city of its own. This signified the accelerated growth and the ability of the fleet admiral to guide its square root epsilon. The words of the intelligence officers couldn't be considered as lies after all. Captain Himmel was confident that they would have records about what they had spoken to him, so, all in all, he felt profound admiration towards the highest of authority in the United Navy. Before the young captain could continue thinking, a calm voice escaped the confines of the luxurious chair. It was nonchalant, yet demanded authority and respect to those that heard of it. You must be the commanding officers of the UNS Orion Deep and UNS Ceaseless Skies, correct? It was a mere question, but it felt like a command. They must answer it, or else who knows what could happen. We are the commanding officers of the spoken vessels. Fleet Admiral, Captain Himmel saluted, and Captain Teef followed suit. The atmosphere in the office was tense as the two captains felt as though they had been sent into a tiger's den. The chair of the Fleet Admiral slowly turned, revealing a handsome middle-aged man sitting on it. His hair was jet black, his eyes as black as the night before. His shoulders was broad, his skin pale. It was as if they were looking at a handsome young king. Oh, I see, quite impressive vessels you have there. I believe I have no need to introduce myself, or should I? It was a simple question, but the two of them didn't wish to entertain such a dangerous preposition. We will simply introduce ourselves. Fleet Admiral, we already know of your admirable stature, Captain Teef smoothly stated, which made the young captain somewhat surprised. It looks like the one beside him was also someone that he couldn't underestimate. If you say so. I guess I'm interested of your names, so tell me. The one before them spoke in such a nonchalant manner, yet authority seems to follow his words and voice. No matter how uncaring and easygoing he acted, things were always different on the outside. Affirmative. Sir. Captain Teef nodded and glanced at Captain Himmel to start their introduction. The young captain raised his eyebrows, but decided to go first as it wasn't respectful to push their introductions into one another. He didn't want to appear foolish before the Fleet Admiral. I am Captain Himmel of the UNS Ceaseless Skies. I am the commanding officer of the advanced Hindenburg-class airship, awaiting for command. Fleet Admiral Abraham Shepard, Himmel introduced while straightened his back. I am Captain Teef of the UNS Orion Deep, commanding officer of the Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine. Also awaiting for command. Fleet Admiral Abraham Shepard, Teef straightened his back and followed the introduction of the young captain. A spectacular introduction. I'm sure the two of you have questions about our current circumstances, and I'm confident that the intelligence officers have already answered those questions, so I'll get straight to the point. The Fleet Admiral smiled at them, though. The two didn't feel delighted at all with that smile. It felt like a guillotine was being pointed at their necks, threatening to chop it off. I will be giving you your orders, your first assignment after your summoning, quite early. Yes, but I'm confident of your capabilities to tread in unknown waters. Abraham looked at the two without breaking eye contact with them in his eyes. They were skilled captains after all. They were the commanding officers of such impressive warships. As such, they should be capable in their expertise, which meant that Abraham had no need to baby them. Which begs the question, are the two of you ready? The Fleet Admiral asked the two commanding officers a question that would change their lives. Would they immediately go on a mission after the summoning, or will they take their time and adapt like everyone else? Unlike the others, they didn't have the luxury of time. It was clear that there was a time limit for the United Navy before the beginning of the final operation against the colonial dominion of Terra, so only one option emerged in their mind. UNS Ceaseless Skies is ready, sir. UNS Orion Deep is ready to submerge. Fleet Admiral. The two commanding officers saluted and stated their decision. Abraham proudly smiled at the two. Since the mission they would be sent to participate wasn't a particularly hard one, they didn't need to participate in a battle or two. But they will be extremely close to the enemy, alright? Since the two of you have made your decisions, I'll start with your briefing. Chapter 149. 149 Testing New Features. Abraham stood up from his comfy chair and stretched his arms upward. It has been a while since the two new commanding officers left his office after receiving their orders. Following that, silence intruded once again, which was an unneeded solace. I should start exploring the current Port of Dawn after all. A lot of things should have changed with the upgrade, he quietly thought while taking off his uniform and coat, placing them into their wardrobe afterward. He took out his casual clothing and wore them for this occasion. Abraham neatly straightened his clothes and looked back at his lonesome chair. It held some of his authority as the Fleet Admiral of the United Navy, but for some reason, it seemed alone though. not wanting to be distracted. He threw the thought at the back of his mind, "Let's leave." He muttered to himself and opened the door of his office. Stepping into the lengthy hallway shrouded with expensive ornaments, he didn't expect for his office to have such a grand entrance. Perhaps this was why the two commanding officers appeared tense when meeting him. "Let's just hope that they won't look at me as though I am a mafia boss of some sort," Abraham thought. While walking through the hallway, he'd rather not be misunderstood as some godfather of some sort while somewhat cool. It would be troublesome. He arrived in front of the elevator's metallic doors. He turned his gaze towards the buttons beside it and pressed the arrow pointing downward, calmly waiting for a few seconds. The metallic doors slid open, revealing a couple of branch personnel working persistently to adapt to the change. On their arms were hundreds of files from the reports of various parts of the United Navy. The moment he gazed upon them, it was hard to not feel sorry. Fleet Admiral. All of them saluted and cried out. They were barely holding on to the papers on their arms. So Abraham nodded with a smile and got in the elevator with them. The metallic doors closed and music started playing on the background. Abraham stood straight as, despite not being in his uniform, he had a reputation to uphold. The branch personnel were behind him, probably staring at his back. He felt somewhat tense, as it was difficult to pretend to not care while someone gazes at you from behind. Nonetheless, he persevered through the elevator, reached ground floor, and the metallic doors slid open. He stepped out of its confines and looked back at the branch personnel with a smile. He then nodded at them and prompted his leave. The halls of the branch office building had become larger, although it wasn't as busy as before. It still brimmed with people and beastfolk of all kinds. He walked past them, uncaring of their glances, and soon got out of the branch office building. Fresh air permeated beside his nose, making him feel somewhat relaxed. Though the scene before him was far from calming. The road before the branch office building resembled that of roads from the modern world. There were even cars, pedestrian lanes, traffic lights, and many more from the looks of it. The Port of Dawn was becoming a more vivid picture of the former modern world, and to think he would see such a scene after transmigration. He was confident that he would get stuck with medieval houses and castles after discovering his situation. How wrong he was. At any rate, now that I'm outside, I should test the new features along the way, Abraham thought, remembering the features that came with the update. These two features were the random sea-based asset spin and the random personal power spin. I wonder if I have enough naval points for this too, he mumbled to himself, as he had already spent 4,000 naval points from the newly summoned warships and the Port of Dawn upgrade. The two were expensive, and it might be the same for the new features though. Before thinking about its prices, he should ask about the features through his precious partner. After all, she would probably love to explain these kinds of things to him. At least, he hoped so. Systema. What are the random sea-based asset spin and random personal power spin? I'd like to know more, Abraham asked through his mind, and moments later, a mechanical bell rang. Ding. The random sea-based asset spin gives the fleet admiral the ability to possibly gain sea-based naval assets such as ports, construction yards, artificial islands, and many more. This spin can give the United Navy the ability to grow beyond one island. On the other hand, the random personal power spin is something that got updated through the essential needs of the fleet admiral to grow stronger. From this spin, the fleet admiral might be able to gain a random personal power of some sort. It might be useless or not. There are no limits of how many personal power the fleet admiral can gain. Would you like to know more? The information presented by Systema was intriguing. The random sea-based asset spin practically gave him the ability to have more than one port. This would give the United Navy an excellent opportunity to grow. So this feature was something he was thankful for. Then there was the random personal power spin. It was practically a gacha for abilities of some sort. It gives him superpowers, which was overpowered in its own right if not for the fact that it was entirely randomized. Nonetheless, with the random personal power spin, Abraham might be able to fight toe-to-toe against these annoying bastards called the Magus. He wouldn't need to have Laplace guarding him 24/7, which would be unfortunate, in all honesty. But the random personal power is something I need. I can't keep relying to her forever. She needs time to rest, and I also want to protect her myself. Abraham became determined in his heart. Even though he wanted to get another port of some sort, he needed to have a solid ability that he could use to defend himself with. Otherwise, he might as well be the helpless damsel in fantasy fairy tales sang to children at night. With this in mind, Abraham closed his eyelids while walking through the sidewalk and asked his partner the most important question of all. Systema, what is the price? It was a simple question that would decide everything. A mechanical bell soon rang inside his mind, followed by a feminine monotone voice. The cost of a single random sea-based asset spin is 2,000 naval points, Fleet Admiral. Simultaneously, the cost of one random personal power spin is 10,000 naval points. Upon hearing the monotone explanation of Systema, Abraham didn't know what to feel. Should he be disappointed? Saddened? He stopped moving as he turned his head upward. A single tear fell from his eyes since he had realized that he was about to start grinding. Though it was difficult to not complain. Why was the random personal power spin much more expensive than the other features? The power he could gain from it might not actually be that useful, so why so expensive? He wanted to understand the reasons, but before he could question Systema, her monotone voice already resounded inside his head. The random personal power is something that cannot be taken or destroyed. It will be permanently embedded to the body and soul of the fleet admiral as such. Its cost for acquirement is high. The logic of the naval gacha system was pretty simple. Unlike the powerful and excellent assets or warships of the random spins, the personal power couldn't be destroyed by anyone or anything. Even if a sovereign appeared in front of him, they wouldn't be able to take it away from him. In even more simpler terms, the material was cheaper than the immaterial. Hearing the explanation of his precious partner, Abraham decided to stop his complaints about the excessive price of the random personal power spin. Fortunately, however, Systema's following words made it even more worth it. While the random personal power spin is completely randomized, the fleet admiral can be assured that the personal power he would receive from it would be far from powerless. The system provides the price it gives. With this, Abraham felt relieved and kept walking through the sidewalk with a peaceful state of mind. Instead of wasting his thoughts on something he couldn't attain, it was time to turn his attention to the ones that he could acquire. He turned his thoughts to the random sea-based assets spin. According to Systema, it could give him ports, construction yards, artificial islands, and many more. It was pretty interesting, especially about it giving him ports. Abraham needed more ports to facilitate and expand the logistics of the United Navy. After all, the operations of the sea region of Terra couldn't be handled by one single island. He understood that they have to expand to increase their efficiency as an organization. The price is 2,000 naval points, quite expensive, but manageable, he thought, while remembering the cost of the random sea-based assets spin. The price was something that he could handle. It wasn't as expensive as the random personal power spin, which was the wrong standards to compare his wealth on. Nonetheless, Abraham didn't feel the need to hesitate. Although 2,000 naval points would be lost for something unknown, that was always how the naval gacha system was played. He had to rely on his luck, whether he could get something useful or not. Though, please give me a port. It was hard to not beg before the RNG.